tackle, and I think he's definitely someone who's come out to try and make his mark this year.
Yeah, I think Marcus is definitely always going to be a player, if he's on the roster, to keep an eye out for. He's kind of a player that you want to avoid if you are playing, I feel, but he's just one of those players that just gets the job done, and he's very, like I said, very consistent. But we look at other players on the roster here. You've got David Kutesh. We have to mention David has got an ability for team building that's really unparalleled to a lot of other players, you know, so it'll be interesting to see what he's brought this weekend, because I think the innovative side of his team building is always exciting to view.
And Alex Soto as well. I know Rosemary throughout the year has been talking about the amazing skills of Alex Soto, bringing this, I think it was the Regulation A team consistently through. Even with Regulation B, he's like, I don't need a Paradox Pokemon, I'm good with my Trick Room team. And it was really great to see him be so consistently strong with that particular team. So I wonder if he is stepping back into the Trick Room shoes a little bit for this World Championships, or if he's going to bring something completely new to contend with.
Yeah, that Trick Room team that he did rely on was very, very strong. And then we've got great players to watch here, and I'm sure all of you at home know these players: Eric Rios, Alex Gomez, and Marco Silva as well.
Again, all three of these are international champions. Marco won Oceania International Championships, and Eric Rios has won the European International Championships in series previous. But Alex Gomez, the current reigning North American International Champion, that was the last competitive event that we had, was the North American International Championship. So coming off that amazing win here to Japan, he's got to be confident coming into this event.
Definitely, and again, another player that's having a really consistent season as well, and a bit of a veteran as well. You know, he's still quite young in comparison to likes of myself, but he's having a really good season this year, and it's nice to see Alex taking that North American International Championships recently, like you said, coming off the back of the last big tournament. Has got to feel good as a champion, you know, coming into this tournament. Sets you up perfectly, and I'd expect big things from Alex this weekend. No pressure, of course, but I do think him and Eric, and obviously Marco as well, all very accomplished players within their own rights. I think they're going to be tough players to kind of face off against this weekend in particular.
Certainly is. And of course our Latin American Oceania regions as well have some fantastic players to contend with here. Javier Valdez on your right hand side there, a key player from Latin America, someone who I think a lot of people have been rooting for to try and get that big victory. Again, players like Henry Rich have been so strong throughout this season, again getting consistent top place finishes, really carving a name out for themselves.
Yeah, Henry is a very strong player, and it's really great to see how he's done this season in particular. And yeah, it's going to be great to see. We've got the Latin America and Oceania players to kind of keep an eye out for as well. Yeah, and yeah, I mean, the players like Henry who have had those regional wins coming into these big events and good performances at internationals as well. You know, it's going to be hard to kind of come up against maybe the more accomplished regions because of just the sheer size of Europe and North America, but you can't underestimate the players from these other regions around the world.
You definitely can't, and I think it's really interesting, again, taking a look at these players from their local events, bringing it to that international stage as well, and it's fantastic to be able to showcase their amazing Pokemon talent. I think, again, some key names to keep an eye on for. We take a deeper dive. Gabriela Gatti, runner-up at this year's European International Championship. Paul Ruiz, previous world champion, wants to try and get that victory. And Megan Rattle, she has had a fantastic year, constantly getting these top place finishes. One to definitely watch going forward.
Yeah, I'm excited in particular to see how Megan does this weekend. An incredible player. And again, it comes back, he keeps saying this consistency that these players have, but you consistently see their names in top cuts, in day twos, and in those top 8s of tournaments. So there's all of the reason to kind of keep mentioning it. But you've got Gabriela Gatti as well that you saw, you know, at the European International Championships earlier this year. Had an incredible run. Just couldn't get over the finish line at that last point, but I'm sure he's going to be feeling confident coming into this year.
I remember he was running Excalibur.
Yes,
at
the
that
Excalibur.
event.
It was an incredible team as well. We can't forget about Paul Ruiz, you know, former world champion as well. Paul always does very well in these sort of tournaments. Kind of handle the pressure very well because he's been at the big stage so many times. So it'll be good to see the team choices that he's made, because he does have some really unique team building aspects, I think, when he does come into these big tournaments.
Yeah, and I believe Megan actually got into the top cup finishes at the last year's World Championships as well. Really consistent. Again, these players, what I think I'm noticing in what we're saying is a lot of these players either have won the World Championships previously or have come very close, getting into those elusive top cup places to say, I finished top 8 at Worlds or runner-up at Worlds. But it's really about getting that #1 spot, taking home that trophy, taking home that title.
Yeah, and it's not just the one-off kind of result either for these players. They have done it many times before. And I think that's what makes this tournament this weekend here in Yokohama so exciting because it is really the cream of the crop almost, where all of these players are coming together and battling it out to see who is the best, who will take the championship at the end of the weekend. And we're only in day one. We haven't even started the tournament yet, and we're looking at these, the big hitters already coming into day one. And it's going to be a grueling day for a lot of them. But whoever comes out on top is going to have a great chance going into the rest of the weekend.
Exactly, and Enosh as well, another player to keep an eye on. Again, someone who I think has been playing Pokemon for many, many years, and I think has really consistently come out this season. I've been able to see Enosh at some of the European events as well, and kind of having some lovely conversations with him about how the tournament's going and things like that. And his confidence, I think, has been a key thing this year that's really kind of defined how well he's competing.
Yeah, and I think another very unique team builder as well. She has a phenomenal skill for team building and just knowing what works. And when he's coming into these tournaments, like you say, he is a veteran to the game, very, very strong player, and it'll be good to see him representing his country this weekend and seeing how he gets on as well.
Well, we are in Yokohama, Japan, so let's take a closer look at some of our Japan players to keep an eye on. Some amazing names on here as well. Naoto Mizuguchi, the previous world champion as well, wanting to try and get a second world title.
Yeah, the last Japanese world champion coming into this weekend, and all to play for, really. Japan have had world championships in the past, but not of late, really. So I think coming back to their home country, these players, coming into it need to, and probably want to, keep the trophy here, like we've already mentioned. They want to retain it in Yokohama, in Japan this year. And these are some of the top players from around the region. They're going to be very hard to take down.
And I think in terms of the meta, we've talked a little bit about how Regulation D is uncharted at the minute. We don't really know what's going to happen. But Japan always, I think, bring the most creative team building to any world championships. They have a completely different meta going on. So I think if you want to look for some really interesting teams, keep your eye on these names you see on your screen.
Yeah, they have a very good grassroots level events circuit in Japan, so they're very well versed at kind of putting together teams and things like that between their local groups and stuff like that, and things that probably we wouldn't see on the western side of the community. So it'll be really good to see what techs they are bringing this weekend, of course.
And these three players, Yasuhara was the senior division world champion last year, so leveled up into masters. Technically, I suppose, a reigning champion, just in a different division, so definitely someone to keep your eye on. Hodaka coming second at Japan Nationals, and I think this is his first year competing at Worlds, I believe. So again, someone to really keep your eye on. And Kaito won Japan Nationals this year. So again, taking a look at that particular event coming forward into the World Championships, these are the Japanese players to keep an eye on.
Yeah, Kaito with that national championship win. I mean, it's a bit like we talked about with Alex Gomez, coming in off the back of that big North American international championship win. They've come in off the back of the Japanese championships, so it's a huge accomplishment. You've got to feel good coming in as the current reigning champion to the tournament. But again, it puts a little bit of pressure on you as well, because, people will be looking at you now to say, well, you had that really good result there. You've kind of got to forget about that now, come into this tournament and just focus on every match as it comes, rather than just thinking, yeah, I'm the world championship. I'm going to kind of run through this, because it's not going to be as easy as that. We've been through the entire list of players to keep an eye on this weekend, and there is some very talented players coming into this tournament this weekend.
Yeah, there certainly are. And I think that's a really interesting thing as well, taking a look at all these different players and their previous accomplishments. I think as well, coming in as a senior into the Masters division for the very first time, I think it's always a really unique experience, because, yeah, there's pressure on your shoulders, but also it's your first year. You're out there to try and, battle with the very best, as it is, on this world stage. And being able to say, hey, I won the World Championships last year, I know I can do it, I have that resolve, I have that determination, and then it's just adjusting it to that Masters playfield. I think definitely one to watch.
Yeah, I think it can be quite, if you think of it like as a senior coming up to the Masters, it can be quite daunting to say, oh, I'm making that step up. But a lot of the seniors that we've seen do this over the years are fearless. They come into this Masters division with such confidence, and I really love that about our seniors players that do kind of age up and they come into the Masters division and just sweep through and just really put their mark onto the Masters division like they have done in the seniors division in previous years.
Well, let's round out our notable players for you guys to keep an eye on at home. We have got our South Korea and Asia Pacific roster here. Again, lots of fantastic names to keep an eye on. And I think again, taking a closer look at what teams these Pokemon trainers might be bringing, we're going to see some really interesting choices from these regions.
Yeah, I think it will be a mix of different players from each region that we do see. You know, there will be specific Pokemon probably from North America that players are relying on, from Europe, from South Korea, Asia Pacific, of course, as well as Japan. So it's going to be a real mix from each region of what Pokemon kind of are, what these regions kind of think will be the ones to take them all the way.
Exactly, and again, you know, this is the World Championships. We have a high caliber of players from all of these different places around the world, and it's amazing to see not only are these places represented, but you have got so many players to keep an eye on here. So many players who have that potential to win the World Championships. Obviously, we have our Day 2 players waiting in the wings for tomorrow, but one of these players locked into the World Championships will become the champion, and I always love that storyline as we go through the weekend. When we're sitting on Championship Sunday looking at who our 2 finalists are going to be, one of them will be crowned the champion.
Yeah, and you know, for the Day 2 players, you think, oh great, I don't need to play Day 1, I can kind of relax a bit today, have a look at the competition, enjoy the event, soak in the World Championships and the atmosphere here. But you've got to be a little bit kind of in the back of your mind thinking that the players that come into this tournament and do well today, they might be, you know, they're going to be warmed up going into tomorrow, whereas you aren't. So I think it's, you know, a little bit not the best situation, but of course, skipping a whole day of really tough tournament is always a bonus, of course, as well.
And the competition's not just out on the battle floor, it's also here with the casters, because we've got some predictions going down about which Pokemon we think are going to take it all the way. Let's take a closer look at how things are shaping up. I mean, let's talk about ours first of all, and then we'll talk about our fellow commentators. Obviously, Gastrodon is the MVP in any tournament ever that it is able to feature. And it's a reigning world champion. That's why it's in my #1 spot. I'm a little disappointedly, you put it in your 4th spot. I'm not going to lie.
Oh, well, they're in no order for me in particular. So they're just, you know, Gastrodon would be #1, of course, Lou, because we are representing today.
That is so true. I mean, I've gone very mono water here. I think Batty Legion is a really underrated pick. I think particularly with its ability, with adaptability or swift swim, it can be so versatile, and I think it's going to catch a lot of trainers off guard.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a really, really strong Pokemon coming into this, obviously with the adaptability, with swift swim and its abilities as well. But Gastrodon matches up pretty well against it, to be fair. Other notable picks, obviously, if we look at Adam's choices, he's got the Genies there, the Tornadus, Thundurus, and the Landorus, and Heatran as well. Some really, really big hitters coming into this format that are new to Regulation Day. I think very consistent choices. Heatran popping up across 3 of the casters, you know, Aaron having the GU, the Landorus, Therian, the Iron Hands as well, and Flutterman, all very strong Pokemon. But Scott and Adam going for that Heatran, and I think very kind of strong Pokemon as well with that Steel and Fire type, Flash Fire ability, and you know tending to go for the Grass Terra type as well. A very, very hard Pokemon to deal with if played right.
I think Aaron has definitely gone for the very, you can tell he's a great player, right? You know, he actually has qualified for this World Championships as well. He's commentating instead. But these are very standard choices. You know, I don't want to say uninspired. They're definitely not. They're awesome. They've got Fluttermane, Iron Hands, Landorus. They're very, very standard picks. But I want to talk about Rosemary's, because Rosemary's is definitely the hoping for success with that Regidrago.
Definitely, and I love that pick, because I think, speaking to Rosemary, she did say, you know, I think if the right player can get the right team around it, I think she's completely right in saying that it can really have a huge impact this weekend. And I would love to see it. You know, if you're putting it next to something like Talonflame as well, it has that really strong speed control ability. It has ways to shut down opposing threats with Will-O-Wisp, but lots of options there to support. So Regidrago can be one of those Pokemon that can come out at the start of a match and really give you a huge advantage, or it can be that Pokemon that you keep in the back for that right time when there's no fairy Pokemon on the field and it can come out and just clean up pretty much.
And talk me through the Arcanine on your predictions as well, because the Hisuian Arcanine, I think, was a Pokemon that was really interesting when we first saw it come through, getting that rock typing and being able to use something like a rock slide, something that Arcanine would normally have wanted to dodge out of the way of, but it now has the utility to fire back a rock slide of its own. Why is it on your picks, Lee?
I love Hisuian Arcanine. I think it's a great Pokemon. It has a hard time against some of the more popular kind of offensive threats in the format with water and ground. It really doesn't like either of those, but it does have the ability to terrestrialize as well. So you can go into something like Terra Grass, which is really complementary for the Arcanine. But the ability to have some huge attacking moves, you know, like Head Smash it's got, and it does have the ability to intimidate still as well. I think a really nice Pokemon to kind of switch into fairy type attacks, it resists that and has offensive pressure as well. Probably more offensive pressure than regular Arcanine, so it gives you a lot more options, I think, coming into the format. I think might do well, depending if players decide to pick it this weekend. I would love to see it, but I don't know.
I mean, I'm pretty sure Aaron, with those very solid picks, might come out on top. But of course, we're going to hope for Gastrodon. And anyone who's ever watched Lee and I cast before knows that we say Gastrodon a lot. It's a pretty good Pokemon. And speaking of Gastrodon, we have a giveaway for you. If you've ever wanted to get the best Pokemon ever created, it's Gastrodon. And Eduardo Cunha won the World Championships last year with it. Gastrodon is actually a multiple world champion. Paul Ruiz was able to win with it as well, and you can get one of your very own.
Yeah, if you use the code on your screen now for the weekend, you can get yourself Eduardo Cunha's Gastrodon that he used in the 2022 World Championships. And it's an incredible Pokemon. Like you say, Lou, it has had a lot of success at previous World Championships, and the event itself will be running until the 14th of August, I believe, is when you can get this in your game. So on Scarlet and Violet, pick up your copy of Gastrodon. But we are, like you say, representing Gastrodon this weekend as well in our attire to come into this event. But many World Championships we've had with Gastrodon kind of taking titles before, and will it be the one Pokemon to do it again this year? I feel like it has a good shot doing it this year, you know. Urshifu, Rapid Strike coming in. Very popular Pokemon, and with that strong Storm Drain ability, it has a good chance to kind of just shut down that Pokemon.
And it is the #1 Pokemon that has been given away at these events. I believe this is the 5th Gastrodon that you could have possibly got your hands on. I think there's a lot of debate out there between, you know, which one do you prefer, EC or West Sea? Definitely EC, just so you're aware. We've got them joining us. There's a couple of Gastrodon friends. We're representing. You've got the blue, I've got the green. We're Team Gastrodon over here. Yes, the yellow, got some gold on as well for its lovely accessories. And I think that's the key thing about Gastrodon. The EC Gastrodon is the best. And that's why it's been 4 out of the 5 giveaway Gastrodons have been this beautiful green and blue creation that you see in front of you. It's amazing.
It's an incredible Pokemon. We talked about it a lot at the World Championships last year.
Yeah.
And it ended up winning with Eduardo. So
we were onto something.
We were right at the start. So hopefully we're right this year. We can see it take another title, and then you will have potentially a full team of 6 Gastrodons by the end of it.
That's the thing. That's the dream. Unfortunately, the rules don't permit you to have more than one of the same Pokemon, but we have 4 on the desk here. And actually, if you tuned into last year's World Championships, you remember right at the very end, Lee very kindly gifted me one of these beautiful Gastrodons you see in front of us, and we have carried them throughout this entire year to the next World Championships. And Lee, I think he might fall down if I pick him up right now. We don't want him running off into the crowd to try and compete. But one of these lovely Gastrodons is for you, so that you can take one on your journey next year.
Oh, thank you so much, Lou. I'm gonna take it everywhere I go with me now. It'll be like my little lucky charm.
Everywhere we go. You need a Gastrodon no matter where you are. So make sure you get that giveaway at home.
Yes, take advantage of it while it is running over the weekend. Make sure you go into your copy of Scarlet and Violet. Use the code that we put on the screen. It will be running for the entirety of the event this weekend, so you can get your own very own Gastrodon at home.
Yes, and if you want to talk about Gastrodon some more, you can always engage with us on our social media platforms as well. Of course, there are some other things in the World Championships you may want to talk about, the players you want to root for, the other Pokemon that you want to see happening, and any of the action you want to engage with. Use that hashtag #PlayPokemon and make sure you engage with all of our social medias you see at the bottom of the screen.
Yeah, definitely get involved at home and let us know which players you're rooting for, which Pokemon you think are going to do well this weekend, and what your thoughts are on Gastrodon.
Yeah, who do you think the best partner Pokemon are going to be for Gastrodon? I mean, that's a really good question at this point in time.
Yeah, and I would actually love to hear from our viewers at home who they think, which Pokemon they think will take the World Championships. I think that is going to be a big thing coming in, because we've touched on it a little bit. We've got access to new Pokemon now in Regulation D. We've got the Hisuian Pokemon, and we also have a lot of the other Pokemon from previous generations coming in, like we mentioned in some of our picks: Landorus, Thundurus, Heatran, all big players. Which one do you think at home is going to take the championship this weekend?
Yes, using that hashtag Pokemon Worlds as well to get really connected to this amazing event in Yokohama, Japan. I mean, there's so much that we've covered so far. We've looked at our players, we've looked at a couple of our Pokemon, and I believe our trainers are just getting set up and ready, so we'll be able to bring you round one very, very soon. I want to talk a little bit more about some of the new Pokemon that have come out into Regulation D, because we've talked about the Pokemon we've seen that top usage, about the ones that are locked in, Pokemon like Fluttermane, Iron Hand. We've seen those a little bit before. From the new Pokemon that have been unleashed upon us in Regulation D, which are the ones you think we're really going to see, or that are going to make the biggest impact, Lee?
I think Heatran is one that we've kind of outlined already. I think because it's done so well in previous formats where it has been available. It's such a strong Pokemon, very unique typing, that fire and steel typing with the flash fire ability that gives it an immunity to fire type attacks. So I don't really need to worry about those attacks at all. I think a very strong Pokemon, and it'll be interesting to see the choice of Terra type that players will go to with that Pokemon. I think Landorus Therian as well, another very strong pick coming into this tournament, because I think in previous formats where it has been available, it's always had that weakness to ice type, water type attacks. But with terrestrialization, you think this is what we've been waiting for if you are Landorus, you know, because I think you can automatically go for what a lot of players have been opting for, the popular water Terra type. You've mentioned how popular water as a terrestrialization type is, and I think Landorus really appreciates that. It takes away a lot of its weaknesses that would be out in front of it, and it has some big hitting attacks as well that can really cut through teams and kind of stop them in their tracks.
Yeah, terrestrialization has been a game changer in more ways than one, and I'm glad you mentioned the Heatran, because again, you know, having something like a Terra Grass on there, I think the nice thing is the synergy with the ability. With Flash Fire, again, you know, being hit with a fire type move, not going to happen. Yes, you're a grass type, you don't have to worry about it. And those kinds of new techs are things that I think the top trainers will have identified very early on and started to build around a little bit more.
Yeah, and another one that I would like to mention as well is Rillaboom. I think Rillaboom has been so formidable since its introduction in Sword and Shield, but we haven't really seen it this season so far, and it now is accessible to our players coming into Regulation D. Another very strong Pokemon that also has the added bonus of bringing a terrain with it, which we haven't seen too much of this season.
Yes, and it does not have its priority move Grassy Glide anymore that it used to be able to go for if grassy terrain was in effect. Doesn't have that anymore, hasn't brought it with us into Regulation D, but it does still have a lot of potential with things like Fake Out, obviously being able to hit really hard with something like a Wood Hammer in the terrain as well, giving it that boost, and throw on a Grass Terra type for good measure as well.
Yeah.
That's going to be devastating, particularly into a little Pokemon like Gastrodon.
Its coverage as well is very strong, you know, it gets access to things like knockoff, so it's got dog coverage, and being able to remove opponents' items is huge in this format, because there's a lot of reliance on Pokemon with their item choices. It's a really big aspect of team building. If you can remove those items, it could be a little bit detrimental to your team. It gives you a nice way around some potential threats, so really good Pokemon choice as well. And of course, Urshifu. I picked in my choices the Single Strike over the Rapid Strike. Now I know the Rapid Strike has been very popular, and I do think it's a very strong Pokemon, don't get me wrong, but I just feel like the Single Strike has a lot of potential that hasn't really been tapped into yet. If players are opting for maybe very good solid speed control with it, and you give it a Choice Band, Dog Terra type, it is going to be doing a lot of damage with that Wicked Blow. There's not very many things that are a safe switch into that in this format.
That's true, particularly if you've got like a Chi and Pow next to you on the field as well, lowering the defenses with that sort of Ruin ability. That's going to be an unstoppable Urshifu, and I think as well that double dark type that can come out, the Sucker Punch potential. I think it's one of those things that will catch players off guard and could be a little bit of a risky strategy. Of course, you can always terrestrialize or go for something that obviously is a status move that is not going to be hit by Sucker Punch. So there's a little bit of flexibility around it, but I still think that can be a very commanding turn one if you come out with those two heavy physical attackers. Don't get intimidated. I mean, it doesn't matter with Wicked Blow anyway, because you critical hit anyway, and you can just deal some destructive damage.
Yeah, it's a very scary prospect. I think you've just got to get around things like Fluttermane with, you know, Amoonguss support or redirection support, because I think Fluttermane does still pose a huge threat to these Pokemon in particular, especially with that redirection, because of its ability to outspeed most things in the format. It is going to be able to do some big damaging attacks, and you know, we've seen previously Fluttermane players kind of rely on it with the item choice of Choice Specs to doing even more damage. So things like Urshifu, I'm really going to want to sit in front of it if it is throwing out Dazzling Gleam. So I think you've got to get around that issue first, and with how popular it is from the usage stats, I think that's something that a lot of players will have to have very solid answers for coming into this tournament.
Well, Dazzling Gleams and a dazzling arena as well that we've got here. To give you guys a little bit of a taste at home, let's take a look at how this fantastically beautiful event hall is looking. There is the iconic Pikachu soaring above us all, keeping an eye on everything, and all of our players, spectators, and participants are all here just enjoying and soaking up this atmosphere. I mean, after that opening ceremony, I have no idea how you're able to relax at this point. It was so intense, so invigorating. I think everyone's excited at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it does really get you fired up for the tournament, and the aesthetics of the arena here are just
Gorgeous.
incredible, and it really does just meet the expectations of what a World Championship should look like, and very exciting. Obviously, we're all getting ready with our players. They're getting set up to go into their first rounds here, but the big Pikachu, the iconic big Pikachu of the World Championships is here and representing, so yeah, it looks amazing, Lou.
Yeah, and other than just hearing, obviously, Lee and myself talk about Gastrodon, a few other things happening this weekend, hopefully you can catch a little bit of the atmosphere that we hear around us right now as well. We've got, you know, Pokemon trading card game, Pokemon Go, Pokemon Unite, all happening this weekend as well, and there's a lot of cheering and energy buzzing around this hall as well.
Yeah, and that I think that's what just adds to the electric atmosphere that we've got at this event. You know, the players are obviously what it's all about this weekend, but it's the spectators as well that are sitting watching, and obviously everyone at home as well, that just adds to that and really celebrates these players, which makes it incredible to be a part of.
And one thing I always like to talk about is the junior and senior competition as well. We don't get to feature them until Championship Sunday, where you meet your finalists for both of those divisions as well. But they'll be battling out in day one to try and get into that day two spot. And it's, I think, one of the most wholesome parts of Pokemon is when you see those younger generations not only enjoying a game that they love with characters that they love, but also seeing that competitive aspect as well and being able to turn it into something a little bit more. And who knows what champions will be born.
Yeah, and we've already touched upon it a little bit with players leveling up as well. When you're looking at these divisions, this is the start of their journey, and that's, I think, what the most magical thing about it is, their beginnings and where they're going to end up. Are they going to continue and level up and kind of, you know, if they do well in the juniors division, seniors division, are they going to take it all the way to do well in the masters division in a few years' time when they do get to that age bracket?
And I think we've seen that. You mentioned it earlier about, you know, players leveling up into Masters Division and having great records in Senior. And we've seen it time and time again. And I think it's lovely as well when you can really track a player's journey maybe back from juniors. Players like Nicholas Khan, you know, we've been able to see him win championships upon championships and then coming through into Seniors and then coming up through into Masters. I think it's just amazing to be able to see those journeys that players have gone on, the kind of evolution of their own, as it were, coming through to that Masters Division.
Yeah, and I mean, players like Brendan Zhang as well, you know, you've seen him, you know, come up from, I mean, when I was playing, you know, seeing him become a world champion and then level up, and then one of our featured players here to watch this weekend in the Masters Division, a very strong player, obviously. We all know his brother, but he's going to be out there this weekend playing, and it's really nice to kind of see his journey from kind of start to, it's not finished yet, is it? So we'll see what happens this weekend, of course.
Well, it's all about to begin here at the Pokemon World Championships. It's that community aspect as well that's lovely. These players just waiting to get ready for that round one to kick off. But it's not just them, it's their team building friends as well. A lot of these players in day two have friends and team building partners competing in day one. So they're going to be there ready, rooting for them, giving them that support and the encouragement that's needed, making sure they're staying hydrated throughout the event. Something that's always important to say is very, very hot here in Yokohama, Japan. So it's making sure that you're staying hydrated and giving yourself all that energy you need.
Yeah, taking care of yourself, a little bit of self-care didn't hurt anyone, and I think that's a big thing going into this weekend. But like you mentioned, with the kind of core team building groups that will be supporting their fellow team members this weekend, coming into day one, of course, and then they might all be coming together for day two as well. So it's going to be exciting to see which kind of core team building groups do well as the individuals along the way.
Exactly, and you know, the players, they're just starting to get themselves ready, getting themselves warmed up, but we have got a video for you. So we're going to take a really quick break while we get set up for one. Don't go anywhere, we'll be right back.
Traders, we were back in Columbus, Ohio for the 2023 North America International Championships. Let's take a peek at how it played out. This was the last event before the World Championships, and everything was on the line. Worlds invites, Day 2 Worlds invites, and of course the glory of that International Championships titles, and trainers were ready for the challenge. Championship Sunday delivered, with fantastic finals in all divisions. In the junior finals, we had a heated matchup with Eruption Torkoal and Brick Rimmer Rangaroo, piloted by Avery V, who took down Takumi M. In the senior finals, Owen M won the championship title over Justin M. In Masters, one player who brought the rain was Raghav Malavia. He stormed through the top 8 bracket with some strong 2-0 victories and was poised to take Palathin to the top. On the other end of the bracket, we had Alex Gomez. Dondozo's friendship with Tatsugiri was over, and Alex was instead running Dondozo with a new dragon friend, Dragapult. With NA taking the last 2 international championship titles, this was the time to end the streak. The friendship buff with Dragapult was strong, putting in the work in Game 1 with its Ghost Terastallization and powerful Terra Blast. In the second game, a strong Phantom Force set the pace, and despite best efforts, Iron Hands and Arcanine couldn't step up. Alex Gomez took the victory 2-0 to finish off a flawless top 8 run and claimed the title and trophy for Spain. The World Championships are just around the corner, and a new season of Pokemon begins. Make sure you're ready and check out Pokemon.com/compete.
Welcome back, Pokemon trainers. We're still here, ready and waiting for round 1. It's myself, Lou, joined by Lee and 4 adorable Gastrodon on the caster desk here for the video game.
Yeah, and we are just getting ready, just getting our players set up to get into round 1 here, and we'll be right in with all of the action very, very soon to kick off the World Championships, and we have got a cracking match for us to kick off with today, Lou.
Yes, we certainly have. We'll be able to talk about them very, very shortly. But I think round 1 for me, Lee, sets the tone.
Oh, yeah.
It definitely sets the tone for how the event is going to go, how players are going to be adapting and really trying to, stake their claim straight away out of the blocks for this World Championship.
Yeah, get those nerves out of the way, because I think regardless of what you've accomplished in the past, who you are, what you've done, I think there's always going to be that little niggle about some nerves coming into the first game. And once you kind of got through the first little bit of the match, you wash them away and you're ready, like you said, to put your stamp on this tournament and kind of progress into the tournament and really show the world what you can do.
And I always like to see, how the team building has gone. We've talked a little bit about some of the really standard choices that we might see. There's always the iconic Fire, Water, Grass core.
Yeah.
And I think with Terastallization, that core's been kind of broken wide open because you don't need to actually be, a water-type Pokemon because you can turn into one, or a Grass-type Pokemon. So you have so much flexibility about how you as the trainer want to define that Fire, Water, Grass core. And it's so integral. It's been on so many, award-winning teams. And making sure that you have that core that gives you that flexibility to pivot Pokemon in, catch those big attacks with something that's going to resist it rather than take super effective damage, I think is really critical.
I think that's the beauty about Terastallization as a mechanic in general. I think the ability to kind of pick maybe your strongest Pokemon, or the Pokemon that you feel can do the job for you, but kind of ignore a little bit of an aspect of the kind of the type synergies that you need within your team, because you can adapt that within your team building. You can turn Fluttermane into a water type, and then you've got your water coverage there. And you can even go as far as to say, well, if I need a water type move, I can always maybe make room for Terra Blast, which can be utilized as well on top of that to give you the coverage that you need for that core on an offensive and a defensive kind of level.
Well, we said round 1 sets the tone, and we have got an epic match for you. It is a showdown against 2 previous world champions, Arashi Marty versus Naoto Mizuguchi.
Incredible way for us to kick off, because we've got the 2013 world champion, Arashi Marty, going up against Naoto, who is the 2019 world champion. 2 world champions, like we say, going up against each other for our first match today. But we've got some great matches going into the round 1, key matches to keep an eye out for as well.
Yeah, some brilliant players to focus on here. That top screen match, though, I am so excited. As soon as we saw it on the pairings, we need to see these 2 world champions. Like we said earlier, Arash won this tournament 10 years ago, a decade in the making for him to try and get that number 2 world champion title. Naoto as well, winning in 2019, was knocked off that spot by Eduardo Cunha last year, so wants to get that redemption and come back and win that title for the second time.
Yeah, especially because it's in his home country as well. He's not had the travel like a lot of the other players, but there is the real importance for him to kind of take this title back if he can, and obviously showing before what a very accomplished player he is, to come in and take it for his region.
Exactly, and again, players like Ashton Cox, really innovative team builders, someone to keep your eye on as well. I really want to know what Ashton is running. Maybe we'll be able to feature him a little bit later on as well and see what interesting Pokemon developments he's got. Because I think coming into a new format that's incredibly fresh, without having that meta development, the Pokemon trainers who were able to really see a niche in a Pokemon might be able to excel, particularly in day one, and catch players off guard.
Yeah, in particular going up against Ryosuke in this round one, a really tough opponent, but a great match as well to kind of keep an eye on and see the result of that one. But you know, I think looking at the players here, you've got Colin from the North American region and going up against Niels from the European region. There's an array of players already kind of battling it out for their own region respectively going into this round one. That's only going to continue as we get deeper into the tournament this weekend.
Exactly, and something we haven't talked about yet is the fact that this is the first World Championships for video game with open team sheets.
Yes.
And that's been a whole new phenomenon that players have had to adapt with since January in this season, you know, for the first time ever. It's normally been that closed thing where you've got your teams and you want to keep them secret and you want to not reveal too much information, but it's all out there for your opponents to have. You're able to see the moves, the abilities, the items, and I think that's a really interesting type of way to approach the game.
Yeah, I think, you know, the one thing when you had closed team sheets was that always that first game put a little bit extra pressure on you as a player because you had that information gathering process. You kind of had to find out what your opponent was using, what the items were if you could, and try and play a bit more conservatively. But like you say, now with open team sheets, you've got access to all of this information and you can kind of go in a little bit easier into the match and figure out your game plans and think about what combinations of Pokemon are going to better suit going up against your opponent. So it makes it a lot easier, but again, your opponent's got the same access to all of that information as well, so it does make it a little bit more difficult to kind of approach, you know, when you haven't got those surprise factors that you maybe once had to rely on. That's why I think we see a lot more consistently built teams, solid Pokemon choices, rather than those kind of outlandish picks that could be real surprises and catch your opponent off. You don't get that in this format anymore with open team sheets.
And the Terra types, I think, a really important thing to notice on a team sheet as well, particularly with Pokemon like Chi and Pao, is that they're often running that Ghost Terra type, so that they can avoid the fake out that will break the inevitable focus sash that it will be running. And I think that's a really nice thing that you get to see, you know, is it going to go for that Ghost Terra type or not? You're going to risk the fake out. And then at the same time, if you're that player with that Ghost Terra type on Chi and Pao, do you want to really use your Terra on that Pokemon? Is there another Pokemon that would benefit more from it? And it's about really calculating when and when not to use your terrestrialization. We've seen it previously with things like the Z moves, with Dynamax in the previous year's format as well, and it's exactly the same concept. When is the right time to go for that terrestrialization and the right Pokemon?
Exactly, and I think you can't really go too early with your terrestrialization because I think a lot of the time you want to try and preserve it to as late into the game as possible to kind of really have the impact that it would have. I mean, like you say, there are situations where maybe to catch out a fake out, where if you've got a ghost terrestrialization, you can go for it, but then that's where the mind games come into it. And I think in a lot of situations, players that are coming up against that take the safer option and probably don't go for the fake out. And now you as a player, knowing that they're probably not going to go for that, you can take advantage of that and just go straight out and think, I don't even need to go for a safer play here. I can go out on the offensive and kind of take an early advantage there. But like I say, it's the mind games, and which player can kind of overcome those mind games and take advantage of those situations is the one that's going to progress on more likely in the match.
And particularly in a best of 3 format, because it's not only one game you've got to contend with, you've got to win a best of 3 set. So sometimes the way that you play out maybe one game will then completely adapt into game 2. Your opponent will be able to adjust, because something we talked about in previous events as well is that it's not just the Pokemon you play against, it's the player. So it's making sure that as well you're really thinking, does this player like hyper offense? Are they a risk taker? And really analyzing not only how the Pokemon are playing, but how your opponent is actually navigating them. And that can be a really key thing in order to get the victory, because you might look at Pokemon and be like, well, it's a very standard way to play it. Then if they're playing it in a slightly different way, maybe taking a few more risks, maybe, you know, making those calls or predictions really well, rotating Pokemon in and out, then that's something you have to adapt to as well and try and predict. And matches have been won or lost on predictions or over predictions.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point you make, and it's not something that we generally talk too much on the desk about, but the intuition of players in the heat of a match is what really sets a lot of the kind of the top caliber players apart from the rest of the field. And having the ability to kind of think on the fly and react and keep everything in mind that has transpired in the match so far, and then implement that as you're going forward within the match to get the advantage and maybe kind of overcome some of the problems that you almost face on just looking at a team sheet that you might not otherwise face.
Yes, exactly. It's really about your play style as well, and that's why we sometimes see teams floating around that are really popular, but not everyone can play them very successfully because it may not suit the way that you play the game or that intuition like you spoke of. It's not something I think you can necessarily teach a lot of the time. It's an instinct that you have. And sometimes picking up a team that, yes, someone else is able to pilot really, really well doesn't necessarily mean that you'd be able to do the same kind of thing. So it's really about trying different teams, seeing what works for you, picking Gastrodon because Gastrodon works for everybody. It's a universal Pokemon. And I think it's really important to make sure that, particularly coming into this tournament, when you have that debate of are you going for what you think is the meta pick or the comfort pick, sometimes the comfort pick, for me personally, is the one that should be chosen.
I think a lot as well this season, a lot of results from some of the players that we've featured already today and the ones to watch have showed that the comfort picks are more or less the Pokemon to always go with. You know, things that you're comfortable with. Pokemon that you know how they operate on a field, how they interact within a battle in certain situations, and how they can support your partnering Pokemon in a way to allow you to kind of start momentum building, because that's what you want to do in a match. You want to momentum build, you want to get your board positions out, and you really want to overwhelm your opponent. And having the Pokemon that you've got that like comfortability with, you're comfortable with.
No, it's a new word, comfortability. It's a thing.
There we go.
Check it in the dictionary, or don't. Either way, it's a word. Gastrodon proved. Okay, comfortability with a Gastrodon.
But yeah, like you're comfortable with, I think that it relaxes you as a player, I think, in those situations, and you're not kind of panicking about what to do. You know how this Pokemon interacts, you know what it can do, you just need to get it in the right position, and especially if you've got the right switches as well around you with the synergy that you've got nicely, I think it just makes you as a player just that step better than you would have been without that kind of familiarity. I can't even say it.
I can't say it now either.
You know what I mean.
Yeah, with things that are similar or familiar.
Yes,
familiar. There we go. I mean, that's where you see players use cores very consistently. For example, Alex Soto with that hard Trick Room team. And, just sticking with that Trick Room mode, yes, when you come up against a hard Trick Room team, you will most likely have prepped against it. You will have a strategy because it is a very viable option out there on the grounds. But I think sticking with something that you really know inherently, you know exactly how to change things up, how to maybe have different leads and flexibility against different things, showed why Alex Soto was so successful with that hard Trick Room team. I believe he then did drop it. I wonder if he's picked it back up again for the World Championships. But again, we see players, Wolf, for example, often running Perish Trap kind of team.
Yeah.
Using that Perish song and using a Pokemon with Shadow Tag to trap the opponent Pokemon in so that they are stuck listening to that Perish song. That means they will faint after 3 turns. I think is a really interesting team core. It's very difficult to pilot. Again, it's something he's had to have experience and practice with. But again, something that a lot of our players who love using Perish Trap are able to use.
Yeah, I think Perish is a really interesting mechanic to use in this format in particular. It is difficult to kind of execute because you've got a lot of Ghost type Pokemon that aren't, affected by the trap that you would normally be able to set up.
And you could Terra Ghost as well.
Yeah, and I think that makes it a little bit more difficult for our players, but I think the open team sheets makes it a little bit easier with full Perish Trap players because they're able to see the Pokemon that could be more problematic for that particular strategy and then go to maybe plan B where you've got the Perish Trap back in reserve for when you've got rid of the big threats, and you can adapt your play style very kind of. There's a lot of transitions with Perish Trap teams, at least the successful ones that we've seen this season. I love that you've mentioned that because it would be a really good. I think there's a particular call that we have seen played a little bit in the format so far, featuring Glamora as well, a Pokemon that we've seen earlier on in the season that we could maybe see come into this format this weekend and do well. Dondozo, another Pokemon as well in that particular build that we could see kind of have a bit of a splash this weekend.
And I'm glad you mentioned splashes because I was about to talk about rain teams. And I think weather's been, a key thing that we've seen time and time again, but weather's certainly not something that's been as dominant of late. We're seeing a few rain teams, possibly with, Pelipper coming into the fray and being able to boost up Pokemon like Basculegion with that Swift Swim ability, boosting up its speed, but it's really been more about sun, I think, so far in this season, having that Torkoal with a Pokemon that's able to, benefit with the Chlorophyll ability. I think it's been really, really interesting to see.
It's weird, right? Because throughout the season we've seen success from Pelipper, with Gavin Michaels having great success with it throughout the season, and other players as well, Palafin. And then we've also just recently seen Joseph Ugarte pilot the Torkoal and the Sun side of things. So both of the respected weathers have really had big impacts throughout this season, and I'm pleased you mentioned rain in particular because I think Pelipper would have been one of the Pokemon that I would have picked on my caster predictions in particular. If I had another slot available, I do think it can have a really good impact this weekend because of the ability to just bring the rain to the field and then set up things like Basculegion as well, which is such a behemoth once it gets in that environment that it loves with the swift swim ability, and it's just going to outspeed everything. It can hit so hard, you know, with the access to the moves that it's got, and the really unique typing of Ghost and Water as well, which we haven't
it's
seen
really
too much.
nice.
I think just an incredible Pokemon. So a very big threat coming into this weekend, of course, but I think the one thing that you can look at as well on the other side of it for the Sun teams, you now have the Landorus, sorry, not the Landorus, you have the Genie Pokemon with Pranks, that you have Tornadus and Thundurus that do get access to Sunny Day. Their players have been relying on to kind of, you know, not only activate the photosynthesis ability on those Paradox Pokemon, but also disrupt opposing, you know, strategies from opponents.
I wouldn't be surprised if that's why Tornadus is so high up on the usage stats at the moment, because it has that flexibility. You know, not only things like Tailwind, but you've got things like the Sunny Day, Rain Dance as well. It has a lot of flexibility.
Yeah.
And I'm glad you mentioned as well the Sunny Day, or sorry, the Sun in general for photosynthesis, for those Paradox Pokemon that are going to be able to benefit from it, because being able to get the special attack boost or a speed boost from that ability activation, I think can really swing momentum in a match, particularly on Pokemon like Fluttermane. We often see it running that booster energy in order to activate its photosynthesis when it comes into the battle. But if you've got a Pokemon that can set it up for free with the Sun, then that frees up Fluttermane to go for a different item, something like a Choice Specs maybe. We've seen a couple of times to deal out even more devastation.
Yeah, the prospect of that is very scary to think of. And, you know, the other thing as well is you have to look at these really kind of obscure odd picks of chlorophyll users as well that have success a lot in these Sun teams. You know, we had Joseph using the Jumpluff to great success. Not a very common pick, but really effective in his team building for that situation. You've got Hisuian Lilligant now that has a brand new, we've not really seen much of it at all.
It's
but
so
it does
speedy though.
Gets that chlorophyll ability as well, and it's a very hard hitter, obviously, with that fighting type that it's newly acquired. So there are some Pokemon on the kind of the fringes of the format that you could see maybe coming in this weekend with the right support, like you say, with that Sunny Day, or, you know, in other cases like the Basculegion with the Rain Dance support.
And going back to Trick Room teams, I think the new face of Ursaluna has been so dominant in Trick Room, having fantastic synergy with the fact that it's got guts, and you know, in more ways than one, it's got guts in terms of its ability, so it's going to be able to get an attack boost if it is hit with a status affliction. So if you're holding something like the Flame Orb, you give yourself that burn, and then you go for something like Facade that deals more damage if you have a status affliction. It's absolutely crazy how much damage it can deal with that, particularly if you throw a Terra Normal on there as well for good measure.
I think the thing with Ursaluna as well is, like, it's with the Cresselia, which is normally its common kind of partner in Pokemon, it's just finding that consistent level that core needs. I mean, we've seen the very first caster battle with Adam and Joel. Joel piloting an Ursaluna team in that, and it's such a strong Pokemon if it's in the right situation. So it's not something to underestimate. But with that guts ability as well, obviously holding the Flame Orb, in most situations it does get that self-burn. So it gives you complete immunity to other status conditions. So it kind of frees you up in a Trick Room situation where you don't need to worry about Amoonguss so much, because in a lot of situations you set the Trick Room up and, oh yeah, Amoonguss just comes onto the field and ruins your day because it just spores you, or there's a number of other things that it can do. But with Ursaluna in that situation where it can come in and get burned and not have to worry about the sleep so much, and has access to things like Earthquake that are going to be powered up through the guts ability, makes it very, very hard to kind of keep in control.
It definitely does. I don't know if Joe meant to start a trend with that Ursaluna and the Weird Deer. You can't forget the Weird Deer on that team.
Yes.
You know, definitely the first moment or glimpse that we got of Regulation D was that fantastic team. So Ursaluna may have started and may end Regulation D at the World Championships as the winner. Who knows?
I think it's a strong enough Pokemon for sure to take the World Championships. I really do. I think it's got the defensive capabilities. It's got definitely the offensive capabilities to really cut through a lot of teams. It's just getting the balance right with the Pokemon that you pick around it. And I think the Terra type is quite key on it. You know, you see a lot of players, like you've mentioned, relying on that normal terrestrialization. Can give you an increased power boost, but you do have other options outside of that where it can be a bit more defensive choice. I think the Terra Ghost in particular is going to be something really kind of key for Ursaluna, maybe to perform to that next level in a field full of Pokemon that do threaten it. You know, like we've got a lot of fighting threats in this
Iron
format.
Hands as well can hit hard. And all the Urshifus with close combat can hit hard. So
yeah, they're all Pokemon that really give Ursaluna a hard time, even in a Trick Room situation, particularly Iron Hands. So giving yourself the immunity to that, I think, can be maybe the advantage that players can look at, and I'm sure players have probably looked at that in the road coming to the World Championships this weekend.
Well, the anticipation has been building and our players are seated at the stage. So let's head over there and we can start kicking off round one. Don't forget, this is a showdown between two previous world champions, Arash and Naoto.
Yeah, and incredibly exciting to go in with two former World Championships to kick off the 2023 World Championships here in Yokohama. Incredible. Both players are going to be kind of going up against it, wanting to prove a point, I think, because they are, you know, which one comes out on top? Who's the better World Champion, Lou?
That's going to be the question, and I'm really interested to see if Arash is going to be able to try and get it a decade later. I just love the storyline that we're trying to maybe potentially manifest in here. You can see Arash on your screen right now looking calm, cool, and collected and focused, ready for this match. We can talk you through the teams a little bit as well. Let's start with Arash, as he's currently on our screen, running a very, very interesting team with Fluttermane, Amoonguss, Urshifu, Rapid Strike, the Iron Hands, Chien-Pao, and Landorus Therian form.
Yeah, very strong core. A lot of familiar faces on this team. You've got the Fluttermane there, obviously with the Choice Specs item as well. Kind of just taking that from previous formats and bringing it right back into Regulation D because of how powerful it is. Interestingly enough, going for two fighting type Pokemon, and we see with the Urshifu, the Rapid Strike Pokemon, and also the Iron Hands as well, the more supportive role that plays and can perform a bit well in different tricky speed control situations for you. Chien-Pao as well, another Pokemon that is going to have that sort of rune ability to boost all of the power on these big physical type attackers on the Arash's side of the field, including that Landorus Therian form as well, with a very interesting Terra type with the flying there, taking advantage of that aspect of its game.
Yeah, a couple of Pokemon here are really interesting in Arash's team building. I want to talk first of all about the Urshifu. Urshifu, one of the Pokemon that I've really kind of picked coming into this tournament. One of the things it's got now that it didn't have access to before is Swords Dance. It already hits really hard, something like Surging Strike's getting those guaranteed 3 critical hits, but having a Swords Dance on there as well gives it that extra attack boost as well. It can really deal out a formidable amount of pressure. So it's going to be interesting to see if that's going to come into play in this match.
Especially when it's supported with the Amoonguss as well, to potentially give it the room, or even the Iron Hands with that fake out there where it is going to be able to have the room to potentially get that Swords Dance up, and then with that terrestrialization and the water type that it's got there, increasing its damage even more, really becomes a big scary threat very quickly. But we can look at Naoto's team as well on the other side of the field going up against Arash, and he will be running Iron Hands, Fluttermane, Urshifu, the Rapid Strike version, Landorus Therian form, Amoonguss, and Chi-Yu.
Yeah, a few familiar faces across the teams here in a potential mirror, but I think the really interesting thing again is that addition of the Chi-Yu. You've got the Chien-Pao on Arash's side that you will use a sort of ruin ability to drop the defenses of the Pokemon on the field, whereas on Naoto's side, Chi-Yu using the Beads of Ruin is going to drop the special defense, and you've got some key Pokemon like the Fluttermane that is going to really want to take advantage of that. The Fluttermane as well rocking those Choice Specs, as if the drop on the special defense with the help of Chi-Yu wasn't enough. Fluttermane really wants to pack a punch with something like a powerful Moonblast, Thunderbolt, or Shadow Ball here. Lots of nice type coverage there as well.
Yeah, now I think interesting, the big thing going into this match, which Fluttermane is going to be faster on which side of the field. You know, I think that gives one of the players a really big kind of advantage if one adds speed to the other, because then you've got the ability to throw out a lot of damage very early on, and especially with, you know, if the Chi-Yu's on the field as well, like you've mentioned, it lowering those special defensive stats. You know, even if you are a Rush, you're kind of probably not going to mind seeing the Chi-Yu on the field because it is powering that special attacker of yours up, and if you can protect it well at the same time, you can really take advantage of that and kind of use that against Naoto. But so the same can be said for Naoto with the Chien-Pao on Rash's side of the field. He's got a lot of big physical threats as well, very similar Pokemon and choices here from both players. Got the Iron Hands, the Urshifu, Rapid Strike. Naoto not opting to run the Sword Stance, going with the Close Combat Aqua Jet and the Surging Strikes here with
All
that
classic.
All classic set, so hasn't got the ability, but then at the same time, you don't need to worry about taking your turn to set up if you need to. You know, you can just go all out on the offensive with that Pokemon, and a lot of the time, that's really what it's all about, kind of coming out the traps and taking advantage of the early stages of the game if you can.
Another interesting observation is the Landorus. Landorus has, I think, quite happily got access to Stomping Tantrum now as well. Previously, you know, it had to go for something like the Earthquake as its kind of ground same type attack bonus move, but now it has that single target Stomping Tantrum, and both our players adopted to put that on, as opposed to having that coverage move, Earthquake, hitting, you know, one of your partner Pokemon there aren't a lot of Pokemon there that are going to want to take that on the trainer's side. So it's really nice synergy now having that stopping tantrum instead.
Yeah, that is a really big kind of coverage attack to have there, and it's going to be a big play for Naota to take advantage of, something that Arash is going to have to be very careful around going into this first game. As we are getting started in this round 1, with Arash leading out with the Flutter Mane and the Amoonguss, and Naota leading out with the Iron Hands and the Chi-Yu.
Yes, fantastic leads coming out of the blocks here. That Amoonguss is going to be able to support the Flutter Mane on Arash's side, potentially go for some redirection and allow that Flutter Mane to get out some big damage. Iron Hands, however, is going to try and stop it in its tracks, potentially going for something like a fake out into that opposing Amoonguss. Flutter Mane Ghost type, not going to have to worry about that.
No, not at all. And I think the Iron Hands here does put a little bit of pressure on at least the Amoonguss this turn, preventing it from going for the spores or any kind of supporting options. But the Chi-Yu does have access to the Heat Wave, which can hit both Pokemon for big damage. So that's something that the Amoonguss does not really want to have to deal with. So Arash, has to be wary of that coming into this first turn.
Yeah, the Chi-Yu going to help out that Flutter Mane as well, lowering the special defense of all those Pokemon is going to have to be a worry. But I like this switch. Amoonguss coming in, a really great counter to something like a Flutter Mane, and the Chi-Yu just saying, hey, I'm weak to fairies here. I'm just going to make sure that I'm not taking any unnecessary damage. And it was the Dazzling Gleam going for that spread move. Amoonguss going to have to take a little bit of a chunk, but it is resisted to a great switch in for Naota as Amoonguss tries to get that Spore off.
Yeah, not affected onto the Chi-Yu, onto the Amoonguss, sorry, there, because a great switch in there. Now, both Pokemon got their Amoongusses out in the field, going to be big threats to the opposing Pokemon on the other side of the field, because neither the Flutter Mane on Arash's side or the Chi-Yu have access to that safety goggles item that you kind of hope that you would have in front of Amoonguss. So the Flutter Mane on Arash's side does get threatened pretty heavily here from that Spore threat that is on the field, and the same can be said with the Chi-Yu. The one thing that the Chi-Yu has advantage of here from Naota's side is that it does threaten the Amoonguss on Arash's side of the field with those big threatening fire type attacks that can come out and do some big damage. So Arash has to be a little bit careful here.
Certainly does, and you want to make sure you're playing around that Chi-Yu, like you mentioned. Flutter Mane getting out of here, knowing that it's not going to deal too much damage to that opposing Amoonguss and doesn't want to have to take any of that unnecessary fire damage from the opposing Chi-Yu. Urshifu joins the fray, and it's going to be that Heat Wave. Does a huge chunk of damage to Amoonguss, but Amoonguss hangs on, that natural bolt coming in clutch here, and Urshifu able to take it reasonably well as well. Urshifu on Arash's side running that safety goggles, so doesn't have to worry about a potential Spore that Amoonguss has gone for, but it's going into the opposing Amoonguss slot.
Great switch here from Arash, and that survival there with the Amoonguss as he gets that Spore off. Critical turn from onto that Chi-Yu, able to take it, activate that Citrus Berry, get a little bit of health back, and get your Urshifu into a nice position now. And like you say, with the safety goggles, not really going to have to worry about the redirection from the Amoonguss here. Going into that Chi-Yu now is a great option for Arash, and also he has the opportunity now to go for a Sword Stance. He's got the room for it now to get that Sword Stance off, to get himself set up. So something that Naota has to really kind of keep in mind here. You haven't got the offensive output with the Amoonguss to do the damage that you need onto the Urshifu, so you're going to have to really adjust and do it quickly, because Arash can start to gain a little bit of momentum if you see him go for that here. Or he might just go for the all-out attack into that Chi-Yu. It's a quick, easy decision to go into that slot, and it's going to switch out like we are going to see here.
Yeah, Arash in the driving seat, doesn't have to worry about redirection or Spore from the opposing Amoonguss. Thanks to those safety goggles, we are going to see an adjustment. Naota going, I'm going to try and lower your potential attack here, getting a drop thanks to the Intimidate on Landorus. Of course, critical hits from Surging Strikes are going to be able to bypass those. It's actually a double switch from Naota here, switching out the Amoonguss as well, bringing in here the Iron Hands. Sword Stance is going to happen from the Urshifu. It knows it's supported by that opposing Amoonguss, and Amoonguss on Arash's side, able to go for a cheeky Pollen Puff potentially. Yeah, there we go. Into that Urshifu, bringing its health right back up to full.
That's a brilliant turn from Arash here. Not wanting to go for the Spore either, because he could get caught out with that. Landorus coming in on the other side of the field does have the safety goggles, so it would be a bit of a wasted turn. Opting to go for that Pollen Puff, get your health back, setting your Urshifu up, and in a really nice, strong position now. It obviously has been intimidated, so there's only +1 going into this next turn, but does have to worry about that fake out from the Iron Hands here, and also the Terrestrialization from the Landorus. It does have the ability to go for that Terra Flying type and really pose some big threats to both the Amoonguss and the Urshifu on Arash's side of the field.
That's true, the flying type really detrimental to Arash's plans here. I mean, Urshifu, it is that +1, and that's still going to hurt on the Surging Strikes, getting those cheeky critical hits as well. You can apply a lot of pressure to that opposing Landorus. Even if it does want to go for something like a Flying Terror, you can still hit quite nicely with those water type moves. Landorus is indeed going to lock in that Terrestrialization, the first one of the World Championships here, Pokemon trainers, and it's got its balloons flying type now in a really great position to maybe start going for those Terror Blasts.
Yeah, we are just going to see a Protect here here from the Urshifu, not wanting to contend with that fake out or the threat from the Landorus this turn, as we do see the fake out come out into that protect, leaving the Amoonguss vulnerable though, and not switching from Arash's side, and the Terra Blast coming out from the Landorus, and it is going to be into that Amoonguss from Neotor, taking an early lead here and taking down Arash's Amoonguss.
Yeah, able to get the knockout. It does give Arash the opportunity to bring that Flutter Mane back in, or his fourth Pokemon from the back. Something like the Chien-Pao is what we were talking about earlier, that amazing synergy, lowering the defenses will even give Urshifu even more power behind the punch. It is going to be that Chien-Pao. The one thing you've got to watch out for, though, is it also means that the Landorus and the Iron Hands are going to be able to benefit from that drop as well into the Urshifu.
Yeah, but the big thing here is that the Landorus is going to be really subjected to super effective damage from that Chien-Pao. The Icicle Crash is going to hit it for super effective damage. It hasn't been intimidated, the Chien-Pao, so going to be hitting very hard into that Pokemon. We know its item hasn't got a resist item to that super effective attack. It's just whether or not you can take advantage of this situation with the Urshifu, maybe go for that Terrestrialization and go into that Iron Hands and deal with that threat, because it is going to pose a threat to your Chien-Pao. You have got the Focus Sash here, but you've got to make sure that you are taking one Pokemon down at least this turn.
And you've got to watch out for the speeds as well. If that Landorus moves before the Urshifu, it's going to be able to get some good damage before Urshifu's able to retaliate. But if you always go for something like an Aqua Jet, try and get that priority. Landorus actually getting out of here, wants to be preserved for later on, maybe bring that Intimidate back into action against Arash later in the match, and the Sleeping Chi-Yu joins the field.
Yeah, and you've got to imagine Neotor wants to keep that Intimidate preserved for later in this game to bring in to reduce the attack again on the Chien-Pao and the Urshifu that is sitting on +1 at the minute. The Amoonguss is going to re-enter the field, the Chi-Yu coming in. It is asleep still, so it's not going to be able to do anything this turn, but we are going to see the Terrestrialization from the Chien-Pao of all things on Arash's side of the field, going for that Ghost Terra typing here, and both Pokemon have the chance to potentially pick up a knockout and even the score up for Arash going into this turn.
Yeah, the double switch on Iota Sing means all action is happening on Arash's side. Not very effective damage to that Chi-Yu, really nice switch, and the Surging Strike into the Amoonguss. I love the way that Arash is forcing Iota to constantly make these switches, but look at the switches he is making, correctly predicting what Arash is going to go for and bringing in Pokemon that resist them. The Rocky Helmet as well on that Amoonguss, a fantastic switch in. Going to be hit 3 times, take 3 times of Rocky Helmet damage as well. Going to be whittling away at that Urshifu. Look how much damage Amoonguss did by doing nothing.
There's an amazing switch there from the outside to get in Amoonguss with the Rocky Helmet. You know, Urshifu doing more damage to itself of that Rapid Strike's been doing to the Amoonguss. It does resist that attack. The Amoonguss are in a position now where it is going to be susceptible to getting knocked out from an Icicle Crash from the Chien-Pao, and obviously with that Chi-Yu asleep is going to be primed to get taken down by the Urshifu. And now you're looking a bit slim for switching options if you are Neotor. Arash sitting in a good position. If the Amoonguss switches out to the Landorus and the Icicle Crash comes into that slot, I'm not really going to appreciate taking that. And again, the Iron Hands, although a little bit better defensively, still not really going to appreciate coming in on a +1 Urshifu and also a Chien-Pao attack.
That's true. Amoonguss here just going for Protect, doesn't want to have to take any damage, but of course Unseen Fist on that Urshifu will be able to break through it if it is indeed targeting that slot. Instead it was the Icicle Crash from the Chien-Pao going for Protect, not going to be dealing any damage. Who was the Urshifu decided to target? Chi-Yu's going to be taking its turn of sleep here, just resting out on the field here for Neotor. As Urshifu goes for that Sword Stance, capitalizing on the fact that Urshifu is in a prime position. Chi-Yu's going to be taking a turn of sleep. The Amoonguss was in a terrible position. Fantastic observation by Arash.
I love that play from Arash here, not going for the attack here, taking the chance, knowing that the Landorus is in the back, it will neutralize your attack back to neutral when it comes back in. Okay, I'm going to just go for a Soul Stance here. I'm not going to attack. He has got access to that Aqua Jet going into this next turn, so it doesn't even need to contend with the speed tiers here. The Safety Goggles gives you immunity from the Rage Powder, so you can just go for that knockout straight into the Chi-Yu this turn, and go for that Icicle Crash into the Amoonguss as well. But we are seeing that Amoonguss leave the field for Neotor.
Yeah, that's the thing. Chi-Yu isn't able to crystallize at this point. Landorus has already taken that, so the Aqua Jet can go straight into it, gets a knockout, and now we'll force Neotor to bring the Pokemon in from the back. We see the switch for that Iron Hands coming in. Amoonguss wanting to use his Regenerator ability to get a little bit of health back for the rest of this match, but the Icicle Crash will connect onto that Iron Hands, takes a sizable chunk of damage.
Yeah, and that's really key damage there onto the Iron Hands, because it probably puts it in range now, even after an Intimidate. On the Urshifu to take down that Iron Hands, which is a big threat to, especially the Urshifu right now with those big electric type attacks that it can threaten with. But +3 at the minute, sitting in a really strong position. The Amoonguss coming back onto the field, also getting access to that Regenerator ability that the Amoonguss has a little bit more health, but from an offensive aspect, it really isn't putting too much on the board other than small threats to that Shen Pao that they can go for. But if you go for that, you're likely going to kind of put yourself in a position after this turn when the fake out's burnt potentially of getting put to sleep.
Yeah, that's the thing. I wouldn't be surprised to see another detect coming out from the Urshifu, just like you say, to burn out that fake out. You don't want to have to take any unnecessary chip at this point. And the Iron Hand sits in a pretty vulnerable position. It is going to be actually the fake out into the Urshifu, just making sure you're staying bold here as Pao's able to go for the Icicle Crash, pick up the KO against that Amoonguss.
It is enough, Lou.
It goes down, and now we know Landorus is going to come in, but it's going to have to face the rock of this Urshifu. Yes, it's flinching, but at the end of the day, I still think that Pao was able to make that turn successful for Arash.
Yeah, that was a huge knockout there, and I think Arash making the right choice there, because not going for the detects, just going saying, well, if you fake out my Urshifu, I'm going to get the attack off with my Shen Pao, I'm going to take down your Amoonguss. If you don't fake out the Urshifu, I'm taking down your Iron Hand. So really locking in his position and solidifying where he is in this match, making it very difficult for Naoto to kind of come back here, because as you say, the +2 Urshifu at this point is in a position to take down that Iron Hands. It is going to outspeed it, and all the Shen Pao needs to do is go for that Icicle Crash into the Landorus, and it should pick up the knockout even, well, maybe not -1, maybe you need to double into that slot, but Arash got the Pokemon advantage going into these last few turns.
And that's the thing, the Pao's so speedy, because we were talking a little bit about speed earlier. If the Landorus can outspeed the Urshifu, it's a bit of a difficult situation, but then you've got the Pao able to be very fast as well. Aquajet getting that priority connects onto the Landorus, followed up by the Icicle Crash. That will be a KO, and then it's a very tall mountain for Iron Hands to climb, particularly when you don't have that fake out anymore. You've got the Ghost type Pao that you can't anyway with any of those fighting or normal type moves, and a very powerful, formidable Urshifu. We are going to see the Wild Charge go into that Pao, does a significant chunk of damage, but this is a 2v1, and unfortunately Iron Hands is just too slow to be able to get redemption here.
Yeah, and I think just a great choice there again from Arash to just make sure, I don't want to miss the knockout. Shen Pao -1, might not get it with the Icicle Crash, going for that Aquajet as well, just to solidify that knockout, that turn, and really putting himself in a dominant position here where the Iron Hands is not looking like it can do it. Well, you need a real miracle here to come back from this point. So I think Arash locking this first game up and really in dominating fashion as well, utilising that sword stance that we outlined at the start of the match in the team preview to kind of lock this one up. We are going to see a crunch come out from the Shen Pao, and then the Surging Strikes finishing it up.
Only the one Surging Strikes there, the one critical hit to be able to seal up game one for Arash Omati, trying to get his World Championship title 10 years later after his first one, taking a very commanding game one, but of course it is a best of 3 set, so Naoto is able to adapt, to think how you would adapt for game 2, and maybe shake things up a little bit.
What a great display from Arash in that first game though. I mean, with the sword stance there, we mentioned it at the start of the game that it could be quite a unique option for him, and he really utilised it. And I think the choice of the safety goggles item on the Urshifu as well really unlocks that Pokemon, because I think for a lot of the time Amoonguss doesn't really carry a grass type attack. You know, it normally opts for the Pollen Puff that we saw in that match, both players having that option. But when you don't have the offensive threat against the Urshifu, you're really locked out against it. With Amoonguss, it's not as valuable as it would be in normal situations. You can't pull in those attacks. We did see how effective it was though, switching in on the rapid the Surging Strikes, where it did take that big Rocky Helmet damage, taking more damage than it did to the Amoonguss. So it is an effective Pokemon. I think you've just got to use it in a little bit of a different light. And obviously I think the one thing that you are having to do if you are Naoto is get that Landorus in a position where it isn't going to be threatened by the Shen Pao, where you can threaten the Urshifu with that flying Terastallization, and maybe you need to mix things up here. But Arash coming out in dominating fashion in that first game, giving Naoto everything to think about to tie this up, to take it to a game 3.
I think if you're Naoto now coming into this game too, I personally would really like to see the Fluttermane come into action.
Yeah.
I think again it can apply a lot of pressure to something like the Urshifu and try and stop it in its tracks before it's able to get up those sword stances, and you can start applying pressure to it with something like a Moonblast or even the Dazzling Gleam for that coverage. It is rocking that choice specs, and if you do pair it up with something like the Chi-Yu using Visa Ruins to drop special defense, then that will allow Fluttermane even more flexibility going forward. Of course, Arash has a Fluttermane of his own as well, and an Amoonguss that we've seen piloted really well. That's something that Fluttermane would have to work around.
I think really, like, when you look back at that first game, you make a really good point about the Fluttermane, because I think where the Amoonguss survived on about 20 HP, if you've got the Fluttermane out beside the Chi-Yu, you've got the ability to just get that chip damage that you need with maybe a Dazzling Gleam in that situation, where then the Heat Wave is going to pick up the knockout onto the Amoonguss, and then that really puts the match in your advantage on your side of the field to really kind of start taking things forward and dominating from that position. But with the Amoonguss surviving there, it really just shut down the Chi-Yu, and you don't want to repeat of that going into game 2. I think that's something that you outlined great there with the Fluttermane. It does give Naoto the ability to really get rid of the Amoonguss before it becomes too much of a hindrance from your side of the field.
Yeah, Chi-Yu, I think, a little bit underwhelming there, I think, just due to the positioning of Arash's Pokemon. But it's back here in the fray with that Iron Hands against the Fluttermane and the Amoonguss on Arashimati's side.
Yeah, we are going to see pretty similar leads to what we did in game 1 here, but maybe we see some little adaptations going into this one. We know the Amoonguss hasn't actually got access to protect on Arash's side of the field. Naoto will be aware of this, so it's a prime target to go for the fake out here and then hit that Heat Wave again. Does need to worry about taking an attack from the Fluttermane, of course, but it probably is able to take at least one attack from the Fluttermane from Arash's side of the field. And if you can get that fake out off with the Heat Wave combination, it is going to put you in a position to really shut down that Amoonguss. It does force Arash maybe to switch out here because of the threat of that, or do you just kind of allow Naoto to go for that and just give a bit of room to your Fluttermane, free damage, and we aren't seeing the fake out.
Nearly a one-hit KO. That was a Choice Specs Moonblast with Beast of Ruin activation as well. Heat Wave's going to retaliate though, and it is able to get the knockout on Amoonguss. Chi-Yu saying this is how it's done, this is how you get a one-hit KO in this match.
Just trading blows here in this turn 1. The overheat coming out from Naoto there, not one to mess around, and the heavy slam going to be a knockout, clean knockout from the Iron Hands into the Fluttermane. Naoto taking a huge lead in this game 2.
Game 1, he was warming up. Game 2, he is not messing around. Getting a solid double knockout in that turn 1. No fake out to be seen, just jumping straight on the offensive. And that Iron Hands, the natural bulk, the Assault Vest coming in clutch, being able to survive that very powerful Moonblast. Amazing momentum switch for Naoto.
Yeah, and I mean, coming out, really knowing what he needed to do in his first turn here, and that heavy slam as well, taking the Fluttermane down. Huge turn for Naoto. The Iron Hand's not in the best of positions right now, but probably one of those Pokemon where you think, right, you've done your job, kind of the trade for the Fluttermane was enough, allow this to go down. Have you got enough in your tank to take down that Chi-Yu? We saw from game 1 that the Chi-Yu does outspeed the Urshifu, so it can be a little bit of a problem here for Arash to get rid of that, because that's the big thing. It is threatening your Shen Pao right now with those big fire type attacks. It is -2, of course, but I mean, still, it is going to be hitting pretty hard. Shen Pao not the strongest of Pokemon on the defensive side of things, so would appreciate probably not taking a Heat Wave if you can avoid it.
Yeah, the Iron Hand's very vulnerable as well. Something like an Aqua Jet would just be able to pick up the KO against it. Wouldn't be surprised maybe to see a couple of switches on Naoto's side, or maybe these two Pokemon have done their work. No switches. Chien-Pao moving first, so Icicle Crash going to go and do a little jump to the opposing Chi-Yu.
Oh,
it's
a
gonna
huge flinch.
That's what you need at that point. Surging Strikes gets the knockout on the Iron Hands. Going to be moving faster, but that poor Chi-Yu. Yes, it was at, -2 special attack thanks to the overheat, but it still would have been able to hit so hard into that Chien-Pao with something like a Heat Wave, getting a little bit of chip onto that opposing Urshifu as well. That's unfortunate.
That is a huge turn for Arashi, and really unfortunate for Naoto. The flinch there, just preventing it from getting any damage off in that situation. And I think that a little bit of chip here would have helped, because breaking the sash potentially on that Shen Pao is a huge advantage going into these latter stages of this match. Potentially now you've got to go for it again, and the Chi-Yu in a position where maybe an Aqua Jet is enough. If the Urshifu isn't intimidated, it can go for that and potentially pick up a knockout here. But again, both players have access to the terrestrialization right now, so you've got to be careful, because the Chi-Yu can go into that Ghost type in. It will put itself a bit more vulnerable to those Dog type attacks from the Chi-Yu, but it can give itself the ability to not be hit super effectively from an Aqua Jet, maybe giving it a turn it needs to kind of get in a position again where it can do some devastating damage like it did in that turn 1.
Yeah, it's definitely a catch-22. Which move do you want to, try and avoid more? The Sucker Punch or an Aqua Jet, for example. Even something like an Icicle Crash and Aqua Jet would be able to get the KO onto that opposing Chi-Yu, but you've now got the Landorus that you have to contend with, and the temptation to be able to hit it with a powerful Ice-type move as well, I think would be really strong here for Arash. You want to try and remove that Landorus from play before it's able to maybe try and deal damage to the Urshifu.
Yeah, and I think the Landorus in a position here where it's going to be hit super effectively from the Shen Pao, of course. It is going to be outsped as well, so it's going to be vulnerable to flinches like that Chi-Yu was, but at the same time, I think Arash has to make a decision here, and we are going to see him go for that terrestrialization with the Urshifu this turn into that water Terra type, but it is going to be Naoto going for the terrestrialization on the Landorus before that with that flying Terra type, just to maximize the damage from the Landorus and reduce the super effective damage from those ice attacks from the Shen Pao.
Yeah, instead of being 4 times weak, you're now only 2 times weak. That might be the little bit of defensive bulk that you need to be able to survive a powerful Icicle Crash. We're going to see as well, like you say, the terrestrialization of Terra Water onto this Urshifu, going to be boosting up its water type moves by an additional 50% here. Going to be looking to try and get some big KOs. It's that Aqua Jet. It's targeting down into the opposing Flood and GU, and will be able to get the KO against it. Even if it tried for a Protect, Unseen Fist would have been able to break right through that. Now Landorus in a position where it's going to have to see if it can survive this Icicle Crash. It connects, is able to survive.
Just hangs on, and the Terra Blast coming out. Which target is he went for? It is into that Urshifu, but not weak to it anymore. Is able to survive for another turn, and that Icicle Crash now probably putting that Landorus in range of an Aqua Jet to go down this next turn. Be all down to what Naoto picked for his last Pokemon to come out here. Will it be the Amoonguss? Could come in, but again, if it is going to be a bit susceptible to those Icicle Crashes from the Shenpao, the one Pokemon that has got its Sash intact. Big problem for Naoto, and needs to really contend with being able to take that down.
Yes, I mean, the thing is Urshifu in a really great position where it can go for something like an Aqua Jet at this point into that opposing Landorus. The fourth and final Pokemon, I mean, this match, I have to credit Arash. Naoto came out so strong at the beginning, and Arash has been able to really turn the tables, taking down 2 Pokemon and now making this a real nail-biter of an ending. It is going to be that Urshifu, that's a Pokemon that Chien-Pao, particularly with his Focus Sash Din attack, is rubbing his little paws together with being like, I've got a move for you, I've got an Icicle Crash.
Yeah, and you've got to think now Naoto's in a really difficult position. Has the Amoonguss got enough to be able to take down the Urshifu with maybe a Pollen Puff here? Because I think you've got to protect the Landorus, because otherwise it goes down to an Aqua Jet in this position. So I think the safety goggles really does come in key here for making sure that Arash is in that dominant position. If it can survive a Pollen Puff, that's the big thing here. Or maybe you even just protect your Urshifu this turn to get around the protect on the potential Landorus here if you're expecting that from the outer side of the field.
Of course, you can't even, direct away that Aqua Jet because you've got safety goggles on. It is going to be the Aqua Jet coming out from this Urshifu, finding its mark down onto that opposing Landorus, does get the KO. And now Arash has really turned the tables. Chien-Pao going for the protect here, just wants to make sure that it is still going to be preserved nice and healthy towards the end game of this game too.
Yeah, and the Amoonguss now got everything to do, going for that spot into the Shin-Pao, not going to be affected because of the great protect there from Arash. And now in a position where you can just Icicle Crash and then go for another attack with the Urshifu here, or as we're seeing, locking into the Swords Dance just to make sure that you all have got the hits to be able to take it down. We are going to see you do over 50% here, and that Swords Dance from the Urshifu here from Arash.
Love to see this with the style points. You can then deal a really heavy KO in that next turn. There's really not a lot.
Flinch.
Oh, I got the flinch. I mean, there wasn't too much that Amoonguss could do at this point
not
anyway,
at this
but
point.
that's not the way you want to go out. You don't want to take a flinch at this point. It's already an uphill mountain for this little mushroom to climb, but now it really is all cascading down against it.
Yeah, that Icicle Crash from the Shen-Pao has put in a lot of work for Arash, especially in this game too. Put in a lot of work game 1, but like you said, that really being in that detrimental position after turn 1 in game 2, coming back like he has in such fashion, really testament to the choices of Pokemon that he has picked here in the Urshifu and the Shen-Pao, how strong these two Pokemon together, especially with the item choices and the move choices both Pokemon have on that side of the field.
Arash playing this really conservatively here, going for another Swords Dance, knowing that there really isn't much that this Amoonguss can do to the opposing Urshifu, so just trying to make sure that it gets another Swords Dance up, able to get some big damage off. The Chien-Pao going for a Protect once again. Amoonguss not able to get any damage on the board, targeting down that Chien-Pao instead.
Yeah, and I think that's, I think you've got to try and target that down, because if you are going to be hitting into the Amoonguss with the Urshifu, you will be taking Rocky Helmet damage, so you will potentially be knocking yourself out. You've got to kind of play this a little bit safe in this position, just going for another Swords Dance, so it looks like this turn, just to make sure you're maximizing the damage there. As the crunch comes out, not quite enough to take down the Amoonguss and shift with the Rocky Helmet damage onto that side of the field.
I think the Rocky Helmet damage you've said is really critical here, because Chien-Pao now has its Focus Sash broken. It's also now asleep. It's in a little bit more of a vulnerable position. So this is where the Urshifu really does have to, have its partners back and try and get that critical KO. You can't just freely go for Surging Strikes, because as you mentioned, you're going to take damage after each one of those. So you need to make sure that you're going to be able to get that solid KO with this Aqua Jet and just close up the game.
Yeah, making sure that it's +5 at the minute, so I mean, it's probably going to be able to get this Water Terra type as well. Going to be able to get the knockout onto Amoonguss from this range here that the Shen-Pao's kind of worn it down to. And there we go, Arash taking game 2, locking up this first round and having a big lead over Naoto, really dominating fashion here as well. Congratulations to Arash and to Naoto. What a great way for us to kick off this World Championships here in Yokohama.
Yeah, and look at the camaraderie between these two world champions. They both know exactly what it takes to be able to get to that #1 spot, and Arash carving out a very dominant start here at the Pokemon World Championships in Yokohama, Japan.
Incredible show for us to kick off, and both we said this going into this match, two world champions coming into this first round here, and what a show for our viewers at home and for our spectators here. Really great performance from Arash in particular. Naoto coming out in that game too really looked convincingly like he was going to come back in that match, but again, Arash had that board position with the Shen Pao and that Urshifu and really utilised his options effectively so well in that second game to kind of bring it back from a position of what looked like was unachievable at the start of that second game.
And I think, yeah, that game too, so commanding from Naruto getting those double KOs. But we talked earlier about the synergy of Chien Pao and Urshifu. And I think Arash has really just shown why it was kind of a hot pick that we had and something that was a discussion point, because it has such great synergy amongst those two Pokemon and the flexibility you can have as well with terrestrialization. We saw the Terra Ghost on the Chien Pao previously to really kind of stop Iron Hands in its tracks a little bit.
Yeah.
And then seeing the Terra Water this time for that extra offensive pressure. Again, showcase why terrestrialization is such a cool concept. You get offensive and defensive modes.
Yeah, and I just love the combination of that safety goggles item on it with the sword stance. I think we saw there the opportunity, and it'll probably arise in lots of games going forward for Arash as well, where he's going to have the chance to get that sword stance set up, and you don't really need to worry about the Intimidate at that stage. You really lock down those key moments where he knew he's got a free turn to get the sword stance up. Even in that game 1, he went for that second sword stance just to solidify his position with the Urshifu, and I think it's so massively played in that position where a lot of the time you think, oh, I just need to get a quick knockout here, but really just taking a step back, almost relaxing into the game there, not panicking in those situations, not really needing the urgency to get rid of Pokemon, and looking at the overall picture, being able to get that sword stance up at the right time and just overwhelm the auto with such convincing fashion as well. Excited to see how far this core can go this weekend.
Exactly, and it's a shame. I kind of still really wanted to see the Flutter Mane on Naoto's side. I
Yeah.
think maybe having that in the back, something like a powerful Dazzling Beam to two Pokemon that are generally weak to it. Obviously, we saw the Terra Water kind of making it not as weak, but still, with the low HP that the Urshifu had, I think Flutter Mane would have been able to get some really big KOs.
I think so as well, and like the Iron Hands in that first game, the second game did do a little bit more of a job than it did in the first game, but it still wasn't really getting the return that you needed. It obviously got the knockout on the Flutter Mane, which was huge, but other than that, it really didn't do very much, whereas I think the opposing Flutter Mane could have come in after that if Naoto had opted to bring it instead of the Amoonguss, and maybe would have had a bit more of an offensive presence and pulled that game back a little bit closer than it was.
Yes, we've got a little bit of a replay here as well, in case you've only just tuned in and missed some of the action. A fantastic showdown between two previous world champions. Sword Stance Urshifu there being the key move for Arash, being able to get so much momentum, so much damage from these powerful water-type moves, whether it was the Aqua Jet or the Surging Strikes.
Yeah, and you saw that key turn there where the Amoonguss opted not to go for the Spawn, the Pollen Puff instead, which was really pivotal later on that game 1, because we saw the Rocky Helmet damage that the Amoonguss did on that Surging Strikes later on. That would have knocked the Urshifu out without that Pollen Puff, so it masterfully played it again from Arash in that game.
Yeah, and Naoto coming out in game 2, getting that solid KO apiece in turn 1 was such great momentum for him, but just unfortunately for Naoto, Arash was able to adapt, call on all that wisdom and experience he's had over a decade of playing Pokemon to be able to clutch it out. The Urshifu surviving that Terra Flying, I think, was also critical. It now put him in a great position to target down the last Pokemon on Naoto's side and clutch victory.
Yeah, and the big survival there as well from the Urshifu, from that Terra Flying, Terra Blast, like crazy survival there, and allowing the Urshifu just the room that it needed, and it carried on the rest of that match with that 43 HP to close everything out. So yeah, incredibly played from Arash.
Yeah, fantastic. And let's keep the ball rolling. I believe we have our winners interview with Arash Amati and Aaron on the stage.
Thank you very much, Lee and Lou. I am joined here by Arash Amati, our winner of that first round, and of course the 2013 world champion. Arash, we were talking before this interview, it's surreal that we're standing here 10 years after Worlds and getting to witness you on the main stage again. How have you been, man?
Good. I was really excited to play against one of the very best in the world right now. After I took a long break, I tried to get back this year. I think I still have to improve a bit, but yeah, it was really exciting games. I think I all things considered, I played pretty well.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned taking a long break, and for those that don't know, of course you won Worlds in 2013, you got second at Nationals in 15, first in 16, and then top 8 at Worlds in 2018, but we haven't seen you really been playing too much in the last few years, so kind of walk us through what you were really up to.
I think after Worlds 2018, where I got sixth, I kind of like took a step back a little bit, and but I've been missing this. So I think right now I want to get back to like the top, like I used to, and then we'll see what's next. But yeah, I think we'll see how it goes today. Really, I think even though the prep was a bit rough, like 1 month to prepare, new format. Metagame changes every day, but I think the team I ended up bringing, I think is pretty good. So maybe I can do a deep run with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to talk about your team specifically because we saw you use a really interesting Urshifu set with the safety goggles and the sword stance. It's super dominant, of course, in that very first game. And so, how did you come up with the team in general, and what was your approach for team building at this tournament?
I played like a core of Urshifu, Chien-Pao, and Flutter since the beginning of the format, and I swapped the other three a lot because I thought they were really strong. And like Urshifu used to actually be protective heads. And then like my friend Lucas suggested me to use goggles, and I thought it was much better. So I stuck with it, and it was really useful in this match because like I think especially game one, I wasn't in the best spot on turn one,
Yeah.
and then like because of his Amungus, but then like I could put myself in a board position where like he was kind of stuck, and like I remember like he kept his Chiu in while he was sleeping instead of switching it out because like I could target that slot, but then like I just source danced, so it was awkward for him. But he adjusted really well in game two.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about game 2 a little bit because I think we actually saw the same leads come out, but turn 1 was very different, super explosive. He went for the double KO immediately. So what were you thinking after that turn 1, and what did you think was your path to victory afterwards?
I think he got my play really well, and like, but I also thought I could do it even after that turn. Like turn 2, a lot of things could have gone on, and like basically I thought, like I tried to consider all the options, and I thought my play was good because like the Chiyu could stay in, but even if it stayed in, I had the flinch chance. Also, I felt like he wasn't gonna switch in a Mungus on the hand slot, so I think I felt good about that play. Of course, he made the correct play as well, so I got a bit lucky. Could have potentially gone to game 3. But overall, like, I think I'm pretty happy with how I played.
One thing I want to talk to you about quickly is the decision to run Icicle Crash on the Chien-Pao. I think coming into this tournament, people have been debating, do you go with the Ice Spinner or do you go for the Icicle Crash? Obviously, you can miss with Icicle Crash, but you can flinch, and of course, Rocky Helmet does not affect that. So, did you think about Ice Spinner, or what was the decision for Icicle Crash?
I mean, if you run Rillaboom, obviously Icicle Crash is better. But I also feel like Icicle Crash is just better in general because there's a lot of Rocky Helmet in this format because of Urshifu. And Chien-Pao is Sash, so if Sash is broken, that's really bad. So I just think it's better.
That makes a lot of sense. I know you mentioned earlier you're coming back from a long break, so what does it feel like to be competing at Worlds again? I'm not sure, did you play at Worlds in 2019 or 22?
2019 I went, but it was like more casual, still made day 2, but I didn't play that season. So like this is the first time I'm kind of trying to do well since 2018. Then, wait, what was the question again?
How does it feel, man? Being back in the World Series and to start off the first round playing Naoto, it's crazy.
This is actually the first time I win on stream this year.
That's amazing.
Naoto, it's so crazy. Like, what is going on?
That's amazing, man. Well, the next round is about to start, but before we say goodbye, do you have any final words or thank yous you want to say for today?
No, not for now. Maybe like I go on stream later, I'll do some shoutouts. Right now, I'm good.
Yeah. Okay, locked in for the rest of the tournament. We hope to see you tomorrow, man. That's going to be us from here in the interview, so thank you so much for joining us, and we'll be back shortly.
Thank you so much, Aaron, and to Arash for that great interview and some really good insights there from Arash on the choices, why he made them, and outlining how little preparation all of our players have had coming into Regulation D since the announcement and kind of preparation coming into the World Championships. Everyone's been on a really tight schedule, but you can see the choices there that he has made. and really paid off, especially in that game 1. And he did mention he did get a bit lucky with those icicle crash flinches, especially in that game 1. But I think you've got to have a little bit of luck if you are going to go all the way in these tournaments. You know, you can't just run it out with just pure skill. You've got to have things fall in your favor at certain times when it's kind of crucial. And I think he definitely had that in a little abundance there in that game 1, which is going to help him. Hopefully that carries on for Arash in the rest of this tournament. I'm sure he is. He feels like he's fired up like he was back in 2013 when he did win the title for the first time. So I'm really rooting to see how he gets on for the rest of this weekend.
Yeah, I think it's definitely expect the unexpected when it comes to team building so far, because like we said, Regulation D is it's unknown course at the moment, and seeing a lot of familiar faces, but you know, Pokemon like the Fluttermane, for example, and Chiyu and Chienpao that we've seen used throughout Regulation C, but then the new Pokemon of that Urshifu, particularly with its new choice with the Swords Dance, I think was really nice to see that beautiful fusion of the old meets the new, and that nice creativity coming forward. So definitely interesting matches ahead, I am sure.
Yeah, and I think that the thing on when you look at the teams on paper, you just look at the 6 Pokemon and you say very standard looking Pokemon. But again, I think it's a common narrative that we see with successful teams in these big tournaments. It's the little changes and choices that players make to these solid standard cores that really make all the difference. And I think the safety goggles there on the Urshifu in particular with that sword stance, a really interesting choice there. And I think the move choices as well on the Shenpao for Arash, really interesting. Crunch, not really something that we
so
see
unusual.
too often. And the icicle crash as well, which, you know, Aaron outlined perfectly there on stage. It can miss, so it can be a bit temperamental at times. It can cost you in certain situations, but because it gives you a little bit more power and in those really key situations, I think it's a really good choice. And if you're confident in those choices when you're making a team, when you're putting it together and think, yeah, well, I'm probably going to miss maybe 1 out of 10 times, maybe say, then you know you're prepared for that and you're willing to take that just for the trade-off of that extra power, which can come in crucial at certain times.
Exactly. Well, Lee and I in our gathering of Gastrodon are all going to go take a little bit of a break. We'll switch out the casters and be back with round 2 very soon, so do not go anywhere, Pokemon trainers.
The biggest Pokemon tournament Australia's ever had in any game, so that's really exciting.
I think it's really interesting to meet everyone from all over the world.
Yeah, it was one of my favorite tournaments. So just playing the game, you know, I think this format is really fun and I'm really enjoying it. So
It's good just to see everyone and do live events again.
I've made so many friends from it, and it's just a one-of-a-kind game that I'm hooked on.
It gets you together to meet people, to hang out, to socialise, to have fun, have a good time, be in each other's company, and it's just a really great game.
He resisted, but it looks like that is a knockout. Yakovic is your first ever Oceania International Champion.
Yako with the clean sweep here at OCIC, making history on this stage, defeating his friend and local fish on a heater to win the championship here. Just has to pass, and Remy just announces Melodious Echo, and Remy will become the Oceania International Champion for the junior division in the trading card game. Well, Zigzagoon, KOing Comfey, and the Super Zap Cannon gets rid of that Cramorant, and Polaris has won the Oceania International Championship.
And then we see the retreat, we see the Talent Council drop all the Zero Aura, and Azul Garcia Griego is your 2-time international champion.
Little bit of
of hope here, as Kiara is actually just going to go ahead and finish up this game with the icy wind.
There we go, Kiara is your 2023 Oceania International Champion of the Junior Division. Huge congratulations, well fought battle 2-0.
As well. That's just going to be enough for the knockout here, and Benjamin becomes your senior division Oceania International Champion.
Crash from Palafin into Corbinate. That is a knockout, and Gavin's California dreaming has become a reality here down under. Gavin Michaels is your BGC 2023 Oceania International Champion.
I never expected this, so I'm still just like flabbergasted. Haven't even processed it towards excited.
Like honestly, no words to describe it. Like this experience has just been absolutely amazing.
It feels great because I've been working up to this point for a very long time.
It feels really good. It means a lot. It's really big because I've never really won a large event before.
I feel like really happy and excited that I'm going to Yokohama, Japan.
Winning OCRC has made me want to play this game more. Winning Worlds was just want me to go full on into this.
Winning Worlds would be great. Obviously, it's the biggest tournament in the Pokemon TCG. Winning Worlds would be the culmination of everything that I've worked for in the past 12 years of playing VGC.
My name's Paul Chua and I'm from the United States.
Palafin in a very, very strong position to get another knockout here.
It's gonna still have to see if it can wake up here, but I think Gabrielle knows this is it. The battle is over, and Paul Chua becomes your 2023 European International Champion.
Winning EUIC feels pretty good. It means a lot. I haven't been able to win an international ever. Like the last time I ever made finals was in 2017 and I got second. So being able to finally get past second place feels pretty good. I'm definitely worried about facing Gabriel again. That finals match is really close. I definitely think he had a really good chance at winning. I got a little bit lucky near the end. But yeah, he is the main person that I would be afraid of facing. Winning Worlds would mean a lot. I'd be really happy. It's a dream I've been having since I ever started playing VGC. So if I ever became world champion, that would mean the world to me.
My name is Owen Murphy, and I am from Georgia in the United States. I am now the Seniors Division North American International Champion.
He is one step away, one move blast away from securing the knockout into the roaring moon and becoming your 2023 North America International Champion.
There's a lot of fast-paced trading at the end of the game, but Owen managing to come out on top. What a performance in this one.
It feels really, really amazing to win North American Internationals. It's the biggest event that I've been to, and I think it was really fun being on stream. This victory means a lot to me personally, and because it allows me to get the travel award for the World Championships, which is very exciting. I haven't had super good results at in-person tournaments recently, so it was definitely very good to be able to make it on this one. Definitely had some doubt before the tournament. I hadn't been getting the results that I wanted, and so I was not very confident. Definitely helped to think about things one game at a time. It ended up working out, and I just had to stay focused on the games themselves and not the bigger picture. Really what I'm most excited about for Worlds is the competition itself, just the chance to be competing, to be the best in the world at something. That's really the ultimate goal.
Welcome back to the lounge, or welcome to the lounge for the first time for us. I know some of our friends have been having a great time with it. I'm Adam Doricott, joined by the ever-knowledgeable Scott Glaser, and a very special guest for the weekend, somebody we've not seen in a little while, Ray Rizzo. Ray, how on earth are you?
Adam, it's great to be back. You know, I've been playing VGC for the last 15 years, ever since the beginning, and this is the first year we're actually in Japan, and it's just an incredible atmosphere here. Even though I've been living here the past 4 years, I mean, it's just something special that I think the players and spectators alike here are just not going to forget for the rest of their lives.
Is this the shortest journey you've ever taken to a World Championships, Ray?
Yes, I think so.
You've just moved halfway around the world. Now you get a quick, what is it?
Just a quick train ride.
Yeah, exactly.
Tokyo to Yokohama.
super easy, super quick.
Yeah, I did it. It was great. It was fantastic. Of course, Scott, thank you for joining us once again. Have you been around as long as Ray? Longer? Where are we at on that comparison scale?
He's got me by a few years, right? It's very inspired by Ray's championship victory in 2010. I guess I would have, would have been the U.S. Nationals right before that would have been why I started playing, where I've been doing singles for a while and kind of was eager to check this thing out. And then, I thought it was just going to be a quick experiment. I wonder what this is like. And then here I still am, 13 or 14 years later.
Funny how that works. We're all still here 15 years later.
I started in 2010 as well, did not make it that far, and then 2011 I actually met both of you, so pretty nice to be back, and obviously fantastic to be here in Japan. Gents, first impressions, we've had one game, we've been around the event for a little while now. What are we feeling so far?
I'm feeling pretty good. I mean, I think kind of coming into this tournament, the main thing I was curious, all right, well, this is the first event on a format, but also it's Worlds, so is this going to feel like a first event? Is it going to feel like normal World Championship, somewhere in the middle? I think, we're the midpoint is kind of where it's feeling right now, where we're seeing a lot, maybe a smaller group of Pokemon than we normally would for this sort of situation, but I think we see kind of a wide variety of teams, some of them look very developed, kind of like later metagame looking things. Some of them are definitely if you open the ladder up, you probably see basically the same thing right now. But I mean, I think everyone looks comfortable, right? I think, everyone's gonna have the chance to get their best shot, even though it's unexplored territory.
Yeah, and seeing round one feature 2 former world champions, I mean, as a world champion myself, I mean, even me, watching that match and seeing that pairing come up in round one is you just can't wait to kick off the day with such a high quality match like that.
It was a pretty easy choice for us, right? We looked down the players, it's Arash won in 2013, Naoto 2019. They seem to be on the same line. Let's pull that one. So, felt really good. What do you think of the match, though? I mean, we did come into this, we knew Regulation D is, as you say, unexplored. Players have been exploring in their own time. Where did that match land on your expectations, and how do you think it sets the tone for the rest of today, the weekend, just in general?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of nice to see Arash using another powerful Ice-type Pokemon. I remember casting him win his World Championship in 2013. His very Mamoswine-focused team. So his new Ice-type's a little bit, thinner and more agile, but, it feels like the right vibe for him, right? But, no, I mean, I thought it was pretty cool where, I feel like, in this tournament, the way to win it is kind of all right, I need to respect the fact that there are a lot of really powerful Pokemon in this format, so I can't use Pokemon who are, maybe too low on the stats end, or at least too many Pokemon that are really low on the stats end. I think instead kind of the solution to this format is all right, well, I'm going to use 4 or 5 of the Pokemon that maybe everyone's expecting, maybe 1 or 2 Pokemon that are a little bit sneakier, and then kind of maybe some training that sets me apart with all those Pokemon. Some tech moves that people aren't expecting, maybe some Pokemon that are trained to be a little more defensive when my opponents are expecting offensive, or more offensive when my opponents are expecting something defensive. I think that really what stood out to me in that match, where it was that Swords Dance Urshifu that kind of just ran over the game. I think we're going to see a lot of that sort of Pokemon do well this weekend.
Yeah, that was the one differentiating factor in that match too, because Naoto's Urshifu was pretty standard. It had the Surging Strikes, Aqua Jet, Close Combat, whereas Arash's actually dropped Close Combat to feature Swords Dance, which is not something we see all the time, but I think it makes a lot of sense, even though initially it seems kind of counterintuitive, because the opponent is very unlikely to protect against Urshifu just because of its ability. And so finding room to Swords Dance is often difficult, but Arash had that Amoonguss to kind of back it up, and his Urshifu also had Safety Goggles, which let it become just totally immune to anything the Amoonguss could do, and just take that opportunity to get a free Swords Dance and just get off to the races.
It kind of feels like we've already learned the lesson, right, from watching people play Iron Hands throughout the last couple of months. We made that pivot towards the end, right, where we started saying, okay, Swords Dance is really, really good. I'm going to make room for it, drop the Assault Vest and get it going. And I like that Arash has looked at that and said, okay, well, what if Urshifu had +2 attack? Oh, that would actually be crazy, because then you can't protect and you can just knock anything out. So it feels good. Urshifu only coming in at 3rd, I believe it was, on our usage. Iron Hand's actually staying above it. What, looking at that usage, surprised you, or was that exactly where you gents were feeling it?
I mean, I certainly wasn't expecting to see Flutter Mane at, somehow going up regulation over regulation. I mean, certainly it's fantastic, right? I mean, I think everybody kind of had it penciled into their teams and needed a really good reason not to include it, but I wasn't expecting it to be quite that high. I think that is a really interesting thing to watch kind of moving forward, where the teams that have really good solutions to Flutter Mane are going to feel pretty good, right? I think, again, thinking about kind of those tech moves, your Steel types probably actually want Steel type moves in this format. I think one thing that's harder to see in the graph, but I'll be really curious about, but we did see a lot of Amoonguss, as we often do in seemingly every Pokemon Video Game Championships format. Always seems to be around somehow. But like Ray mentioned about the Urshifu, I think where safety goggles is placed because of that, how many Pokemon have the grass terrestrialization is going to be a really important thing to watch. I think a lot of the top Pokemon kind of, they're so dominant that they're going to require some solution, and your team can't naturally counter everything, but one of the fun parts of this generation of battling is that you can kind of like get around a bad matchup by using terrestrialization to shift the types in your team some. I think, Urshifu in particular is another one where, like, do you have, like, that water terrestrialization to try to do some damage? Do you have Rocky Helmet to try and punish it for using those surging strikes? I think it'll be pretty cool to see what people do because, yeah, that top group seems very solidified for such an early, not really early, but for the tactical first tournament of a format.
I'd say that's early. It's the first tournament.
Yeah, and you touched on this a bit earlier, Scott, but a lot of those top Pokemon, like the Fluttermane, like Urshifu, like Heatran even, they can run so many different sets, and that kind of makes it so even though it's the same Pokemon, you can just have drastically different ways of using it. I mean, Fluttermane could go booster energy, boosting its speed, and then even use supporting moves like Fake Tears or Icy Wind. It could go flat-out offensive with Choice Specs. It could even go Focus Sash and try and get a Trick Room up. I mean, Heatran likewise has so many different sets it could run. I've seen Magma Storm, Iron Defense with Body Press. We've seen Life Orb, Leftovers. There's so many different things it can do. In that past match, we just saw how Urshifu, with the Swords Dance instead of close combat, just single-handedly helped Arash, take that match. So a lot of these top Pokemon, even though their usage is so high, there's so many different ways of using them that I think really sets them apart and is going to be so interesting to follow this weekend.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. I mean, I think I'm always the first to kind of make fun of that year, was it 2015, where it seemed like the same combination of 5 Pokemon in every team, because that one, it didn't feel like, to me, the top Pokemon had that much differentiation, right? Like, even though usually, especially the Fire-type slot was just, a variety of different things, it was very samey, right? It was very tactical chess format where you kind of really had to grind it out to try to get an advantage. I think this is going to be a little bit more fun, right? Even if we have Pokemon with really high usage, the mix of terrestrialization and kind of so many of these Pokemon having more options than they used to have, I think it's going to make the mirrors really fun because it's going to be very imperfect mirrors, and the differences between the team are really going to change the options both players have available. So yeah, I mean, I think even if you're one of those players, you really are excited when you're watching this to see all of the really niche Pokemon, you might be a little disappointed that there's fewer of those, perhaps at least in day one, than you might have expected. I think that it's worth looking at the details because the way these games plays out should be really exciting, even if we see a lot of the same Pokemon. I think Heatran in particular, I'm really excited where it might be my pick for the best Pokemon in this format, even though its usage isn't so high. I think it's just really flexible. It's one of those Pokemon you can pick and feel good about it in almost every game, but yeah, there's just so many different ways you can run it. I think it's going to be a really fun format.
Heatran feels unfair with terrestrialization. That to me is the big difference maker for it. Is you've always had these obvious weaknesses, and being able to skirt around them is pretty nice.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Heatran in this format. I got a question for you, gents. What about the new Hisuian Pokemon? How are we feeling about which of those might stand above the pack?
I'm just going to be honest, and this is a long-running thing. In your absence, Ray, there seems to be a running, I don't want to say joke, because it's not particularly funny, but any Pokemon that's able to slow down a game seems to end up on a game I'm casting, so I am a little bit nervous about Hisui and Gudra. I think it makes a lot of sense on paper with the steel typing, and as you were saying, you have to bring a steel attack now. It's not like you just take the steel type and you use it for that, but them being able to slow the game down in what can be a really fast-paced format feels interesting to me. I know I'm going to get saddled with it sometime this weekend. We can follow up on that later. But it's probably the one for me that it's so different to what we've been seeing for the past few months with everyone going, Fluttermane, Iron Hands, and just dealing big damage.
Yeah, I really want to see it. I enjoy Gudra a lot. Just I think that sort of unconventional win condition is always really fun for me to watch. Where when you're not just trading Pokemon back and forth, you're kind of working towards something else. I think it's fun to just kind of see how the trainer's thinking. I mean, for me, certainly, yeah. I mean, I think the Basculegion's the one that's probably going to wind up being the highest usage. We're talking at the North American International Championship about how big of a threat it seemed like Ursa Luna was going to be. It seems like, especially in the West, players have backed off of that a little bit more. I think Japan still seems to be a little bit higher on it than the West does, but there's a lot of the Rain Basculegion thing flying around in day one. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. The one I really wanted to see was Cleavor. I don't think it's good enough, but Stone Axe is just such a powerful tool that I feel like some format someday, Cleaver's going to have its day. I don't know if it's going to be this weekend, but gosh, I just hope. Hopefully someone in day 2 just got that team sheet. They're hiding it, but it's in the back somewhere. They're going to find it.
Yeah, I'm with you, Adam, on the Gudra. I think in a metagame with a lot of slow, bulky defensive Pokemon, if you get the opportunity to start stacking those defense boosts, you can just become absolutely unstoppable with that Gudra. So I think it's something we could see, but like Scott said, Basket Legion seems to be really popular, especially in some of the more Western metagames. In Japan, they definitely do like Ursaluna. I can confirm that. Living out here, there's a lot of Ursaluna out here paired with Cresselia for that kind of hybrid Trick Room mode. You don't have to go all in on Trick Room. You can just have Cresselia and Ursaluna with a bunch of kind of mid-speed tier Pokemon or faster Pokemon like Fluttermane to back that up. But I also think we might see a lot of Hisui and Arcanine. That seems to be pretty popular across all regions for players that they don't want to go for Landorus for their Intimidator. They might go for that Hisui and Arcanine to add a Fire type that can bring not only offense, because it is, a very strong Pokemon with Flare Blitz, especially with that high base attack, but also the Intimidate helping to support the team I think is beneficial too.
It feels like a pretty solid pick. Gents, I do want to say thank you very much for your insights. There's so much more we could cover, so I feel really bad cutting you off. I know that, Ray, you obviously have wealth of experience, and we're definitely going to have to get you back to dive into that.
I'll be here all weekend.
Yeah, that's fantastic news for us. Scott obviously bringing fantastic insight, but for now, it sounds like round 2 is getting pretty close, so I want to get back to the action on stage. Thank you for joining us in the lounge. Casters, take it away.
Thank you so much, and welcome back to our game coverage of the Pokemon World Championships 2023. I'm Rosemary Kelly, and I'm joined by Aaron Cybertron Zhang, and we are here to talk you through the next match.
I am so excited. I think out of all the worlds I have been a part of in terms of a commentator, this is the one I was most excited for, just because it's a brand new format, and I was like, I just want to see what teams people are bringing and what the best players in the world are bringing and what they think will give them the best chance to become world champion at the end of the day. And with each round, we just get to see more teams and more really interesting team building.
I mean, not only that, you talk about the format change, but what about the fact we're in Japan?
That's pretty cool too.
Awesome.
That comes second to Pokemon, but
No,
yeah.
It does. But it has been an incredible celebration of Pokemon across the entire city and country, and the fact that it's for the players that have earned their invites to participate at this World Championships makes it even cooler.
Absolutely, yeah. It is surreal to just be here. I was watching that opening ceremony when we were kicking things off, and
I was emotional.
It just gets me in the feels, honestly. And players have worked so hard to get here. It's a whole season's worth of work, and it's not an easy tournament, right? Worlds is the premier tournament, and you think about round 1, right? Half the player field has lost the first round. After the second round, a quarter of the player field have lost both games, right? And it's like, these are the best and the best, and so many people are gonna try to vie to get into day 2, of course, and then try to get into Top Cut and win Worlds, but at the end of the day, there can only be one world champion, but it's just so fun to see all these different Pokemon and teams, and this format is really dynamic as well.
It has been. I mean, the fact that it is the first World Championships, it is the first official event of this format, really does bring some really exciting surprises, even seeing some of the tech choices that have already come out from some of the more standard Pokemon that we would have expected to see in Regulation D. I mean, we'll talk about that Swords Dance Urshifu, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I think so far we've seen a lot of pretty expected Pokemon, a lot of the Pokemon that we had put in our predictions as casters as well. But to me, what's most interesting about a format like this is how do you make those Pokemon stand out relative to your opponents? We know Fluttermane's going to be on every other team basically in this format, but how are you able to make your Fluttermane better than your opponent's Fluttermane? How are you able to train your Pokemon in a way that might catch your opponents off guard? I think Arash's Water Urshifu in that first round, very untraditional. A lot of people generally just expect, max speed, max attack investment on Urshifu, maybe an item like Mystic Water, and you just go with Surging Strikes, Aqua Jet, Close Combat. Arash is like, I'm going to drop Close Combat, I'm going to put Sword Stance on it, I'm going to give it a Safety Goggles, and I'm going to give it a lot of bulk, right? All of those decisions individually alone already make it fairly unique, but you combine all of those and suddenly it feels like you're playing with a different Pokemon.
Yeah, it really did look that way as well, and it's going to be even more of that as we look forward to the next matches that we have for round number 2 of Swiss. And here are some of the matches that we have just on the docket. I cannot believe some of these names that are going up against each other, sitting at a 1-0 record so far.
I think my favorite thing about Worlds is you look at these pairings and I'm like, I could see this being a IC finals, a regional finals, a World's Top Cup match, maybe even a World's finals, right? Like that first match we had literally had 2 world champions. It doesn't get any better than that, and so that's what I love most about Worlds. Every match is sure to deliver. And the names on this list, we've seen so many have so much success throughout this entire season, and many of them are starting, of course, down one game as well, and have lost the first round. And I think most of the players on this key match list have won the first round. But just thinking of all the great players that we had thought about going into this tournament, I believe Wolflick actually dropped the first round, for example. And so at the end of the day, it's a long day one. I believe it is 7 rounds for us today. So any players with 5 wins will move on to the next day. But if you get to 3 losses first, then you're eliminated. So the main thing is making sure that you just try to stay composed and keep going.
For sure. It's still a long day. You think about it being 7 rounds of Swiss, but these are some of the most intense matches you're going to play all season. So it takes a lot of mental fortitude to be able to get through even 7 rounds of Swiss today. So every player, they still have an opportunity to be able to make it through to day number 2, but I think the road even gets harder from there.
It does. And before we really dive into things a little bit deeper, Rosemary, I want to ask you, have you been surprised by anything so far? It's only been 1 round, but I think we've all been taking a little bit of a sneak peek of the teams and the players that we decided to bring. Has there been anything interesting, anything that's caught your eye?
Honestly, I'm excited for Lou for this, but all the Gastrodon that we saw in the actual field so far, I think, has been one of the surprises on the radar. You think about it and you're like, what a great counter. Storm Drain, excellent ability to be able to play into all of the other fantastic water types that are going to be in the meta as we see that kind of formulate throughout the day. But I think also I'm really hopeful to see, honestly, some sun. Like, that's one of my favorite archetypes, and taking a look at just kind of the weather teams that have been building up throughout the season. I was hoping to see more of that, quite honestly.
I'm really glad you brought up weather, because I think sun and rain I expect to be prevalent throughout the course of this tournament, and I think what makes it really interesting is Tornadus is one of the brand new Pokemon, of course, in this format, introduced in Regulation D. Tornadus can set up every single weather manually through its moves, and of course it gets access to Prankster as well. So I definitely expect to see Sun. I think Sun was already established in previous formats before Regulation D, whereas I think Rain now gets some brand new tricks in this format, specifically Basculegion, which was going to be my answer as to a Pokemon that I've been really surprised by in terms of usage rates. A lot of North American players from various different team building groups have opted to use Basculegion, and it feels like every different team I look at has a different Basculegion set as well. So that's a Pokemon I have my eye out on, and I believe Lou actually put it in one of her 4 Pokemon as well for her predictions.
Exactly.
And so I think that is something like I expect a lot of people to try to build around. It's not easy, right? But at the end of the day, it's such a powerful Pokemon. You can either use Swiss Swim or Adaptability. Both are incredible abilities. And so I definitely agree with your weather call, and I hope we can get some Basculegions on stream as well.
What do you think about sand or snow even? Do you think those could have a chance of making an appearance?
It's funny because when we were in an earlier regulation, at one of the regionals we were at, I think maybe it was Portland, all 4 weathers were in the top 8, and I was like, that's wild. And maybe it was 3 of the 4, but it was all 4. But point being, it was like, we actually are in a format where all of the weathers are relevant. I think Tyranitar is generally what makes sand super good, and I think I just haven't seen as many Tyranitar. I think it can still be decent in this format, but with Urshifu being so prevalent, and Iron Hands being at number 2 usage, by the way, in terms of percentage of teams using it, I was expecting to be a really popular pick in this format, but I didn't expect it to be number 2. But point being, Tyranitar struggles a lot against Iron Hands and Urshifu. Both of those are just so common everywhere, so I think it has a little bit of a tougher time. And then Abomasnow and Snow, I feel like it had a brief stint in this, in Scarlet and Violet. We had Abomasnow plus Iron Bundle with Choice Specs Iron Bundle, and the idea was to just really blow things up with Blizzard, for example. I think part of the problem is with Sun and Rain being more prevalent now, it's not as easy to always get the Aurora Veil up from Abomasnow or these Blizzards off, for example. So as much as I'd like to see Sand and Snow, I think if I were to predict whether or not we would see it, I actually say no today. But I'm hoping to be proven wrong, because it's always fun to watch weather.
I'm really glad you brought up Aurora Veil, because I feel like screens have made kind of a reappearance in the meta. That's not something that we ended up seeing as a huge strategy, even in Regulation B and C. And I'm kind of hoping we see some more Grimmsnarl even, just to see some screen setters.
Yeah, I think Grimmsnarl is one of the Pokemon I was interested in Regulation D, because you can play a little bit more slow pace. I think Intimidate is really good. You have it from things like Arcanine, Hisuian Arcanine, Gyarados, for example, and of course Landorus Therian form. In addition, Parting Shot from Grimmsnarl, just really consistent as well. The main thing about screens is that Urshifu's existence makes it tougher, right? Because you get those guaranteed critical hits from either Urshifu forms, and so teams that want to rely on screens have to make sure you're able to cover for either Urshifu, which is a really big part of team building. But I believe we are ready to get into the second match, and I am so excited.
I'm excited as well. You got a sneak peek of what we're going to be jumping into on our stream pairings graphic. But just in case you missed it, it's going to be Ashton Cox going up against Yuya Tada for Swiss round number 2 here at the World Championships.
These are both really decorated players. Ashton winning multiple regional championships and international championships, placed second at the Orlando Regional Championships earlier this season. And Yuya is a very decorated player from Japan. He often competes outside the Japanese circuit and has been at OCIC, for example, and placed very well there. And so, yeah, definitely going to be a really exciting matchup, and both players have had tremendous performances this season.
What's interesting about taking a look at the Japan meta is that they are really running some very standard Pokemon, especially when you look at some of the grassroots events that have happened leading up to this event. I'm really excited to see what that brings to the table versus a player that is known for being more creative when it comes to the team building.
And I'm really glad you called that out because Ashton's rocking some really interesting Pokemon, Rose. We were talking about weather earlier. Well, there's weather right now. We've got Torkoal on the team. What's really interesting is that it's a Trick Room and a Tailwind team. You see Cresselia, you see Torkoal, you see Iron Hands. That's a really slow core.
Unique.
But then you've got the Tornadus, the Fluttermane, and the Chi-Yu. That's a super fast core. I mean, of course, Fluttermane and Chi-Yu as a lead duo, very impressive. Fluttermane takes advantage of Chi-Yu's ability. And Yuya running very strong Pokemon, like you mentioned. A lot of Japanese players for this tournament have opted to just bring Pokemon with the highest base stats and just the best attacks in the game. And so I think all 6 Pokemon on his side don't really seem to be too surprising. Ashton, of course, really relying on a ton of damage coming out from these attackers like Fluttermane and Chi-Yu. And then you have this slow mode with Cresselia and Torkoal, where Torkoal can just use really powerful fire-type attacks under Trick Room.
Yeah, I'm looking at just how much something like an Eruption would be able to do onto Yuya's team. You know, you have the Chiempao, and if you're able to get Trick Room up, then that's going to be a great way to be able to just try to deal out a ton of damage. But I think what makes this matchup even more interesting is when you take a look at Fluttermane being on both sides. So you have to pay attention a little bit to which one is faster, which one's going to be doing more damage. And these are both choice spec sets.
I'm really glad you called that out because I think the Fluttermane interaction has been such a key integral part of matchups throughout all of Scarlet and Violet.
It's like 70% of the teams.
Exactly, right? And so the fact that it can hit itself for super effective damage is a big deal, right? If you just outspeed your opponent's Fluttermane, get that super effective Shadow Ball off and KO them, well, that's a huge lead that you get. So really glad that you called that out because I think that's going to be a pivotal part in this matchup. To me, what I'm looking at is that Ashton's team has so much just immediate offense. He's running this Choice Specs Fluttermane. He's got Chi-Yu, of course. You've got Sun that you can enable either through Torkoal or through Tornadus setting up Sunny Day. And so my question is, can Yuya really take all that damage? Are you able to actually respond? How are you able to survive potential attacks? And one approach is going for a defensive Terra. You know, his team generally does take a lot of damage from fire-type attacks. Urshifu is the one Pokemon that resists fire-type attack before a Terra, but the thing is then you have Urshifu, and if the sun is up, your Surging Strikes aren't really doing as much damage, right? So Yuya actually has Water Terra on Iron Hands and Amoonguss, and I think both of those could be potential responses to deal with just the pure amount of fire-type damage that Ashton has.
Not only that, but Amoonguss and Iron Hands would be amazing brings if Ashton decides to lean into the Trick Room mode that's available on his side as well. So not only is it great responses from the defensive type, but you also have the ability to maybe withstand some of that damage as Iron Hands is holding the Assault Vest, which that's also been kind of up in the air in terms of how trainers are actually putting together the Iron Hands set.
Totally. I think Ashton can take 2 approaches here. One is just go really offensive, like Flutter Chi-Yu maybe as a lead, and you can go like Torkoal Tornadus in the back. The other is a Trick Room mode where you can go with Iron Hands, Cresselia, Torkoal, and then one of Chi-Yu or Fluttermane to close things out. And I think for Yuya, then the question is, okay, how do you respond to either of those modes, right? I think his Fluttermane is also going to be really important. So let's get started.
We're going to get into the game, and we're going to see Yuya Tada lead off right away with such an offensive pressure. Chiempao right next to the Urshifu, and Ashton's going to have the Fluttermane and the Torkoal to go ahead and set the sun right away for that Fluttermane.
One thing that's critical, of course, is noticing what boost you get from photosynthesis. It is going to be that speed boost. So the Fluttermane right now looking really, really powerful, threatening both of these Pokemon with a potential super effective Fairy-type attack. And so the question on Yuya's end is how do you respond, right? You could potentially detect your Urshifu, take an attack with that Chiempao, and then retaliate back with, for example, a super powerful Ice Volt Crash. And so even though things look really good for Ashton right now, the other question is, can you make sure that you don't just lose both of your Pokemon immediately? The Focus Sash on Chiempao here is a really big deal.
This turn 1 is going to be absolutely critical, as we're going to see Ashton hit the Terra right away, so any Fairy-type attack coming out from the Fluttermane is going to be even extra devastating when it comes down to what type of damage it can do. So a Detect, you called it, Aaron. It's going to be a Detect on the Urshifu just to try to keep it safe. And the Dazzling Gleam then gets a chance to hit into the Chiempao and bring it down to its Focus Sash.
So I think the Terra there helps if you're worried about something like a Sucker Punch plus an Aqua Jet combo from Urshifu, but Yuya decides I'm not going to bother going for it. And so my question now is, how bulky is this Flutter Mane? Do you just feint to an Ice Go Crash, or does Ice Go Crash miss?
No
That's
way!
the downside of running that attack. It of course can miss, and Torkoal is going to get an eruption to finish off the Chien-Pao.
Oh, that is a devastating turn number 1. Chien-Pao was able to bide some time there with the Focus Sash and potentially hit back. But now Yuya's lost a critical Pokemon and has to bring out his third.
Yeah, so I think the play from both players makes a lot of sense on turn 1. Yuya's like, well, I know I have Focus Sash on my Chien-Pao, but my Urshifu, of course, does not have Focus Sash.
Yep.
Do I want to commit a Terra immediately to it just to survive a Dazzling Gleam? What would I do in response to it? You know, survive potentially, but then I just get a Surge and Strikes off, and that's not really that strong either way. That miss, of course, though, super, super critical, and one of the biggest debates in this format is, do you run Ice Go Crash Chien-Pao, or do you run Ice Spinner? Spinner, of course, is 100% accurate, but it does get affected by Rocket Helmet, which is a really common item in this format. So some players opt for Ice Go Crash. It's been really common to get around a Mungus specifically because Focus Sash is such a critical item on Chien-Pao. So Yuya now definitely in a really tricky position, but with that Iron Hands out, you at least have some fake out pressure. I think the tough thing for you is both of these Pokemon have so much offense right now, but Ashton actually is going to make the switch here to conserve the Flutter Mane.
Would have been nice though, because Terra Fairy Flutter Mane, that can get faked out, so
Yeah.
it would have been a nice target for that, but we'll have to see how Yuya's going to respond now, being on the back foot into the second turn, and it's going to be that Terra right away, as it's going to be the Urshifu now detected last turn, ready to fight back.
Yeah, and the idea here is just to deal more damage as well as potentially survive that Dazzling Gleam. So the fake out there did go into the Flutter Mane slot, so it wouldn't have been hit by Dazzling this turn, but now you get more damage from Surging Strikes, but this is what's so awkward. It's Surging Strikes in the sun, and so...
Oh my gosh!
Torkoal definitely taking a little bit less damage than it would be normally. As you can see, it will survive this turn after the 3 hits, and we'll be able to get another attack off here.
It's going to be important just looking at being able to take advantage of the sun while it's still up. And so Ashton deciding to lock into the Flamethrower for this turn, not going for something like the Eruption after taking so much damage.
Yeah, smart not to click Eruption there. Eruption would have put the Torkoal in just kind of an awkward spot. Ashton right now is basically trying to position himself to really sweep with, I think, the final 2 Pokemon, right? We know Flutter Mane's in the back. Torkoal and Tornadus both aren't really going to do too much here, but the idea is to just start chipping away. I think the fact that Ashton was able to get the Terra out from Yuya's end is a really big deal, right? Because now you know, hey, Iron Hands can't Terra. I do just have these really powerful potential Moonblast or Dazzling Gleams. And so I think what Ashton's really looking for is to continue getting some chip damage and not switching your Flutter Mane, not switching your final Pokemon, and just let your opponent take knockouts so that you can bring them out safely.
We're going to see the Tailwind there from the turn. Just as an insurance policy to make sure you're going to be the fastest Pokemon on the field. And a Surging Strikes to finish off that Tornadus, or excuse me, the Torkoal is going to be out of here.
Torkoal now has fainted, and Iron Hands here will be able to get a very powerful, super effective Wild Charge off here into Tornadus. So Yuya does manage to get 2 knockouts, but this is the
Free
scenario.
switches.
Exactly. Free switches into your final 2 Pokemon. The Tailwind is up, the sun is up. It does not get any better than this for Flutter Mane and for that Chiyu that's waiting in the back as well. And normally, to survive against this duel, you kind of want to conserve your Terra, but the thing is that the Terra has already been used, of course, on the Urshifu's end. So I think the main decision that Ashton has to make now is, well, my Flutter Mane is Choice Spec, so I have to make sure that I lock into what I think is the best attack, and with Chiyu, what move do I want to click? Of course, because Chiyu's moves can miss with the Heat Wave and Overheat. And
Not going to take any chances.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't take any chances in this situation.
I was like, let's give him a brief pause, let's see what he's going to do, but that's exactly it. The thing is, Chiyu, of course, can miss, and misses are really, really crucial here, but this Flutter Mane with that Choice Specs, with that Fairy Terra, just able to output so much damage, and of course you get the special defense drop from the Chiyu as well. So that Flamethrower earlier on to the Iron Hands was really critical, but hey, Amoonguss, not a bad Pokemon to bring out right now, especially if you protect the Urshifu, and there it is.
Nice call there. So Amoonguss is going to be able to stem the pressure just a little bit as the Dazzling Gleam does get committed into from the Flutter Mane with that Choice Specs. That is going to be the move that is locked into for the rest of this game number 1. And Amoonguss takes that really nicely, but it's about the Dark Pulse here that the Urshifu is going to be protected from.
Yeah, so that was a nice move. I think really any other play, and you just lose so much, but you can just go Dazzling Gleam Heat Wave now if you want, because that gets around the Rage Powder, right? So that's the scary thing. Of course, Heat Wave can miss, but I think it's just really the best option, and if you don't miss, that Urshifu slot really can just faint immediately. So for Yuya's end, you can consider maybe going for a double protective. Part of the idea right now is, hey, can I actually just call out the sun? Because if so, the damage output gets greatly reduced.
I think there's only 1 or so turns left.
And you still have the Iron Hands in the back to potentially make a pivot in to keep the Urshifu alive for the last few turns.
Yeah, exactly. I think this turn is going to be really, really pivotal because of that detect coming up from Urshifu last turn. That slot is left relatively exposed. One thing to note is that Yu-Gi-Oh's Amoonguss actually does have Protect, so yeah, it's going to go for it, but that means no Protect from Urshifu. Is it going to fake from the Dazzling Heat Wave combo? It's going to be the Aqua Jet coming out first just to get some guaranteed damage, which I think makes a lot of sense. And that is going to do 80 damage to Chiyo, about 2/3.
Yeah, it's still a lot of damage there, but it's Dazzling Gleam turn now for the Flutter Mane, and Urshifu, this is still going to be a ton of damage despite the fact that it is that Water Terra. It's just a knockout.
That's actually really good to know, right? It's choice specs, obviously, and you have the special defense drop from Chiyu, but some players actually do run a ton of special defense investment on Urshifu, so knowing that I think is really critical in itself. One thing that is big now is that you do get the Iron Hands out, so of course you can bring it out. Sun has faded, so being able to stall things out, now you have fake out pressure from the Iron Hands. So the question then is, who do you decide to fake out? We know that the Flutter Mane, your choice specs, it cannot protect, but if you go for a fake out in a Flutter Mane, then you can just get a super effective Heat Wave or Overheat off, right? So Ashton willing to just continue to go with these spread moves, even without the Sun, you're still outputting so much damage. So you here first has to get the right fake out off, right? But the question is, does your Iron Hands even survive this Dazzling Gleam? If you fake out into Chiyu, then might just fake the Dazzling Gleam, and Amoonguss is just never going to win the game from offense. So let's see if you can pull off the comeback right now. I think it's really tricky just with the amount of damage that Ashton has on the side. Oh, okay. Waiting for the miss now from the Chiyu. Is Chiyu able to connect? It is.
It's a double hit right there to knock out the Amoonguss, and Iron Hands gets burned too. That's just insult to injury.
Yeah, the idea there is that I think Ashton basically had a really nice pin where it's like, okay, if you flip a fake out onto Chiyu, and then Dazzling Gleam just knocks out your Iron Hands, most likely, how is your Amoonguss ever going to win that matchup against me? So I think Flutter Mane just did so much damage in this game, and at the end of the day, the Urshifu went for the Water Terra kind of defensively. In the end, we saw that the Flutter still just does so much damage to it anyway. And of course, Surging Strikes was able to do a little bit more damage, but when your best means of offense is Surging Strikes from when the sun is up, it doesn't feel great. But of course, that turn 1 miss was so crucial, right? If you connect with the Champ Power, depends on how much defensive estimate Flutter Mane has, but if you get that knockdown, it's just a completely different game. And so sometimes Pokemon can be like that, where a single miss can just really greatly impact the outcome of a match, and that's just the risk of running Icicle Crash. But I thought Yuya did his best to at least stay in the game. It's just really hard after that turn 1, because Flutter Mane is such a strong Pokemon.
Really nice defensive pivots to at least give Yuya a chance, and even just playing for the Heat Wave miss was the right call in that situation to buy him another turn. But there's a lot of information to be able to take away from that game number 1 as well. We saw a little bit of the interaction for the booster energy, or the photosynthesis there for the Flutter Mane on Ashton's side, so Yuya is able to take that information away, as well as the turn that Urshifu got knocked out. That was a ton of damage, and so both trainers can kind of walk away with that info.
Yeah, I think in terms of adjustments, if you expect Ashton to go with the same combination, Iron Hands as a lead becomes really interesting because it's Water Terra, right? So if you're up against Flutter plus Squircle, you can just go for a Water Terra and it has Heavy Slam, and Ashton's Terra on the Flutter Mane is Fairy, so then you just get a Heavy Slam into that slot. I think the risk there, obviously, is that the Iron Hands is slow, right? And so there's a lot that can potentially take advantage of that. But to me, yeah, I think a defensive Terra from Amoonguss or Hands is what we were talking about going into this game. And I think if you're able to survive and then retaliate back either with a knockout or score, it's a really big deal. That being said, I think Yuya also might feel content to just run it back, saying, okay, if I just hit that Icicle Crash on turn 1, it's a completely different game as well. I think Xianpao is actually a really critical Pokemon in this matchup because it just does so much damage. But of course, that miss was really, really critical. So I'm thinking maybe a different Terra from Yuya's end. I think Flutter Mane could also be a very interesting adjustment as well, and you need to figure out how to basically deal more damage.
I think it would be nice to just have the option for the Urshifu to just get some impact, and that was something that Ashton's pressure made very, very difficult for Yuya to actually try to weave in. But it's time for game number 2, and it's going to be a little bit of an adjustment coming in from Yuya, as it is the Iron Hands and the Xianpao is the lead, and Ashton's running it back.
Yeah, so this is what I was trying to get at with the Iron Hands, where like Urshifu felt really awkward in the beginning of that previous game. Hands now in a really interesting spot, right? It can go for that Water Terra immediately and then just go for that Heavy Slam. This Torkoal moveset we know is Eruption, Flamethrower, Earth Power, and Protect, so you don't really do that much damage with any of those moves to Iron Hands, especially if it goes for that Water Terra. And so I think turn 1 you could consider protecting the Champ House, for example, and then going for a Heavy Slam. Ash's response then is to switch out his Flutter Mane. You see he's committed to a slower mode in the back with Iron Hands and Cresselia, and I like this decision a lot because I think Yuya is probably feeling really pressured by Flutter Mane on turn 1.
You don't want to just let your Flutter Mane drop, as it can be really critical in the very back half of this game. But it is going to be a Terra from Yuya onto the Iron Hands. And so the Water Terra committed so early as the defensive Terra.
But now it's water, and guess what's weak? And what it's weak to Iron Hands on the opposing side, right?
That's
and so
true.
yeah, I think Yuya going for that Protect Heavy Slam play, but Ashton does not get caught by it here. And there's the Heavy Slam. This is a fantastic play by Ashton on turn 1 to get around what would have countered his play in the previous game here. So Torkoal's Eruption, yeah, it's decent, but the main thing here is you bait out on a Terra and you conserve your Flutter Mane in the back, and now that Terra makes Iron Hands weak to this Wild Charge. And so that was a perfect turn 1 from Ashton, and it could have gone really poorly for Ashton if he just stayed with Flutter Mane and tried to go for Fairy Terra Dazzle and win again, but Ashton recognizes I am not going to just lose my Flutter Mane immediately, and does such a fantastic job conserving that. And he's, I think, in excellent shape going into turn 2 now.
Yeah, really smart plays on this turn number 1, and we're going to see the Icicle crash into Torkoal, just not really doing very much damage, despite the fact that it was a critical hit, and you're just so happy to be able to take that, and it's just super effective. Iron Hands! Iron Hands on Iron Hands violence!
It's so weird to see Iron Hands getting one-shot by anything because it's such a broken Pokemon, but to see it get KO'd, okay, we do see a flinch on Torkoal. That's honestly a big deal, a crit and a flinch, because if you don't get the flinch there, then you get the Eruption off, and Champow's just at 1 HP immediately. So that actually, I think, can have a huge impact on this game, and Landers is actually the perfect Pokemon to switch into right now. So Yuya does have a ton of offense on the field right now, right? The combination of the Champow and Landers means that you can just keep going for really, really powerful moves. The main thing that's awkward for the Landers is this is a Choice Scarf set, and so then my question is, what are you actually going to click with the Landorus? You can't go for Flying Terra Blast, and that's normally one of the strongest strengths, so I'm looking at that Stomping Tantrum now, potentially to target the Torkoal slot or the Iron Hand slot, but Ashton actually does have that Cresselia in the back as well, so if you wanted to play towards a Trick Room late game mode where you Dark Terra Cresselia, set up Trick Room, and then go from there.
I think that would be a really stellar play. It's going to be a Terra, though, from Ashton for this turn, and it's going to be the Iron Hands. I love that choice as well, because you were talking about the Stomping Tantrum being a bit of a threat into the Iron Hands for the Torkoal, and I think Torkoal at this point has done a really impressive job. It's the Stomping Tantrum into the Torkoal, though, so it is going to get knocked out for all of its troubles. But that does open the door for Ashton to bring in something else that may serve a little bit better into the offense that Yuya has on his side.
Well, that's a lot of damage. Do we see a flinch? Oh, another critical hit! Okay, but no flinch. It is going to be that Volt Switch. So, yeah, the idea of that turn was, hey, let me make sure that I can survive. Could have gone for something like a Drain Punch there, but I really like the Volt Switch because of that Cresselia in the back. The idea is, hey, now I get Iron Hands and Cresselia out next to each other. I know that your Landorus is locked into that Stomping Tantrum, so you are unable to go for the potential fake. Sorry, you're locked into the Stomping, so you can't target Cresselia, but Ashton actually opting to go for Flutter Mane here, which I think makes a lot of sense as well, because you broke the Focus Sash on the Champao, and you have that Speed Booster, of course, as well. So, right now, one of my questions is, how much does Stomping Tantrum from the Landers actually do to Flutter Mane? Because I think the obvious play from Yuya's end is to just go for a Protect with that Champao right now.
And what's really nice about the Cresselia is it's carrying Ice Beam, which is
Yeah.
one of its attacks, and that's not really typical on so a lot of the Cresselia sets we've seen so far heading into the World Championships, and it's the perfect choice of move to have against a Landorus on the other side. Champao does not want to take any of these attacks, but the Charm into the Champao! Now that's a tech move you don't see every day.
Yeah, you don't see it every day, but Charm here, not really going to do much in the Stomping, does just get that one-hit knockout, so Charm actually into Landers there could have been really cool, but instead, the Ice Beam is going to come out. Does that get the knockout is my question. It is able to secure the KO, okay.
Big KO there. Trade for trade, and now we're going to end up seeing both Ashton and Yuya down to their final 2 Pokemon in this game number 2.
Oh, this is getting really, really tense. The Charm's such a cool attack. It's not a move that we see very frequently.
No.
It ended up not really playing out too much there, but okay, right now I feel like Cresselia is in such good shape. The main thing is, how do you get to a point where you actually get the knockouts, right? Because the main problem is that the Cresselia can't actually really hit the Champao. And so, you want to beat the Champao, you're going to have to utilize that Iron Hands. And so, yeah, the Drain Punch here, of course, is the best way to just heal up here. You could, of course, just go for something like Fake Out onto the Champao. Okay,
I think
oh
you
my
have
goodness!
to.
Goes for
Oh,
Fake
I
Out
think
into
you have
Urshifu.
to. You definitely have to, because you want to be able to, this Urshifu, you want this Iron Hands to be able to survive in this turn, so that you could end up seeing this Cresselia actually get some damage down. And it's going to be right into the Urshifu, but it's not enough to get the knockout.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so the idea is if you get the KO there, it still would have been tricky because then the Champ Hao could just target down the Iron Hands. I think Ashton was just making a really hard read there, basically saying, I think the Champ Hao here, you do not want to get hit by Fake Out or Drain Punch. You have to protect there. Champ Hao's like, nah, I'm not going to. And so Yuya now actually in a really commanding position because you get this guaranteed strikes plus surging strikes into that slot.
Super nice. We're going to see Cresselia get a chance for a bit of HP recovery as it does consume a Citrus Berry. And we're going to see the Urshifu just follow that up. Close combat into the Iron Hands means that Iron Hands doesn't get a chance to actually get any damage down. And so while Cresselia is going to still be on the field, what does it really do at this point to be able to finish off both the Champ Hao and the Urshifu? And going to be the Trick Room, just to try.
Yeah, the thing is, this came out a little too late, and this is one of the awkward things about Cresselia. Cresselia actually often carries Moonblast, and you called out, Rose, this set has the Ice Beam instead, so while helpful against the Landers, you're actually really walled by that Champ Hao, and this Champ Hao has Crunch, which is a move that really has been picking up in usage on it as well, so it felt like there was really good control in the early game from Ashton's end, especially after getting that knockout onto Iron Hands, but the Landers with that stopping tantrum was just so strong, so that's why I was expecting Ashton to maybe bring out his Iron Hands and then go for something like a Fake Out onto the Champ Hao, set up Trick Room, and then go from there, but I think that was the awkward thing in this game for Ashton. It's like if you set up Trick Room, well then Flutter Mane's your last Pokemon, what's that going to do under Trick Room? So you can see how using two distinct modes sometimes can actually be really, really difficult because they don't necessarily synergize well with each other.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's still going to be a bit of a stall out as you are able to get a bit more HP recovery going
so much
for.
Damage.
Yeah, you go for the Lunar Blessing here. You let's give yourself some time to see some more calculations of how much damage you would end up taking, and that's a ton.
I think to me, this game had a couple critical turns. The charm onto Champ Hao was really cool, but imagine if you predicted the Champ Hao to protect Karen and you doubled up onto a Lander slot instead. I think that would have been super strong. I think in this game, Iron Hands had the ability to just go for a Drain Punch potentially onto the Champ Hao slot. I think Ashton was also probably just worried about close combat from the Urshifu getting the knockout onto Iron Hands, and so we had seen Champ Hao protect previously, right? So maybe he's like, okay, well, I just can't feint to a close combat because if close combat knocks me out, I just lose the game immediately, and the idea is if maybe you get the double knockout onto the Urshifu, then it's a 2v1. But the problem is like Cresselia's just never going to really win against that Champ Hao, and so Cresselia just ended up actually, I think, really working against Ashton in this game, and we saw the decision to drop Chiyu, and I think Chiyu would have been a lot stronger. So Ashton wanting to go for it, but never really fully committing to the Trick Room mode, and that made things really difficult for him after the beginning of the game.
Yeah, it's tough when you're trying to get Trick Room set up in the late game.
Yeah.
Usually you do see it as a strategy where you bring it right away, you try to go for maybe a Protect, or just go for the Trick Room right off the bat so you can set up some of your slower sweepers to be able to operate under that. But I still like the three core pieces that Ashton has brought to both games. I think if he can lean into that a little bit more, he will be able to find success, but you also made some fantastic adjustments, and I think leading with the Iron Hands and Champ Hao, like you were saying he might want to try to do, really worked out for him.
Yeah, definitely. I think the main thing is Yuya fought back from a really big deficit, and I think you shouldn't expect to get away with that once again. So what's interesting to me then is, like, do you commit to the same mode once again, right? Because I do think the Water Terra Hands is just the best solution into Flutter Mane early, and I think if you look at Ashton's team, the only way to really hit the Iron Hands with Water Terra, specifically for a lot of damage, is Wild Charge from your own Iron Hands. And so I wouldn't be surprised if Yuya goes for the same combo, but then maybe adjusts, like, the turn 1 play. But I think the Pokemon he brought were really good. Landorus and Champ Hao were just so strong in that previous one. But it's going to be the Champ Hao and the Urshifu here once again.
All right, time for game number 3. Ashton and Yuya are tied up 1-1 in this best of 3. And so the winner here is going to be able to keep an undefeated record heading into Swiss round 3. And you know what? I appreciate that Ashton is starting to think about the Terra right away, just as an option to be able to get through some of this. I honestly like juicy dark type Pokemon. You really like to see that if you got the Flutter Mane out.
Yeah, I think one of the things to think about here is there is that Ghost Terra on Champ Hao, so
that is true.
Yeah, as you can see, Ashton's like, I don't really know about clicking Fake Out on that slot. That's a little bit risky. So here we go. Flutter is going to switch. Ashton recognizing, hey, in game 1 I got pretty lucky. There was that miss on me immediately. Let me just try to play around that and break this Focus Sash first. I really like what he's going for here, because we also know how much that Dazzling Gleam did into the Urshifu, right? So we're going to see the Protect with Champ Hao, though. Okay. The double protect, it is.
Okay. Makes a lot of sense. Just scout out a little bit about what's going on. And if you're able to bait out the Terra, that gives you a huge advantage to be able to move forward through the rest of the turns. But now you've got Torkoal on the field. At least you're going to be able to mitigate some of the damage coming out from that Rapid Strike Urshifu.
One of my questions now is, how much damage can you do into the Iron Hand slot? Can you close combat and go for example, an Ice Core Crash and just double up into that slot and get a knockout? Iron Hands is really bulky here, but it's gonna be the Crunch. So, okay, Crunch plus Surging Strikes and a Torkoal I think would make a lot of sense here. 105 down to 63, that's really close. I think it should get the knockout. Yeah, looks like it will. Okay, so Torkoal's out of the way, but honestly I don't think Torkoal is like the biggest threat in this matchup, so Hands here of course will be able to get an attack off in itself, but the knockout here does accelerate the pace of the battle, and Volt Switch here now does break the Focus Sash on the Champ House, so Flutter can come back, has that speed boost, and is really well positioned to just go for that Dazzling Gleams now.
Fluttermane is in a fantastic position at the moment, and you know, you talk about the Torkoal maybe not being the most pivotal Pokemon in this match, but being able to set the Sun feels so good to be able to get the speed boost here, especially knowing that we did end up seeing Tornadus actually be left at home once again for this game number 3.
Yeah, it's interesting Ashton actually committed, so this made a lot of sense, but there is no Chi-Yu, so yeah, I think Cresselia now is able to at least put on some pressure with the potential Trick Room, but Flutter is going to be in a really, really awkward spot. Because I think the main thing is, like, Flutter's just so essential in this matchup, right? So, are you able to conserve it? Because in the previous game, it went down to one Stomping Tantrum, and that was it. Wasn't able to actually get any damage off, so you need to be able to conserve the Flutter a little bit better.
Well, you did see the Terra preserved as well, though, from Ashton's side, so you at least have the ability to go for something like that Terra Fairy if you want to be able to get that damage out there, and like Urshifu, Champ House, still fantastic targets for this, but I don't think it's the right time yet.
Yeah, one of my questions is, can Urshifu survive that Fairy Terra Dazzling Gleam this time around? Because there's no Chi-Yu on the field, and last time we just saw that one-hit knockout with Chi-Yu, because if you're able to survive, that can be a pretty big deal. You can potentially go for something like a Protect with a Champ House, Surging Strikes into Flutter, and then Aqua Jet Sucker Punch that slot next turn. So let's see, I think this is going to be really big, because that's why I wanted to see Chi-Yu maybe come back into the battle. That special defense drop, I think, could have been pivotal. We'll see how bulky the Urshifu is here.
Okay, it's about time. And this is definitely going to be a pivotal turn looking at the rest of this game number 3. The Terra Fairy Fluttermane. This has been a staple in the meta for these past few seasons. And it's going to be a Terra on the opposing side as well. So looking to be able to preserve that Urshifu, going for the defensive Water Terra type, and make sure that you're not going to take super effective damage from those Fairy type attacks.
I will say one thing about this position is Ashton might actually be able to be... Oh, okay, he's just going to go for Sucker Punch. Oh, wow, that does so much. No Aqua Jet, though, okay.
Alright, so just trying to go for some big damage here as the Dazzling Gleam comes out.
Yeah.
Urshifu takes that much better now as the Champ Pal does go down, leaving the Urshifu just a bit more vulnerable in these next few turns, but Surging Strikes might be that the sun is up, but you're still going to be able to get the knockout here as Fluttermane took a ton of damage there from that Sucker Punch.
Yeah, it was interesting to actually see Chimpao just get knocked out there. I was thinking maybe you could potentially consider switching it out, conserving it, for example. But we're going to take basically a trade here, right? But the thing is, this time around, Iron Hands plus Cresselia is looking a lot stronger in this endgame. However, because of that Terra, Urshifu actually survives the double up, so that's really pivotal. Now you can bring out Iron Hands, you have Fake Out Pressure, and you can go for a Trick Room endgame. And I think Trick Room in this endgame looks a lot stronger, so I think Ashton did a really good job of figuring out how to get Cresselia and Hands out next to each other. But the problem is, there is Landers, there is that guaranteed Intimidate onto the Iron Hands, and you already used your Terra on the Fluttermane as well. So you can go for Fake Out onto one of the two slots here, but whatever you don't Fake Out is going to get really strong guaranteed damage.
At least the sun is still up, but I think you just Fake Out the Landorus here because you're hoping that that Water Terra, like the sun is going to be able to help you just enough through the Water Terra, and maybe you're able to get the Trick Room up for Iron Hands to be able to show off.
Yeah, I think what makes this a little bit hard for Yuya is that the Landorus, we saw faint to that Ice Beam earlier, Ice Beam being such a powerful attack, and so the main thing here is, I agree with you, yeah, Fake Out into Landorus, you don't take a ton of damage from Stomping Tantrum, the sun is still up, so Surging Strikes less, so maybe you go for close combat onto the Iron Hands, basically, but then the next turn, the Cresselia can just go for a Side Shock onto Urshifu, and then Ice Beam into Landorus, and we're actually going to see the Urshifu switch out here, okay.
So the fourth and final is going to be the Iron Hands for Yuya.
And I really like this play because the idea is now you can go for Fake Out onto the Cresselia and then just Stomping Tantrum onto the Iron Hands. I think that was a really smart way to say, okay, you know what, Iron Hands has fake out pressure. I position it well now. And the main thing about this matchup is that like the bulk of the damage really comes from, right now, Cresselia is actually really good into both, but like Hands already has been weakened pretty significantly. So the main thing is that Yuya now has this ability to go for fake out. Yep, I'm gonna target the Cresselia, so now you do not have that Ice Beam, and it's a -1 Drain Punch with just such little damage on what Landers is gonna be able to get such a powerful attack off. There is the Stomping Tantrum from the Landers onto Iron Hands, and that's a one-hit knockout!
What a huge knockout to take here, and Yuya is just one Pokemon away from being able to secure the victory in this best of 3. And all that Cresselia can hope for is just to try to take out the Iron Hands and withstand an attack from the Landers, because you are looking at Stomping Tantrum right now, and that's going to be locked in for the rest of this game.
Yeah, it felt like Ashton basically had to play the game in this way, but Yuya just had to play like countered it perfectly, right? And so it's one of the upsides of using an attack like Stomping Tantrum, really being able to take advantage of that situation, and Ashton just does have a Cresselia, and actually Cresselia in this situation can do enough damage, potentially knock out all these Pokemon, because you do have the super effective Ice Beam and Psyshock, but you kind of have to get every turn correctly right now, and even then, I'm not sure it's enough to actually win the game, especially with Iron Hands being able to potentially cycle in and back out again. So I think it's not 100% over quite yet, but we are just going to see damage start being distributed on the board, and the Iron Hands being faster here is also a problem.
Yeah, you do take about a quarter chunk from that as the Psyshock now into the Iron Hands. It's super effective, but it's not enough this time around. Gonna take another hit from the Psyshock as Landorus is just kind of stuck using Stomping Tantrum at this point, and it's a nice bait, at least on the board.
Yeah, I guess that's what actually makes this really interesting, right? I think if the Urshifu just switched in last turn, this game was 100% over, but because it hasn't, now Landers is in a really awkward spot, right? Like, with Trick Room still being up, you actually maybe still are able to find a comeback here. Like, the question is, like, Landers doesn't want to switch out, right? Because Yuya's looking to conserve this Urshifu for the end game, where then you just click Surging Strikes and go from there. The problem is if you switch Landers out and Urshifu comes in and gets knocked out, that's one of your main damage dealers eliminated immediately, yeah. So, pretty interesting, but I think now, if you're Yuya, there's 2 turns of Trick Room left, so you just go for Wild Charge, you stay in with Landers, you protect with Urshifu in the final turn of Trick Room. Then the question is, does Wild Charge plus Surging Strikes actually do enough to get the knockout? Because if you fall short even by 1 HP, the Landers is in a really awkward spot, so Yuya's like, okay, I don't want to risk that. He is going to switch the Landers out and bring out that Urshifu.
So Urshifu is just so low, though. Anything coming through from this Cresselia is going to be enough to knock it out. But the Drain Punch makes this really interesting, because maybe Iron Hands is now out of range from being able to get Psyshock. He just knocked out here. Cresselia also gets taken down to a Citrus Berry, so now that's HP recovery that's just off the board moving into these next few turns. But here comes the Psyshock into the Iron Hands. Is it going to be enough now? And it is going to get the knockout.
Yeah, okay, well, so this is really interesting, right? Because now Landers is able to come back in. That Intimidate really isn't important. Trick Room still hasn't ended, so you could just Ice Beam the Landorus slot.
Yeah.
But then, of course, if you Ice Beam Landorus and the Urshifu does not protect, then that's just Surging Strikes. It's really close as to whether or not Surging Strikes will KO. So yeah, the debate here is, do you predict the Urshifu is just not going to protect, Psyshock in, and hope to survive 2 potential attacks from the Landorus? The Landorus here does have U-turn. So if you're Yuya, you might think, okay, U-turn plus Surging Strikes, one of those 2 is guaranteed to go off this turn. Maybe you just attack and don't protect either, and that is going to be the case. So now the question is, how much does this turn do into the Cresselia? Because if it does just even less than half and you survive another one, you just face the Ice Beam the next turn. So, oh my goodness.
It's coming down to the wire. It's going to be maybe 1 attack away. You're going to get a big read on the U-turn.
Okay.
It's just very little damage.
Oh, it was 145 at the start of turn, 65.
But Trick Room is over.
Trick Room is over, but I think U-turn will get the knockout here. That first one did 80, and it does get the knockout there. So Cresselia tries its best to pull off the comeback there, but it is not able to. But man, that was close.
That was such an intense game number 3 for this set between 2 incredible players. But Yuya Tada making some smart adjustments in Game 2 and Game 3 to be able to get the victory.
Oh my goodness, Cresselia was doing so much work offensively in that endgame. The problem is that Hands just was eliminated immediately by the fake out and then the Stomping Tantrum in the subsequent turn. So that was such an exhilarating set. I feel like there was so much going on. It was really interesting to see Ashton win with the fast mode in Game 1 and then just not commit to it in Game 2 and 3. I thought Chiyu could have been a really strong bring to come back out in the subsequent games, but I can see what Ashton was going for because his Trick Room mode was a lot stronger in this endgame. The problem was Yuya finding this really unique pin where it's like, okay, you click fake out into Landers, now I get that Stomping Tantrum into your opposing Iron Hands to just get that 1-hit knockout, but I feel like you must have been sweating a little bit in that endgame.
Yeah.
She was like, okay, I got the knockout. It's 3v1. I should be good. And you did play it correctly as well, but that was definitely scary.
Well, especially when your Landers is just stuck on the field,
Yeah.
having to hit a levitate Pokemon with Stomping Tantrum, that doesn't feel super great, but to have the patience to wait for making that pivot at the right time was like so clean and really well done.
One of the things I was thinking about was that Drain Punch, because you called out you want to get that recovery, but in the end it faints the Side Shock anyway, so I'm like, okay, I wonder if you had just Wild Charge in that position, it would have been more damage onto the Cresselia. But, you know, at the end of the day, Yuya knows his stats obviously really well, so he was probably confident, hey, like U-turn plus U-turn or awkward Surging Strikes plus Surging Strikes is enough to knock out the Cresselia. Should be good here anyway. But yeah, that definitely was a little bit scary. I was wondering what would have happened if the turn let the Landorus head just stayed in. If you just Ice Beam that slot immediately, you get that knockout. Then Urshifu comes out. Then there's still a couple turns of Trick Room left, right? So then it's the question of can Urshifu stall out the Trick Room basically quickly enough? Because it's obviously left exposed to Side Shock. And then the other thing is Cresselia in this matchup actually did have Lunar Blessing. So then I was curious, hey, if it's Cresselia versus Iron Hands 1v1, if you knocked out both Landers and Urshifu under Trick Room, I'd expect Cresselia to win that matchup at that point because you just keep healing up from Lunar Blessing.
Yep.
Yeah, so, man, I don't know, that was really nuts. Like, it was a really, really wild set overall, and we saw some really cool adjustments, and even though, like, the Pokemon choices were somewhat similar, the leads were different, and the turn ones were very different from game to game to game.
Yeah, it was so exciting because even in those like final few turns of game number 3, we're just back and forth. We're like, oh no, Ashton's in a great position. But wait, no, Yuya is now also in a good position.
Right.
And just every single turn, it felt like every move ended up changing the pace of the actual match itself. So what an exhilarating way to start off day 1 here.
Yeah, I still keep thinking about that one-hit knockout from Stomping Tantrum on
Yeah.
Iron Hands with the fake out from the previous turn. Like, I thought that, in particular, was just so powerful. And Landorus was one of the Pokemon I expected to have a strong performance in this tournament. I think it feels like maybe I haven't seen as many North American players use it, but I know like the Japanese players just love it. I've seen Clear Amulet, I have seen Assault Vest, I've seen Choice Scarf, and here's actually the Choice Scarf set, right? So like part of the thing about Landorus is that can be a really effective sweeper. So it is kind of surreal to me to see Cresselia and Landorus out in a battle in 2023 instead of 2013. I'm like, oh
I was like, wait a minute, what decade is this?
Yeah, still just really put in a lot of work, but yeah, overall I think that set was just nuts, like, from beginning to end. I was just so curious how things would have played out from the Icicle Crash on turn 1 of game 1 and whether or not that would have been enough to just get a knockout, because it is pretty difficult to train Flutter Mane in a way to actually survive that attack. Like, Icicle Crash is just so powerful, and so I also wonder how things would have played out if Ashton brought, like, Shiyu in the end of game 2 rather than the Cresselia, because I just wasn't able to really utilize the Cresselia mode as effectively, but oh my goodness, what a set.
I'm so happy we get to relive some of those moments because there were a ton.
Yeah.
I mean, right away, like, what a way to kick off the series. Yuya actually missing the Icicle Crash to be able to get the knockout into the Flutter Mane. And I have other, like, many more what-ifs could have happened from this set, even just beyond that.
And then the Iron Hands war in game 2, that beautiful turn 1 switch in to take that heavy slam, and then, man, Wild Charge getting a one-hit knockout on Iron Hands.
I never thought I'd see
such a
today.
wild concept to me, yeah, but is able to get that knockout. And even despite the knockout, Yuya found a really impressive comeback with combination here. And then, of course, Urshifu surviving with a sliver of HP there. That being said, I think in that game, even if Urshifu had fainted, the problem is Chimpao was just always going to beat the Cresselia, and you can just sucker punch into the Iron Hand slot, get the knockout there. So this Cresselia set is so interesting. Like, if it had Moonblast and had, like, triple offense, it would have been even stronger in this matchup, and then I wonder if Ashton would have been able to just, like, really clean up with it. But that's the tough thing about Cresselia, right? You have to find 4 moves on it, and it has, like, 8 to 10 moves that it really likes to use.
Reminds me of the Grimmsnarl problem from last season. Like, what is it going to run? There's so many different options that you can put on it. But I think that Ashton's move choices for the Cresselia make a lot of sense given what we have seen in the field of competition so far. I think Ice Beam is going to pay off dividends moving into the next few matches for him.
Yeah, and it's also really interesting just looking at Yuya's team. That's a point you were making, Rose, earlier, which I thought was really smart, which is that a lot of the Japanese players are really just opting for these kind of meta Pokemon, but how do you use them maybe just more effectively or better than everyone else, right? Like, I think the World Championships that people point out the most when looking at Japanese players is 2015, when 7 of the top 8 players were using the same core Cresselia, Heatran, Amoonguss, Landorus, Kangaskhan, for example. And so, that feels like an early trend. I've seen a lot of Japanese players opting for teams like this, right? I think Amoonguss is also often seen on these comps, or Amoonguss is one of the most pivotal members of these comps. Didn't really actually come out in that matchup, which I thought was interesting, but Yuya might have thought, hey, it's just a little bit too slow pace here, bringing Amoonguss into a matchup with Shiyu and Torkoal, seems like kind of silly, right? The main reason I was interested in it was because of the water terror, and I think being able to survive an attack, Spore into Flutter Mane alone is a really big deal. But I think, yeah, Japan in particular, I feel like really loves Landorus Theory and really loves Amoonguss, and so not really shocked to see that in that previous game, and then the idea of just taking advantage of Xianpao's defense drops and doing all this damage is so huge as well.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting to see what other changes that we end up seeing from teams like this, because I mean, you mentioned Chalk, you mentioned that core that is really kind of shaken up the meta in that year, but people were talking about that too for some of these other teams that we've seen come to the table. A lot of great Pokemon that you can put together in multiple different iterations, and I think this team that Yuya has brought is going to be staple at this tournament.
Absolutely, yeah. I think just even looking at Yuya's team, there's nothing that's really too surprising about it, quite frankly. It's all like, okay, all these 6 Pokemon, we expected them to be popular.
Yeah.
And in those games, there weren't any, like, really feel like crazy ways that Yuya maybe train the Pokemon either. It's just, hey, these are just really, really darn good Pokemon that work super well with each other. Xianpao's an interesting one. They've won the North American International Championships. Alex Gomez won with it, and it's just such an effective Pokemon. I think when I played Regulation V, I'm always like, man, like late game Xianpao with Focus Sash is just so strong. I think the most interesting thing about Xianpao is seeing how it's developed from meta to meta. In Regulation C, for example, people would run Ice Spinner and Sacred Sword and Sucker Punch and Protect. That was kind of the standard set. Now it feels like Yuya set is the more standard one. We've got Icicle Crash and Crunch, exactly. And one of the other things that has really shifted in the meta is before people were using Jolly Xianpao, but in this format, a lot of players I've seen are now running Admin Xianpao to get that little bit of extra damage. And that little bit of extra damage actually goes such a long way in the Xianpao versus Flutter Mane matchup, because a lot of people before were training to survive attacks from Jolly Xianpao, but not Admin Xianpao.
Exactly. And I was even thinking that too. Like, Ice Spinner still does a ton of damage. Icicle Crash, though, like the extra little boost of base power to that move is really nice to secure some.
But the misses are just so stressful. But it's relevant, right? Because we've seen Xianpao use Icicle Crash on stream already, round 1 and round 2. That's like, Xianpao, I think, is a very meta-defining Pokemon. It is very straightforward, generally, in how you use it. Almost everyone just trains max speed, max special attack, and then you run a combination of Ice Spinner, Sucker Punch, Icicle Crash, Protect, for example, Sacred Sword. But at the end of the day, it's like, you know what it's going to do, but it's still just that strong, right? Like, its ability is so good, its speed stat is so good, and it can be used so incredibly effectively, either in the early game to just get knockouts, or in the late game where you've like chipped away at everything, it comes on and just starts getting one-hit KOs onto everything. And I think with Xianpao, being able to like bait out a defensive Terra just makes it so much easier to use in the end game as well, when you know you can just click your ice type moves with more confidence.
I think another thing about Xianpao that we've seen as well, I mean, you talk about Alex Gomez, like winning it with the Dragapult as one of its key partners, but like over the course of the season, it's really been Dragonite Xianpao as like kind of the dynamic duo to be able to pair, and now we're seeing a whole different door open up for different physical attackers that you can put next to it.
Totally, and if you look at Yuya's team, right, you've got the Landorus team and the Urshifu. Right, and like how strong was that combo, right? The idea is it's like these are already really good attackers, and you just deal even more damage. A Flying Terra Blast, I think just one of the strongest flying type moves that you can have in this game, and you combine that with Xianpao dropping defense is so nice. And the Urshifu. Urshifu is just a wild Pokemon, right? Like, when we had previously seen this Pokemon, it was in a Dynamax format, where of course you could make your Pokemon extra big and get a little bit more health. But in this format, Urshifu is like, I'm just gonna attack through your Protect and deal 50% to you. Have fun.
Yeah, no worries at all.
Exactly,
you know? Good luck, have fun to all my competitors out there.
And I think like the thing I'm really getting from these first 2 rounds is, hey, Xianpao was huge, Urshifu was huge. Where do we go from here, basically? And how do people counter it? This is the more standard Urshifu set, but in the previous round, in round 1, Arashi Madi, the 2013 World Champion, had a safety goggles sword stance set. So that's what I love about the innovation. A lot of people are using these Pokemon, but how differently are they using it?
Kind of like the Iron Hands conundrum that we saw as well. Some players actually dropping the Assault Vest to be able to play the sword stance set.
Yep, exactly.
And even just like I saw Citrus Berry one time or another. It's really cool to be able to see those unique choices, and it's really paying off.
Yeah, and I'm just glad we saw weather already. We were talking about it going into this round. We had the sun come out from Ashton's End, and we saw a lot of the different modes, right? He committed to the Tornadus Tailwind mode in Game 1, Game 2, like Cresselia came out, didn't really set up Trick Room super effectively, and then Game 3, Cresselia almost actually pulled off this crazy comeback, which was absolutely wild. So, yeah, I think, like, Cresselia looked really good in terms of offense in that matchup, but I think one of its fundamental problems is Xianpao can be, like, you can't hit Xianpao if you don't have the Move Blast, and Xianpao can crunch you, and, like, that dynamic makes things really awkward. One of the interesting things about that last matchup was that we didn't actually see Cresselia click Lunar Blessing very much at all. Like, I think it maybe did it in the end of Game 2, but it wasn't really relevant. And I think Lunar Blessing is a really interesting move because it's so strong, right? It heals you, it heals your partner. But to me, one of the hardest things about using Cresselia is actually finding opportunities where Lunar Blessing like makes a big enough difference. Because often it's like maybe your Pokemon are already at full HP, and then like you just take so much damage where the first Lunar Blessing after doesn't really help. And so that's one of my questions. Like, can anyone in this tournament really figure out how to use Lunar Blessing as effectively as possible? And I think it's not as easy as you may think it is.
No, I mean, when you looked at it right away, you said, oh my gosh, Cresselia with Lunar Blessing next to Ursaluna, like that's going to be absolutely wild. How do you take it down at this point? And yeah, like just seeing how top players are using it right now, it is much harder to weave in any sort of setup. Even Pollen Puffamoongus, I felt like was Pokemon that ended up like having a lot of prominence. Maybe we get to see a little bit more of that heading into the rest of the weekend. But we do have our interview ready to go, so let's go ahead and hit over to the stage, talk to Yuya.
Thank you, Rosemary and Aaron. I am joined by the winner of that amazing round 2 set, Yuya Tada. Huge congratulations. That game 3 was very, very intense. Can you talk us through your thoughts towards the end of that game 3, how you were feeling in that match against Ashton?
Yeah, this was a very close game. Ashton. Yeah, so I must read Ashton's moves. So I'm very lucky to win this match.
Yes, it was very intense at the end of that game. Were you sure you were going to get the KO on Cresselia with U-turn?
Yeah, is it Cresselia?
Oh, were you confident you were going to KO Cresselia?
I thought I can beat Cresselia, but a little bit nervous for it, yeah.
It's always that way. Yeah. Let's dial back to game 1. You missed an Icicle Crash. Yeah. How important was that to losing game 1?
Yeah. After miss, my priority is to understand Ashton's Pokemon stats. Yeah. So I threw away game 1. Yeah.
And you came back very strong in game 2. I want to talk about some of your Pokemon choices. Urshifu and Chien-Pao are very, very strong together. Was that something that you thought about putting them into your team? Do you like the two of them together?
And Chien-Pao's Ice Cream Crush is very offensive move because, in turn 1, I use Fringe to Toko, So, and Usin is very powerful with Chien-Pao. So, this combination is very good, I think,
I think that's a great identification by you. They work so well together, and we saw you play them really well. My last question for you. Obviously, you're here at the World Championships. How does it feel? Are you ready to try and get that title?
Yeah, in World Championships, in all year when I participate in, always I move to day 2, so 100% I will move to day 2 4 times. Yeah.
I love that confidence, and I know your friends are out there as well rooting for you. There's people on the broadcast rooting for you. Best of luck in the competition. We'll be keeping an eye on you. Of course, Pokemon trainers, there's more Pokemon action coming, so we're going to throw it back to the casters. Don't go anywhere.
Thank you so much, Lou, and congratulations to Yuya once again for such a victory over a very strong North American player. Things are really heating up here at the World Championships, and it's honestly a surprise to see where some of our top players are falling at the moment.
I was looking at the rounds and how the players were doing after this last round, and Worlds is just so intense. Like, there's so many good players that are at 1-1 and 0-2, including 2 previous world champions. I believe Eduardo Cunha, the defending world champion, is 0-2 to start. Wolf Blick, 2016 world champion, also 0-2. But at the end of the day, it's about getting to those 5 wins. So even if you've lost your first 2 games, if you win your next 5, you're still good. When Naoto won Worlds in 2019, in day 2, I believe he started 0-2 or 1-2 and then literally won every single game afterwards from Swiss as well as
It was a hero run, for sure.
It was, right? So at the end of the day, it's like about just making sure that you have your mental composure, and a lot of the game's best players those, especially if you want to be world champion, you have to be able to stay composed even with losses, right? And so that's what I think makes Worlds so interesting. But of course, for those players that are 2-0, this is a smaller day one. We only have 7 rounds. So if you're 2-0, you're like, okay, I just need 3 more wins out of 5. You know, that feels really doable. You got to just take it a round at a time and just keep going.
But it's still intense at that point too. 'cause
Every
you're
day,
like,
it's
yeah.
Worlds. It's like, I was like, oh my goodness. Every time we look at these pairings and even just that last round, it's once again, it's like these are all matches that I'm like, oh, this could easily be a finals of a major tournament.
Right?
And now we get to see the culmination of it, and that's why I love being at this tournament.
Same. I mean, talk about your experience though, Aaron. You not only ended up qualifying to compete at this World Championships, but you've been at those tables before. So what is that pressure really like for the trainers that are competing?
It's so stressful. I think especially each win obviously feels great, right? But you need to string together so many wins. So I feel like each win is more of a sigh of relief, like, oh, like I'm still in it. But each loss, you're like, oh my goodness, like I'm just getting closer and closer to elimination. And once it gets to that second loss in this format, that's when things are so stressful because you're like, if anything goes wrong, I'm out, and that's it. But I think that also, you know, is able to really build up players, right? And those are players that thrive under the pressure and are able to, like, really, I think, zone in and lock in on it. So at the end of the day, I think the main thing I always say about these tournaments is that it's a long tournament. Each round is its own. Even if you started 5-0, you can lose 3 games in a row. Or I guess in this tournament, since we only have 7 rounds, if you start 4-0, you could lose 3 in a row and you won't advance on. If you are 0-2, you could win 5 in a row and move on, right? So it's all about just making sure that you treat each round as its own and don't let it impact you. But of course, some players I think do a really good job of riding the wave, riding the momentum, and really saying, oh my gosh, I feel so confident right now. I'm playing lights out. I'm just going to keep it up. And I think there are some players where the pressure really gets to you. And I know when I was competing at Worlds, especially when I was younger, especially when I came in expecting to do well and like the first few rounds didn't go my way, like my mental game just really blew up. And so I think that's one of the toughest things about playing in this game. It's a long day and you have to have so much mental endurance.
I really love that insight, so thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for asking.
Yeah, of course. Well, that's going to do it for Swiss round number 2 here at the Pokemon World Championships. We're going to go ahead and toss it over to the lounge, though, because we've got an exciting game show for you.
That's right. Exciting game show indeed. The games that everyone showed up to watch today, I'm sure. We are going to try to identify some Pokemon by looking at their Pokedex entries. Before we do, though, I think we should go down the line, introduce yourself again to the people at home, and tell them what your specialty is when it comes to knowing things about Pokemon in the Pokedex. Right? Let's start over here.
Well, for anybody who doesn't know, I'm a 3-time world champion, so I am going to win this game because I have the world champ difference. That's all that needs to be said.
Okay, world champ.
How do I follow that? I don't have a world champ difference. But I'm Lou. I am Team Gastrodon. So if Gastrodon appears, I hope to get that one right. And yeah, I think definitely Gastrodon. That's my Pokedex skill.
I feel like usually when I see your name, I see Gastrodon like very soon.
We are one in the same, Anna. One in the same.
I'm Lee. I don't also have the world champ difference, so that's at a disadvantage. Pokedex speciality. I was a student of Professor Orc, so I'm gonna have that. So Kanto Dex, I should be fine.
You're showing your age,
outside of that. Yeah,
All right.
no, very old.
Awesome. All right. Will you be rooting for Gastrodon, the world champ, or Professor Oak's student? Let's find out now. All right, let's get our first prompt. Let's find out. Who do we identify? It's one of the kinds of Pokemon with electric cheek pouches. It shoots charges from its tail.
Looking at me? Okay, I'll go first. Well, as a world champion, the only Pokemon I can think of here is another world champion Pokemon. This time, shout out to Sajin. I think this is Pachirisu.
Okay.
I mean, it looks like Pikachu, but I feel like that's
too obvious.
False, yeah, it's a false sense of security. And it says one of the kinds of Pokemon, and Pikachu was the original.
That's true.
So,
but that could be misleading.
It could be. Anything can happen on this show. I think, yeah, it could be Pachirisu. Am I allowed to say the same, or do I have to pick different?
No, you can pick the same one.
I'm going to go Pachirisu.
All right.
I also think it's Pachirisu.
Okay, just in case, I will go for Pikachu. Just so, you know, we don't get caught by the, like, gotcha there. All right, who is it? Is it Pachirisu? Is it Pikachu? Is it someone else?
It could be Deden.
Oh, it's Pachirisu! Good job. Pikachu is on the graphic, though, so I feel like we were covered all around. Yeah. Good job. Especially world champ, obviously, since you said it with a world champion in your answer, so yeah. Let's get our next prompt. Let's find out. Who are we looking for next? It can fly in spite of its big and bulky physique. It circles the globe in just 16 hours.
Let's start with Lee on this one.
Yeah.
I think it's Dragonite.
Dragonite. Okay.
I think
That
it's
makes
Dragonite.
sense.
I was thinking dragon. It's the messenger, isn't it?
Yeah, the messenger.
It's
Pokemon.
either that. It's got to be a dragon. So it could be Salamence maybe, but I think Dragonite because it's bulky, and I'm going Dragonite.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's Dragonite too. Just, it's an OG, so I think I've got to go with Dragonite. Salamence, I was thinking it could be Salamence. Like, it is a big Pokemon. It takes
True.
max damage from Heavy Slam and Low Kick, I think. So it's a good guess, but I think I'm going Dragonite here.
It is like the definition of bulky, right? Like what do we think bulky means? I feel like Dragonite shows bulk. All right, let's
for
find
sure.
out. Is Dragonite the bulky boy? Yes, you guys are good. You guys are really killing it. Unanimously right answers so far. All right, let's keep moving on. Will we keep our perfect record? Will we become the world champions of who's that Pokedex? It stops eating only to sleep. It doesn't feel full unless it eats nearly 900 pounds a day.
I'm glad it's this one when we're starting with me,
Yeah.
but I'm pretty sure it's Snorlax.
Yeah?
Gotta be Snorlax.
Seems
Yeah.
reasonable. Anyone? Any
Yeah, this
dissenters?
is my favorite Pokemon, so
Aw.
I'm also going
Oh,
Snorlax.
you kind of have like a Snorlax color scheme going today too. You have the blue and the white,
That's true.
like a light tummy, you know? Yeah.
I hope I don't have the tummy of Snorlax.
No, no.
Okay, good.
No, but just, it's all about the Pokebound, right?
The aesthetic.
Yeah. hmm Any dissent here?
No.
No?
Snorlax all the
All
way.
right.
Yeah.
Snorlax, our big sleepy boy. Is that the answer?
Oh yeah.
Aw, that's a cute
Okay,
picture of
great.
one. Look at him eating those fruits.
He's eating his 900 pounds
That's great.
of fruit.
Good for him.
Mm-hmm.
All
I
right,
love Snorlax. He's so cute.
we're on a roll. This is easy peasy. What appears to be an iron helmet is actually hardened hair. This Pokemon lives for the thrill of battle. I saw this one on the Go stream earlier, so they already
Really?
answered this one.
Oh, so you already know the
Yeah.
answer.
Yeah.
I think I'm gonna go with King Gambit here.
King
He's got a
Gambit.
helmet. He's got some hair. I think it's even a chair.
He does carry his own chair.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going with King Gambit here.
All right.
I mean, I first thought of a Lowland Dugtrio, just because of the word hair, but it doesn't look like a helmet. It's more a beach look. Yeah, it could be King Gambit. I'm stealing that one. I'm going to be shameless about it.
That's
Stealing
fine.
King Gambit.
That's fine.
Shamelessly stealing. King Gambit.
So far, your guys' unanimous guesses have been really good. So let's find out. Is it King Gambit?
Oh, you shouldn't have copied me.
You're over there saying you're the world champ. I
Yeah.
mean,
Well, that was over 10 years ago, so
I feel like this is on you, is what I'm saying.
I'll take the fall for
Okay.
that. It's okay.
It's the most terrifying cat Pokemon.
Yeah.
It's terrifying.
Also, it's like the hat is kind of over the eyes, the hair hat.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. Good to know. Good to know that that's hair. I think we have a few more. Let's see if we can get some redemption after that last one. On sunny days, it flies freely through the sky and blends into the clouds. It sings in a beautiful soprano. I mean, blending into the clouds feels like...
I think I know. I'm gonna take
Yeah?
it, I guess.
Okay, go for it.
Altaria.
Yeah, I think so.
I was going to say Swablu,
Oh yeah.
And then-
could be.
yeah.
Yeah.
but then Altaria is the evolution, so we'll go with that.
Yeah, that's a good one. Now that you say it, I think that's probably right.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna go with Ho-Oh.
Oh, that is a good
Oh,
one.
that's good.
Yeah.
Blending into the clouds, you think?
Yeah, in the very first episode, he was
Yeah.
easy to miss,
Okay.
but Ash saw it.
And
Okay.
rainbows are in
All
the
right.
clouds.
Let's
so that
find
could
out.
work.
Who is it that's blending into the clouds and flying
think it sings,
freely and
though.
singing in a soprano?
Yeah,
Altaria.
It was the cloud bit. The clouds.
Yes. Mhm. Yes. Our cloudy bird. All right. Well, that is the last one. I feel like we did very well. There was only one that none of us got right. How do you feel about that Ho-Oh guess?
I just
No.
didn't want to steal the same answer. I thought I'd do something a little different.
Yeah.
But yeah, as soon as you said Altaria, it sounded like the right answer. But it started out strong. We got what, 2 right, and then it just went downhill from there. Kind of like
Yeah.
my VGC career. So
I feel like we got like a solid B+. I feel like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I will give that to us. Now, we had some fun here, but what's really fun is happening out there. Tell me about your Worlds experience so far. Lee, let's start with you. What's been fun so far?
Oh, just the matches so far have been amazing. You know, the first round, Arash and Naoto, it's just incredible game. Two former world champions going up against each other.
Wow.
And the match, I feel, didn't disappoint as well. Sometimes it can be really a bit back and forth. No one wants to really kind of put themselves in a position where it could kind of compromise their kind of win position, but I think they just both went all out. And the way that Arash kind of dominated that match with the Urshifu, with that safety goggles item, I think, yeah, it was really nice to see. So far, that's probably been my favourite part of today.
That's awesome. What about you, Lou?
Yeah, I'd have to agree that match was legendary. It was awesome. And I think being someone who grew up watching these Titans play, you know, watching yourself, watching Arash win Worlds, all these amazing players, being able to be in a position where you're casting over them with potential history, I think is a really, really privileged position to be in. So that's been a really amazing start, and it's only going to go up from there. So I'm having a great time.
Absolutely.
I have to say, with Worlds being in Japan for the first time in, 15 years, like, you can see just how epic it looks, but when you actually go up on stage, I was fortunate enough to actually go walk up on stage and see what that was like, but I can just imagine the players, you know, walking out from that dojo onto the stage with the whole setup there. It must be surreal being a player on stage. So I just love the whole setup here.
Surreal is the word for it. It's wild. It kind of feels like either you're in a theme park or you like walked into an anime or something. It's just larger than life and yet like real life size. It's so cool. And that big drum with the moving image of Worlds on the front. Also, did you guys catch the drums at the beginning in the opening ceremony?
It was amazing.
I was dancing back here backstage, getting ready to go on. It was so much fun. I've actually been mostly out on the floor meeting people. There are so many people from all over the world here, and I'm always impressed by the way that the community comes together around something they all have in common. What has it been like community-wise for you here? I mean, mostly you've maybe been interacting backstage with casters and things, but how has community at Worlds been so far?
It's been amazing. I mean, I had the opportunity just now to go out on the floor and kind of mix in with some of the VG players that are in the middle of matches and things. So that was really nice, seeing some familiar faces and meeting some new ones as well. So it's really great. And like you say, there's representation from so many different regions around the world. It is just one of a kind event, you know, and that's what is the pinnacle of the whole season. I think it's just amazing to be here, and you know, we're only at the start of the weekend, so I'm very excited to see how the rest of the weekend plays out.
For me, it's the junior and seniors out there as well. Like, we were wandering around, and what they've got is a beautiful setup where they've got some screens, so some of the matches on the rows can be viewed by spectators.
Oh, cool.
So, you know, these young kids' families are able to actively watch their matches as well and cheer for them, and that kind of sense of community where you've got the younger generations being supported by older generations as well. You know, there's some masters out there who are coaches of some of these kids. Being able to actually root for them around is just, it's an amazing atmosphere and very wholesome.
That's so cool.
Yeah, I was going to say, just the diversity that we have here from all kinds of different countries, all the different age range of players competing here, and just spectating. I mean, it's surreal, honestly, seeing just the diversity that we have here. Everybody's a Pokemon fan, but everybody's coming from different walks of life, different backgrounds, and it's really nice to actually get to talk to some of the players just, you know, from all their different backgrounds. I talked to a few, you know, walking in here, took a few pictures. It's actually surprising, because usually when I come to these events, I get stopped for pictures a lot, but I'm pretty anonymous this year. It feels pretty different, so I like that.
I love the age range we see, like you were saying too. It's so fun to see these young kids being supported by people who know what it was like to play as young kids and helping each other kind of grow up in this community way. It's so fun to watch. And they are here, of course, to watch more matches. And I think we do have that for you coming up very soon. Let's see. Let's go back to our casters right now.
Thank you so much, guys. Fantastic work on Who's That Pokedex. Scott, how would you rate Ray's attempts? He's just come back after a while, and honestly, I think he let himself down a little bit there.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I'd love to hear Ho-Oh singing the soprano up in the clouds, but you know, isn't it great to have Ray back? Like I said, I think he's a little more quick-witted than I remember him being. He's pretty funny out there.
Yeah, he's done better. He's the boy done good. Obviously, taking that short trip to join us, we're very grateful for that. But we are going to start focusing back up on the tournament at hand. Round 3 coming up. We've obviously gone 1 and 2 pretty promptly. 2 fantastic games to start off our tournament. What are you expecting round 3? Are we going to get that variety, the something new that you were talking about earlier? Or are we sticking with the something borrowed and maybe something blue?
Well, I mean, I have no idea what this next match could be, but you know, I guess if I just predict based on nothing, I think we might have a little fun next round.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely options, right? And Regulation D has so many varied teams that you can play. You really do have one of the widest pools we've had all year since we've been playing it in Scarlet and Violet, and it feels like one of those formats that is very genuine and very available for somebody at Worlds to come up with something a little bit different, something that maybe isn't top of the ladder, or take top of the ladder, adapt it, one or two Pokemon, one or two items. You know, you can't hide them anymore, but at least you can play around them a little bit differently, and then really bring something to the fore that could win you the tournament from maybe a rockier start, maybe an 0-2, you get to surprise your next 5 opponents, and you get to go to day 2, and then of course just very briefly win the tournament.
Yeah, and that's a good thing to remember too. We often talk about needing an X2 record to move on and forget to solve for X for you. It is only 7 rounds today, so trainers who get those 5 wins will move on. And yeah, I think it'll be funny to see how people get there. Where we are going to see a lot of those same Pokemon a little bit, but I've been kind of surprised looking at the players who have done well in the standings, where it does kind of seem like the trainers with a little bit of wonkier teams are the ones that are rising up early rather than rising up late. Which I always love to see, right? Where, especially deep in the tournament, we often kind of see similar cores showing up. So it's great that early on, not only is the trend not that maybe that sort of team is what's coming out on top, but that maybe throughout the rest of today and Friday and day 1 here, as players try to earn those final spots in Saturday play, that we're going to see some things that maybe we didn't expect to.
Yeah, you say wonky, I say creative. But of course, when you rise to the top like that, you do put a target on your back. And do you think, I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, I don't want to jump forward, but do you think looking at day 2 already, do you think people are going to be changing their minds or maybe making those adaptations when they start seeing some of these creative, wonky, unique teams make it to the top? Because those players can sit down all day, hopefully they're sat behind us, taking in the event, having a grand old time. But would you be the kind of player, as somebody who has, of course, played at this level, to make that change just before they go into a tournament?
Yeah, I think it'd be a huge mistake for most players. I mean, unless you were radically off on the metagame, which I doubt anybody really is. For the most part, I think we're kind of getting what we expected to see. Maybe if there's something you see that does really well, I have no answer to this at all, maybe change things up a little bit. But I think it's a big risk to kind of overreact at the last moment. But yeah, I mean, once again, maybe we'll be surprised. Right? We still have 5 more rounds to play today, and perhaps you have the strangest teams kind of rise to the top. Then maybe you start thinking oh no, all those teams that looked a lot like my team weren't doing so well. Maybe at that point, yeah, you make a few tweaks.
Yeah, there's definitely time to be creative, but I think that time was probably a week ago. Maybe not tonight, with a very limited window to be able to get that team submission in as well. But it does create an interesting tournament, I think. Being able to see the difference between day 1 and 2 is always very fun. But day 1, let's stick with that. If you manage to go 0-2, right, it's not a great start. But how do you think, what makes a player who is going to be able to bring it around, turn it around, and need to just go essentially 100% win rate for the rest of the day? In this case, it's actually easier than previous years, where it is just going to be the 5 rounds. That is mathematically less than 6, so a little bit easier. But do you think, it takes a certain type of trainer or somebody, who has a little more about them than maybe somebody whose first year it is at Worlds?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be interesting to watch this out. There's actually a lot of really good players at 0 and 2. I was a little surprised. Wolf's one that really stands out in particular. It's a little shocking to see him down there, but I think we've seen a lot of these top trainers manage to pull this off the regional level since we got those guaranteed. If you get the 2 loss record, you move on sort of deals. To me, a couple of things that kind of stood out with those players. It does tend to be the more experienced folks where they stay calm, they remember how they practice, what their game plan was. Just take it 1 game at a time. I've been surprised. I have a few friends who I feel like they wind up 1 and 2 at every tournament, but still wind up in cut, where they kind of stuck to it really well. And I think it's important to keep in mind in this particular situation that, as much as your season is on the line, it also doesn't matter as much in a normal tournament what record you started out at, because as long as you get to day 2, nothing else that happened today matters, right? There's no advantage if you went 5-0 or 5-2. All it does is get you that ticket in tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think it's a good time not to freak out. If you're good enough to go deep tomorrow, you're good enough to win 5 in a row today, right? And hey, all these trainers are great players. That's why they got here to begin with. They qualified over the course of the season. So I hope no one's freaking out too much. And hey, the worst thing that happens is you get to have a great weekend in Japan. I think that if ever there was a good time maybe to mess it up a little bit, I don't think anyone's going to be too disappointed about the time they spent out here.
Yeah, what a horrible consolation prize is extra time to explore Yokohama, potentially explore somewhere like Tokyo as well. I mean, this has got to be the craziest Worlds venue we've ever been to, right? Not knocking some of the other cities, big fan of some of the places we've been, but this is a special one, and this one, I think, has brought a lot of trainers out who maybe, towards the end of the season, some other trainers may not have been feeling it, but when you see the prize at the end of the year is you get to go and compete in Japan, you all of a sudden start feeling it a whole lot more, and I think that's been a big factor this year. But to a point you made earlier, if you want to win the whole tournament, if you want to be that player who, at the end of Sunday, is standing on our stage, being able to lift that trophy, you really do have to beat whoever's in front of you, right? And you can't get in your mind about, oh no, I'm worried about maybe running into this player at 4-2 and not being able to make it in. Like, if you want to be, and if you are serious enough about potentially being the world champion, you really do need to be able to take down anyone in front of you. And I think a player who could do, an 0-2 to 5-2, make it all the way through, that kind of run, that's such a great stead actually for day number 2. Because like you say, we all go in at the same point. Everyone is on a clean record, nothing else to do. Being able to take that kind of mentality that you are able to bounce back is going to be huge.
Yeah, I think it might be, an advantage would be a big stretch. But I think coming from day one might help a little bit more in this year than past years. In the past, in the Video Game Championships, in the Masters Division, only one player has ever won from day one, which was Wolf in 2016. But I do think it helps a little bit more this year to get those reps because this is the first tournament we're having in this format, right? And, there's been lots of grassroots events where players have been practicing. They've been playing on the ladder, they've been playing in their team building groups, but getting that real experience playing, in an actual tournament hall against people who, maybe you're friends, but, your rivals more so in this case, and kind of just getting that confidence, I think it make a big difference. Where the day 2 players, they've had great performances to get here, but I think it's gonna be a little bit nerve-wracking to be at day 2 of Worlds and then start playing immediately in a new format for the first time. Where building confidence here, especially play those 7 rounds, maybe grind it out, like really get familiar with your team. I doubt too many people who make it through day 1 to day 2 are going to choose to change their teams, even though they're allowed to. So I'll be curious. I think it's always a really tough road coming from day 1, but I do think that players who pull it off this year might have a little bit better of a chance than normal just because of the unique situations around this particular World Championships.
So how do you feel about Regulation D being the Worlds format, right? Because being able to change it up just before Worlds, we've seen it in the trading card game. They've done it. This is not new. This is not some crazy idea that we had just to make this Worlds more fun. It's just time for that rotation, and it just so landed between, for us, obviously North America International Championships and Worlds. Now, being able to drop that big change is something that a lot of players are going to adapt to. But do you think there are going to be maybe some newer faces? We've been in Regulation C back in the North America and Europe for, I'd say, a fair while. Do you think that the change of Regulation C, where a lot of players did punch that ticket, they were able to get the Worlds invite, do you think that there's maybe somebody who is going to be able to say, okay, well, I got my invite in A or B, I kind of chilled during Regulation C, and now D, this whole new format, they're going to be able to step up? I mean, it's a big change.
Yeah, I think it could be. And I think what's really exciting to me about it is it sort of rewards a little different skill set that we normally see in the Video Game Championships. I know some of the well, actually, almost everyone I talked to about TCG doing this in the past to kind of get a feel for what we were in store for, we're pretty high on what happened in the trading card game. I think what's really cool about it, especially if you look back to last season, where the players who really innovated the best teams in the format, maybe Edu excluded with his Worlds team, tended not to get to do that well at Worlds because they were playing against their own team so much, right? Where they had to kind of get punished by their own success. Rinya playing against the Rinya Sun team so much really stood out as kind of a capstone of the way that the World Championships of last year worked. I think this year's pretty cool where, the players who are really good at team building, maybe who figure out the right composition of Pokemon really get rewarded in a way that we don't normally see in the video game. I think it'll be cool, where I think it's a skill set that experienced players really respect because it is so hard, especially in an unknown format, to figure out what the best team is and what will suit you, what will suit the metagame. So I'd really like to see, a player who's solved the puzzle the best get rewarded with the World Championships. And I think there's never been a higher likelihood that will happen than this season.
I think, honestly, a wealth of experience in how to build teams, how to understand your own play style. I think that's a huge factor in team building that we don't or probably should talk about more. it really can be a big factor here. And talking to some of the guys backstage, you know, we've kind of all had our own theories on it. But I think players from previous years and previous eras sort of have the upper hand here in a very minor upper hand. I don't think it's a massive advantage. But I think back to some of our previous formats, maybe formats you and I would remember, where it feels a little bit similar, right? You've got this huge pool of Pokemon to be able to pull from, and it's not insignificant. I know there's more coming in future, but this is obviously one of the biggest pools we've ever had. And being able to dive into that and assess every single Pokemon, where it fits, build a core. Like, we know a lot of people coming into this tournament, alright, Fluttermane is an incredible Pokemon. Cool, that is a great starting point. Personally, I think a Moongus fits nearly every team. But what do you fill those remaining 4 gaps with, for example? Yeah, Urshifu does a lot, but there's so much creativity, and being able to understand how that can impact your team and your tournament run is absolutely massive. So I think maybe a player from a slightly older era could do it. Honestly, our first game of the day kind of supports my theory, right? Maybe this is really bad science, and I threw a hypothesis out, ran 2 tests, and now I'm feeling like a king. But, you know, thinking about 2013 was a very unique format where we had a huge amount of Pokemon. That's obviously where Arash won his World Championships. And now to play things a little bit differently in 2019, where, because of the rules, I think the metagame was a little more focused in. But we saw Arash able to come out on top in that one.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially an advantage that sort of player can have too is it kind of just cut down the prep time a little bit, where you know, there's like a lot of stages of getting used to a new format. One of them is kind of just getting comfortable with the Pokemon. I do think that one of the challenges of this format is that, you know, the Heatran in this format doesn't play quite like the Heatrans of the past years. You know, Cresselia with that, you know, the Lunar Blessing, very different Pokemon than it was before. Well, maybe not very different Pokemon, but it's some very different tricks than it had before. You know, the genies, as players often call them, you know, using a lot of different moves we haven't seen in the past. And I think that, you know, having to adjust to the new Pokemon, mixed with the old Pokemon, and having to try to solve the metagame all at once. You know, there's a lot of steps, right? So at least that experience of this old Pokemon, I think, kind of like cuts it down a little bit, lets you get to the end a little bit faster to the point where you're testing team cores. Because yeah, I think we are going to see a lot of those older Pokemon, especially because I think last year's experience is sort of misleading in a way, right? Because the way Pokemon worked in a game that had Dynamax versus any other format was very different, right? So like Regieleki is a great example, right? Where right now it looks like it was a little bit of a bait, where Regieleki, one of the most important Pokemon last season, this year, probably not even the best Pokemon of its own legendary grouping, right? Where it's Regidrago, who we have also not seen yet, who's probably risen up in that group. And yeah, I think being able to identify that sort of thing is interesting. Even with the Pokemon that, you know, we're new in the last generation, right? You know, this year's Rillaboom, this year's Urshifu, both really strong but don't play quite like last year. So I think getting to cut corners a little bit with Pokemon players are familiar with, like Landorus, like Cresselia, you know, every little bit counts when it was just such a marathon to try to get ready for this tournament.
Landorus Cresselia, a bit of a classic really, and I'm not ashamed to say that I'm enjoying this already. The other one, as we saw at the top of the day, I am a Genie apologist. New is not always better, and I think the classic trio just provides so much that those players from previous formats know all about. Speaking of players, we are going to start heading towards round number 3. So we're going to be able to take a little look at what we have coming up in this one. We're going to reveal our stream match, along with what will be going on out in the field. Our stream match, of course, is the one at the top. Irish Akos versus Yuto Mizoi. Pretty excited to see that one. Those are the wonky teams that you referred to earlier, but I think getting a showcase of them will be very important. Also out in the field, there's so many other great games. It's a little bit heartbreaking that we can't bring all of them to you, but we do our best to pick one that's going to be exciting every round. Marco Martinez versus Nick Navarre, player, particularly Nick, having a fantastic season, really consistent across the board. Giovanni Costa versus Jody Azzarelli. Jody, of course, a former Worlds runner-up, and Giovanni, a player I think's taken a little bit of time off, but coming back with an absolute vengeance, starting off 2-0. Abdullah Moyhaddin versus Luca Traeger. Very exciting to see a lot of North American players starting out strong, right? Being able to take that regionals experience. I mean, we had 10 regionals this year, and being able to learn all of that. Shiliang Tang versus Nora Bowman out in the field as well. And rounding out our key matches will be Liam Gilbert versus Yuta Takahashi. So a lot of names out there to be watching, a lot of names here. You know, half of them are going to be 3-0 at the end of this round. That is just how that one works. And that's putting yourself, you know, you only need a 50% win rate from that point on to be able to qualify for day 2.
Yeah, I think it's a huge deal in this particular tournament too. You know, often we show you the standings at the end of round 2 or whatever, and you know, there's like approximately 8,000 2-0 players. Like, oh yes, they're doing it. These are the players to watch, trainers. But this time I think it really does matter, right? A 3-0 record means you can go 2-2 the rest of the way and still make it to the next day. That is great buffer. That is basically 5-0 at a regional championship, especially given the stakes here where it is all binary, right? It doesn't 9-0 doesn't exist in this tournament, right? 7-0 doesn't either, even though there's 7 rounds. You just need the 5th win and you're done. So I think these players are all in great position to move on, and these matches matter a ton. Each win matters so much when you only need 5, but also where 3 losses end your season.
A mere 50% win rate at Worlds. Easy. Just crank it out in a few rounds, you'll be absolutely fine. But being able to see a lot of trainers from around the world, right? I mean, I think there's been a little bit of discussion already on which region do we think is going to take it. And it looks here, North America putting up a pretty good showing, which I think we had a lot of events this year back in our home region, and maybe that is standing the players in good stead. But of course, day 2 completely throws that out the window. I think these results can be a little bit misleading. It is interesting to, of course, see who makes it through to day 2, but excited to get to day 2 where the best of the best just get dropped in the tournament. We open it up and say, okay, you guys skip day 1, you're in. The day 1 players have a lot more to answer for at that point.
Yeah, I think a way I might look at day 1 if you're a fan is that I think day 1 really shows off which region is the deepest, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where, the top players in each region, there's a kind of a similar number of players, kind of no matter where you're from. It's slightly different based on what region it is, but today is the day where the regions can try to get, sneak in a few more players, right? Kind of stack the deck a little bit for tomorrow. Don't do that in the tournament across the stage, but it's fun where hey, if you get another 15 North American players in, that really changes the odds of North America getting some representation in the top cut. I think it's actually another region that's probably going to be the one that gets the most players through day 1, and it normally is in Japan, where it just seems like, especially early in formats, the Japanese players have such clever solutions to team building and kind of just the way that they train certain Pokemon. It seems to catch everyone else off guard. Normally it's just like, you run into this sort of thing early in the season on when you're playing your ranked battles and roll your eyes, maybe take your Switch out of the dock and lob it across your living room, and then by the time tournaments roll around, you've solved it a little bit, but you don't get that time to kind of adjust to what other trainers are doing here. Instead, the players who have those really clever early format sort of teams might not be so early format this time, might just be an early World Championships instead.
Full disclosure, I do not condone the lobbing and or throwing of switches once removed from the docks. I highly recommend gently placing it down and or just logging off and leaving it in the dock and coming back another day to do some reps. So just bear that one in mind. But I think you're right. I don't think I can deny that I'm also on the Japan will do well train here. I think being obviously in their home region gives a little bit more, I would say pressure, but reason to do well, right? And I do agree with you, and we've seen it in many years. Being able to innovate early is something that Japan are very, very good at. They understand what is the basic team as we have known it in previous years, not an official term, but the big 6. What is going to be the option that a lot of trainers gravitate to, kind of that entry-level team that you try and play around to get a feel for the format, see what's on the ladder. But once they start to figure that out, they go, oh, okay, well, I can beat it with this, I can beat this variety with this, and all those changes start falling in line. So I feel like Japan is definitely getting to a point where seeing what they come up with puts us in great stead for them to be able to surprise players, maybe those players from the West who haven't got as many reps, be able to do that, and as you say, skew the numbers in their favor.
Yeah. I mean, I think, the whole Big 6 concept is always funny to me too, where I think the year that originated, maybe it was truer, but I feel like I hear some variant of the Big 6 every season now. If I start counting the Big 6 Pokemon, I've got to use all my fingers, take my shoes off, start using all my toes. I need to grow an extra limb, because there's like 20-ish Pokemon, maybe a little bit more in the Big 6 most years. It's like the Big 16 maybe, but...
It's a loose term. It's the Big 6 sort of pick from these buckets and have a good time, right?
It's like, you start playing, I see the same Pokemon, you start listing them, you hit the message limit, right? But yeah, I do think that, it's crucial to be able to use that group of Pokemon well, but also in a creative way, right? Where, again, we are seeing and kind of feel, between a dozen and 20 Pokemon that are a pretty high percentage of the total usage. Fluttermane sitting at its approximately 130% appearance on every team. So there's like half a Fluttermane hanging out somewhere, maybe. I think it'll be interesting to see how the players are able to use those what the extra slots in their team, maybe there aren't using those, and then who can use the most common Pokemon the best.
Well, we've been talking about teams quite a lot, and we want to see 2 new teams getting ready to show off what they can do here in round number 3. So we're going to head on down to the stage and get ready. We've introduced our players a little bit already, but I want to really start diving in on these teams and being able to understand exactly where they are, what they're going to be doing, and what we can look forward to here in round number 3.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot of fun here. I know we're talking a lot about the Big Six, and even if it's the Big 16, there's definitely going to be a few Pokemon in this matchup that I don't think would have been included on that grouping of Pokemon.
No, I definitely think there's a couple of fun, wonky, or creative choices. I'm going to keep adding to that list of adjectives as we go. It's going to really slow us down at the end of the round. But here are our players. It is going to be Barish versus Yuto. I'm really excited to see where they end up with both of these teams, because there are pieces of the puzzle that do not fit the big 6, 16, or 60 that we're talking, or maybe 60. Maybe they'll sneak in at 60. But I know that starting off with Barish, I know that his team comes from obviously some of the more creative team builders in Europe. That is going to be the Breloom, the Hisuian Arcanine, Qianpao Golden Go, a Basculegion, and a Roaring Moon. So already plenty of variety in there. And then heading over to Yuto's side, that's going to be the Urshifu, the Heatran, Rillaboom, Fluttermane, Glastrier, and Cresselia.
Yeah, I think Barish's team, I believe I heard it was one of the Genie Boyd specials, identified here by a bunch of Pokemon that I wouldn't say I wasn't expecting to see most of them. The Breloom definitely stands out as the shocking pick. I think whenever you see a Pokemon like that, you kind of have to look forward to the other side of the field and how many Pokemon that his opponent has that can help deal with the Spore from Breloom. There's that Grass-type Pokemon that'll be naturally immune. There is the single Pokemon with the Grass Terrestrialization and Heatran, but notably no safety goggles on the other side of the field. I think one of the things to point out with Barish there is that Basculegion. We haven't seen it yet on stream. There are quite a lot of them in the field today, and almost all of them are doing really well. I think that may be the standout MVP of this tournament, so keep an eye on it here. It is a fantastic Pokemon.
My favorite grass type, Heatran, something I've been excited to see so far this tournament. Obviously, we're both Heatran apologists, and I think being able to see that in full flow is going to be exciting here, but it definitely has a lot to work through, and I think Heatran here might just be forced into that Grass Terrestrialization, because it's not looking particularly friendly on the other side of things from Barish. But I think both these teams match up nicely. There is, of course, that Trick Room option for kind of closing out a game from Yuto, being able to say, okay, you know what? We've played the fast mode, we've gone through the Fluttermane and the Urshifu, now we're going to slow things down, we're going to flip the dimensions and be able to play around it. And I think if that gets set up, that could actually be quite a big problem for Barish, because it doesn't really have anything that operates in that slower mode, particularly when you're throwing around Choice Scarfs.
Yeah, looks like we're about to get right into the battle here, and we see a bunch of stylish Pokemon on one side of the field, and perhaps even more stylish Pokemon on the other side, where both the Breloom and the Roaring Moon, 2 Pokemon that I did not expect to see even once this weekend, appearing together, trying to show us that perhaps the metagame is not so simple as we believe.
Yeah, it's metagame on one side, anti-meta on the other, maybe throwing that one around a little bit early, but plenty to try and figure out in this opening turn. I think there is just an immediate pressure being applied by the Fluttermane, which is going to have to be something the Roaring Moon thinks very carefully about how he wants to navigate this turn, being able to try and get around that. The Breloom as well can provide an interesting amount of pressure, but of course if that Heatran goes Terra Grass, there could be problems immediately. So let's see how this anti-meta pairing decides to try and wiggle out of this one.
Yeah, I mean, anti-meta to an extent, right? The 2 Pokemon that look like don't want to face down a Fluttermane, the most common Pokemon by far in the format. There's got to be a solution to this as he's up to 2-0, so I'm kind of curious what the game plan is here.
Yeah, let's see what he's going for. The typing, a big change needed as that Roaring Moon becomes the flying type, so shedding some of the problem immediately with the use of Terrestrialization. Breloom with the Protect, that'll keep it safe for a turn, no problems there. Let's see what's coming out from the side of Yuto. It will be the Icy Wind from the side of the Fluttermane, so trying to catch both of these with super effective hits. The Roaring Moon takes it pretty well, will lose some of its speed as Roaring Moon makes up for that pretty promptly. 1 drop isn't going to be very much when you consider that a Tailwind is going in response. Heatran tries to wrap up the turn with a Heat Wave, so Breloom under a ton of pressure if it hasn't been able to protect. Roaring Moon takes it pretty well, coming down just below half, but able to stick around for a little bit more.
And I think it's important to keep in mind the items of these Pokemon on the field right now. Pokemon don't usually beat each other with their items, but that move, I think, on both sides kind of explained by the items the Pokemon are holding. Love seeing the Life Orb on Heatran. It seems like it can hold about 45 as well in this format, and then Breloom, as almost all Breloom, holding that Focus Sash item. So with the two spread moves on the other side, a knockout was being threatened on Breloom with double hit, but now a little bit scarier. As we've mentioned, the Heatran is the option of the grass terrestrialization to try to get around a Spore here, but Breloom is able to at least attempt to score one of these two targets.
Yeah, will be able to try and do something in this turn. There is not going to be any terrestrialization though, as it is the Fluttermane taking the Roaring Moon acrobatics and going to sleep right after. So while it was the most threatening Pokemon on the field for them to begin the game, it's now being locked out a little bit. There is of course going to be time for the Heatran to do something. In this turn it's Heat Wave that is going to be a knockout onto the Roaring Moon, and Breloom brought down to that all-important Focus Sash you were just telling us about.
Yeah, that's a big trade, but I think that's probably what Barish is expecting here. Not ideal to use lose your terrestrialization with only a single attack, but it did get that Tailwind up crucially. Breloom is still out here, potentially threatening a Spore, and now we'll see what Barish can do. Not the worst thing in the world sometimes to lose a Pokemon quickly after getting Tailwind up, because it allows you to get a little momentum, start getting things rolling here, and perhaps Shinpao and Breloom can work together to try to pick up a knockout.
One thing I did notice though is Barish went to select his third and fourth Pokemon potentially. Not very Heatran favoured with the Golden Go and the Chienpao, so does have to be careful that these Heat Waves aren't just being thrown around willy-nilly, being able to catch knockouts or at least huge damage.
Yeah, I think it's sort of a cool spot here, right, where there's some incentive now to go for the grass terrestrialization. So do you Spore it, expecting it will not terrestrialize, or do you try to use a super effective attack? Instead of the Heatran just protecting, neither call going to work on this one.
Yeah, trying to figure out what to do, maybe get a little bit of information as the Chienpao's Ice Spinner heads into the Heatran, so maybe that grass terrestrialization could be a little bit too much. It is of course going to be a cover of both sides of the Heatran, so if it terrestrializes, it gets caught by the Ice Spinner. If it doesn't, it gets caught by the Spore. Not able to land either of those thanks to a fantastic protect from the side of Muto, and Fluttermane just still asleep.
Yeah, it's really scary though, right? Where that was the first time it could have waken up already. We already saw it move or fail to move the previous turn because Breloom's just so quick under that Tailwind. So if it is able to wake up and get an attack off for free, things are pretty devastating now. I think in this turn, unlike the previous turn, Barish really needs to make the call right? You've got to pick one or the other. Are you going to Spore or are you going to Icicle Crash? You kind of have to hit it.
Well, it's Ice Spinner into the Fluttermane, not leaving that one alone anymore. Scared of that one waking up and picking up a potential double knockout with something that could cause a lot of problems like Dazzling Gleam. Breloom calls it right too. No terrestrialization on the side of the Heatran. Yuto holding on to that one, trying to save that for later, and Heatran will be heading to sleep for now.
Yeah, so excellent play by Barish there. I feel like if he gets that read wrong, he's kind of just out of game one. Excellent move by him. But we do see Heatran getting that turn of sleep there. It's relatively healthy still. So now we're kind of in a similar situation to what we were before. And we see that Cresselia coming out in the field, which is particularly critical in this situation. One of the things that's great about Cresselia now that we hadn't seen any past years is that Lunar Blessing move that it never had before. With it can potentially remove that Heatran's sleep status condition. However, unlike many of the Cresselia we've seen, this is holding Rocky Helmet rather than Safety Gaggle, so it could be put to sleep itself.
Well, there's the Sacred Sword. That is going right into the Heatran, but it doesn't get the knockout, and Heatran will respond in kind with a Heat Wave. Breloom getting knocked out, no more Tailwind, so Heatran moving before it and being able to, of course, cause those problems. But the Life Orb will come back to haunt Heatran as he trades itself for that Breloom. There is, of course, going to be the Cresselia not able to get anything done this turn.
Yeah, critical turn there with the Heatran waking up. That mattered a ton. The Icy Wind Mitts, they're probably not such a big deal. There is Spectrier, or not Spectrier, but Glastrier, not known for being the speediest horse in the stable. But man, wow, that Heatran wake up is such a big deal. Perhaps without that, you see a Spore getting on the Cresselia, and things just start looking very, very, very bad. Instead, now we still get a very interesting game. These two Pokemon, I'm Barish I could definitely pull this off, but the momentum probably a little bit on the other side of the field.
The the Glastrier, you caught me off guard there. Not the fastest one. Not going to be winning the Grand National, but if only there was a move, Scott, that could change things around and maybe cheat the system a little bit, give that Glastrier a little bit more that it could do. There is finally going to be Terrestrialization on the side of Yuto, being able to turn that into the water type. So Glastrier not sticking with its traditional type, being able to mix it up and try and keep itself a little bit safer from some of the options on that side, including this Sacred Sword, which is not going to do that much. Golden Go knows it's got a lot of work to do. It's going to have to put down a lot of pressure, so being able to get that nasty plot up is big. As there's the Icy Wind once again from Cresselia, so controlling speed, not in the way that maybe we were expecting, but seeing exactly what it can do, both the speeds going down, as it is just going to be a body press. Chien-Pao knocked out, and now everything on this Golden Go to try and win the game for Barish.
Yeah, kind of an interesting spot where this Cresselia's only attack is the Icy Wind, so it's never really going to do meaningful damage to this Golden Go, but the Glastrier is not going to have the same problem. We see the Chilling Neigh boosting it up, but this is not the world's greatest type matchup. Its only attacks are Body Press, which will do nothing to this Golden Go, and Icicle Crash, which is resisted. It can boost its own defense with Iron Defense, but that's not going to do anything either, so maybe Golden Go is a tight matchup to pull this one off.
Yeah, might be able to get it done. Golden Go's speed going down once again, and after that nasty plot, we'll be firing off the Shadow Ball. That is going into Cresselia, and that is getting a knockout. So if the Trick Room was coming through, something that he was basically preparing for, seeing how much he can take from the side of this Glastrier, I'd say it took a pretty while, a not very effective Icicle Crash, even after the Chilling Neighbors, putting down very little pressure on this Golden Go, and Golden Go still has the speed advantage. And I can imagine it's just going to start throwing Shadow Balls here and being able to tidy up this game. So Barish has been in a couple of sticky situations, but at the end of the game, doesn't matter. Game one's looking like it's his.
Yeah, we saw that Terrestrialization getting held to try to set up the endgame, but it's actually Barish that seems like he has the advantage at the end. But that was 56 damage from the last Icicle Crash, so at least 2 more are going to be required, and there's no way this Glastrier is going to get the chance to do that.
No, it's getting 1 Icicle Crash now. 50 left, would need another one. I don't think this is a super tough decision for Barish. Just needs to be able to press Shadow Ball one more time, and then of course get the knockout on this Glastrier. So really great game, honestly, back and forth throughout the whole of Game 1. I'm hoping we get a little bit more of that in Games 2 and 3.
Absolutely. It seemed like it could go either way the whole way through, but Barish pulling it off there in that first game, and I really like this game plan. Kind of like I mentioned when we were looking at that first turn, it looked an awkward-looking matchup, right? I mean, it kind of always is when you have so many Pokemon in your team that can potentially be knocked out easily, but the reason why he's 2-0 is because he's not just going to cough up those knockouts so easily. Played that one really well, even though he was giving up a lot. It was never too much, right? There was always that solution at the end of the game. I think he likely anticipated correctly what the final Pokemon his opponent had were going to be, and none of them could really do that much. Even with the Chilling Neigh boost, pretty whelming Icicle Crash onto the Golden Go, and that's something to think about if we go into a second and a third game here and we see that matchup again. Without that boost, that would have been a 4-hit knockout on the Golden Go, which is sad.
I really don't think Glastrier was the endgame win condition that maybe Yuto was expecting it to be. It usually would be, right? You set it up next to the Cresselia and you put it in a Trick Room and you're able to do really, really well with that one. But it just didn't feel like it had a great time. Not really being able to do much. It did get the knockout, of course, on that Chien-Pao. It was nice. Got the Chilling Neighbors. But at no point did he have an answer to the Golden Go. And the Golden Go was really, really big here. So while I think, looking across the board, it's okay. The Heatran was able to apply a lot of pressure to the Breloom, was able to apply a lot of pressure to Golden Go and Chien-Pao. Once that Heatran went down, it definitely felt like it was a really tough game. And yes, it did get that early wake up too. It was able to try and stay in the game, but even that wasn't enough.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing to point out, right? I think without that wake-up, we might not even be talking about Golden Go because it would have seemed like it didn't matter at all. I'm kind of wondering if perhaps he was expecting that Barish's last Pokemon instead was that Bascu Legion, which I think would have made a lot more sense. You've got the Water Terrestrialization, you have the ability to boost your own defense. Maybe that would have worked out a little bit better. So it'll be interesting to see in this game now, does Barish try to do the same thing, or does he mix it up a little bit, anticipating that his opponent will make some switch-ups? I think it should be interesting to see how this plays out. I think Barish has a lot of options. That Breloom is such a dangerous thing to show in the first game because it kind of requires specific solutions. So now that makes Team Preview that much harder. He's shown he can win with it, and having to adjust really hard for it can make these future games even more challenging.
It's a tough adaptation to make, though, if you're Yuto, because my gut says, let's see a little more Trick Room. Let's get that Trick Room going earlier. But, there's always that threat of the Spore that's going to be able to shut that down and cause those problems. But Game 2 is upon us, and maybe we are getting the Trick Room earlier, as it's Floodmane and Cresselia on the side of Yuto, And then a definite change up from Barish as well. Just going with the Chien Pao and the Roaring Moon paired off together. The booster energy going off there on the Roaring Moon after we've been able to see the booster energy on the Flutter Mane as well.
So something critical to keep in mind here, we've seen the Focus Sashes on Breloom. It's really the only item we normally see on Chien Pao. Trainers, you have to forgive me, I'm not super up to date on my Assault Vest Chien Pao calcs, so we'll have to see how much damage is coming in here. But it is a very interesting setup where you've got to imagine it's not really the sort of thing that anyone was planning on having to deal with.
I would also admit, pretty publicly, that I haven't run those numbers myself. I can tell you that it will do less than it normally would without the Assault Vest. So that's something that we can bank on, being able to see maybe there's some calculation, and you and Ray touched on at the beginning of the day, that can completely shock people and take them entirely off guard. But right off the bat, it's going to be Roaring Moon straight away with the flying type Terrestrialization. Has to pay that respect, I think, to the Flutter Mane. Doesn't want to get easily knocked out by it. And maybe, of course, power up its acrobatics. Cresselia getting involved with the Classic. That's going to be helping hand.
The calcs are changing again!
Yeah, but Chien Pao tries to stop that with the Sucker Punch. That's not going to be enough, even with the critical hit. And this Dazzling Gleam, I think it's not enough. That is definitely an interesting amount. We'll talk about that in a minute, as it does get caught in response with the acrobatics. Honestly, I'm impressed, Chien Pao.
I'm gonna be honest, I would have basically believed any amount of damage that it did, but I guess I thought it would be bigger than that. You know, I think maybe without the helping hand, that's closer to what I was expecting. I really thought that was going to be at least getting close to threatening a knockout, but hey, apparently defensive Chien Pao's not so bad.
Yeah, I mean, the bar was moving real quick, and it stopped pretty suddenly, and I thought, okay, all right, this Assault Vest is putting in work. But the Chien Pao Roaring Moon sitting on the field after taking a lot of damage. But one of the biggest threats to the two of them has been removed pretty quickly. Obviously, we've now got the Cresselia next to the Heatran. This could be where Yuto has to change things up. Because I think if you stay in this mode, you are just going to get caught with a lot of damage very, very quickly, and you need to potentially get out of that, get the Trick Room set up, and try and play the game that way.
Yeah, I mean, this is a dangerous spot to be in, too, right? I mean, the Cresselia can't really do any damage. It's one of those classic Icy Wind only for attack moves Cresselia, so you really don't want to get caught with that as your last Pokemon.
It's going to be a tough one, as Roaring Moon does throw the acrobatics over towards the Heatran, maybe seeing what kind of mix-up it's going with, potential Terrestrialization. Chien Pao covering that off with the Sacred Sword. So this is the second game in a row where Barish has tried to cover for a Grass Terrestrialization over on the Heatran, but in this case, he's been punished a little bit more, as it is a Trick Room set up by that Cresselia.
Yeah, we kind of talked about earlier, you know, we're seeing some classic Pokemon in the field. Barish handling this the way you often do against support Cresselia, just ignoring it. But a Trick Room could matter a lot here. Barish just selected a very quick group of Pokemon. You know, we kind of seen him hovering the Pokemon in the back. It includes that Choice Scarf Bascu Legion. So Trick Room is incredibly bad here, and an incredibly high value Protect on the other side, where Hadrian covered everything, and things are looking pretty sketchy.
In good news, you didn't tell in this game, so it could be worse. It could be worse. Let's see how it's going to turn out, though, as it is going to be the helping hand onto that Heatran. Sucker Punch, of course, to avoid some of the problems. And the Assault Vest not able to save the Chien Pao this time. That is going to go down. Roaring Moon, though, is holding on. Is going to be losing a little bit of HP, so even with the Life Orb, not enough. As Roaring Moon fires back with the acrobatics. That is going to be into the Heatran, but no Terrestrialization means it's not very effective, and it's got to be feeling pretty good about that one.
Yeah, I mean, this is a tough spot, right? Where you see Barish sending Golden go out against the Heatran. Not ideal. Not ideal. Yeah, I mean, I was hoping there'd be something positive I could add there, but no, this really just isn't ideal.
No, it's not. That is not going to be able to Terrestrialize and get away with it. Even if it did Terrestrialize, it was going to be still a Steel type. So this could be another turn, honestly, where it's just going to be Cresselia helps out Heatran, and he fires off a Heat Wave. Of course, doesn't need to hit both of those, and should be able to start tidying up. Then it's going to be the Bascu Legion, just facing down against Cresselia, Heatran, and potentially whatever's in the back.
Yeah. I mean, it's nothing else here. Heat Wave can miss. There's no way to increase the accuracy here, so perhaps Barish is going to have to go for it, hope that Heatran isn't able to incinerate that poor Golden go.
Well, it's not going for it this turn, as it does fire off the Protect, so maybe trying to see what's in the back, trying to get that little bit of information by knocking out the Roaring Moon with an extra move. He's not going to get that information this turn, though, as it is going to be a Protect over on the side of the Roaring Moon. The Shadow Ball goes into the protecting Heatran, so that is, of course, the concern, as it's a Trick Room again from Yuto, being able to return those dimensions to normal.
So that's a pretty cool play there, right? Perhaps assuming that the speeds between the two Steel-type Pokemon might not be to his advantage. Perhaps a hint toward how these Pokemon are trained, since we haven't seen them attack one another yet. And now all of a sudden it's looking like that Roaring Moon needs to pump out some damage.
Yeah, the Roaring Moon is being invited to take the game and really try and control it at this point. But the Heatran is pretty low. There's definitely options. I know that it wasn't a huge acrobatics, but it was a good chunk.
Yeah, it could put it in Life Orb recoil range, right? I think enough it forces out, right? If you go the acrobatics and a switch, if you're Barish, I think you would have gotten Heatran. So instead, we see sort of an unconventional adjustment by Yuto here.
Well, there is the change up on the speeds entirely. We got the Trick Room in the last turn, then it was, of course, reversed. So now the Tailwind just comfortably puts Barish as, I will be moving first. That's exactly what he wanted to do with that Golden Go, being able to tidy it up. The speeds are going to be slowed down. No, it's not, because it's Roaring Moon getting knocked out, and then, of course, Golden Go just being able to chill out a little bit, just not too worried, see what it can do.
Yeah, this Trick Room shuffling's a little bit unconventional, let's say. You know, the two Pokemon out who want Trick Room to be up, facing down the Golden Go, and this very speedy Basculegion, who is just ecstatic not to be out under Trick Room against these Pokemon.
Do we think Basculegion is fast enough at this point? I think that's...
I think it's so quick it may actually be moving first in both the Pokemon Go stage and the Pokemon TCG stage, as well as this one.
Yeah, this is going to be a rapid Basculegion, as you may have seen in the selection. It is, of course, carrying that Choice Scarf, and should be able to start causing a lot of problems for the side of Yuto. Let's see if he's able to really close this one up, or if Yuto has something to maybe try and sneak back into this set. I mean, I liked the Trick Room. He gave it up for obvious reasons, but Barish capitalized so well, being able to say either way, my Golden Go's going first.
Yeah. The plus thing side for Yuto is these Pokemon are so sturdy that it's not like it's actually that easy for Barish just to clean this up. You know, as much as like perhaps the speed control has been a little bit fumbled here, the game is still complicated, and you know, one misstep is still going to cost Barish the game.
Well, there's the Terastallization from Yuto, holding it pretty late on, and it is going over to that Cresselia, so being able to really show what defensive Terastallization is, using it on one of the most defensive Pokemon on his team. It is the Steel type, as Basculegion fires off with the last respects, does bring it down to about half, and this Make It Rain, not enough to threaten the Cresselia, but it does get an easy knockout on that Glastrier. The special attack will fall, but I really don't think Golden Go minds at this point. You've got two Pokemon just ready to try and cause as many problems as possible. And while that Tailwind's up, well, we're able to get a Trick Room up, but now a lot of pressure on this low health Heatran to try and win this game.
Yeah, I have a good idea who's going to move first here, and it's not the Basculegion, but man, that was so much damage. If the Cresselia had not Terastallized, it would have been knocked out. I just can't handle. This Pokemon looks ridiculous with the Steel Terastallization hat on. I love it. So now Barish is kind of a cool spot, right? I think you're kind of assuming, based on the way that you don't play this speed control, that if Trick Room were to expire, Golden Go would probably be slower than Heatran. If Tailwind were to expire, the odds of getting their load require a double protect, but I'm not so certain that there's really an option to knock out even this frail Basculegion one hit, just a bunch of moves that it resists, that the Heatran's available. We see the helping hand. Is Heatran able to pick up some knockouts here?
Let's see what Heatran can do after it's got all of the assistance from the side of this Cresselia, this Steel-type Cresselia as well. That is going to be a Flash Cannon, not going into protect of the Golden Go. Basculegion not even bought below half, so the Heatran getting a little bit of recoil from that Life Orb, as there's the last respects, an easy tidy up on the Cresselia, and honestly, I think the Basculegion feels like at some point it's going to be able to deal with this Heatran, or Heatran's going to deal with itself if this Life Orb keeps on adding up.
Yeah, it's an awkward situation here where I can't imagine any way that, you know, the Heatran's going to pick this up, because we need, like, I think even a double crit Heat Wave wouldn't have been enough. We see the forfeit locked in there, and you have this exciting team with Breloom and Basculegion, and Roaring Moon is able to pick up the win and show us that, hey, you know, there's a whole bunch of different ways you can win games here at this year's World Championships.
That was a really insightful game. Being able to see the depth of the team that Barish has brought, I really enjoyed both modes. I enjoyed how the speed control was played around. I think Yuto put on a really good show as well, but Barish, who I got a little tip off before the game, his recent run on streams has not been so good, being able to break that curse at one of the most vital points of your season. That is going to be the World Championships, and congratulations to him showing why this team was getting talked about. I heard more than whispers about it before this weekend.
Yeah, I thought it was a ton of fun to watch too. Where yeah, as much as like you can kind of see in the way his opponent played the match too that like he was not prepared for that matchup. The icy wind trick room shuffling there was just like I felt like a little bit off. Where it's one of those matches afterward where I think you'd all think about that a little bit and kind of realizing, all right, well, if I face something like that again, I know how I can adjust it and maybe play that a little bit more steadily. Where he was working against himself a little bit, but that's what teams like that do, right? That's some of the advantage of not just bringing the 6 Pokemon at the top of the usage chart, where you might get all of the stats in the world if you're doing it that way, but sometimes instead of winning through stats, you can win through strategy, right? I think especially that first game, Barish is like a very risky looking strategy where I just felt like there were so many terms.
Our summer starts now.